he concocted a world-saving superweapon that was quite the showstopper. However, his fantastic reward involved losing an arm, courtesy of the very hero he'd helped. Bill, a simple blacksmith, just yearned for a tranquil existence, a mere nobody in the background. But when the so-called champion turned tyrannical, wiping out everyone Bill cherished, he recognized that remaining in the shadows was no longer a viable strategy. He might not possess innate fighting skills or any mystical enchantments. Nevertheless, he's about to craft a formidable contraption that could obliterate entire battalions. The finest artisan alive is marching to war, and the realm is utterly unprepared for his wrathful retribution. Let's rewind to the Genesis, observing how a humble smith morphed into a world-ending terror. We're commencing with a genuine marvel, the hero's sword. Its divine radiance could temporarily blind you, and the audience is absolutely losing its collective mind. Sepia, the group's spiky-haired powerhouse, is utterly flabbergasted. She gazes at the blade as if it's a divine bestowal, proclaiming its distinctiveness from ordinary weaponry. She dives into the technical marvels, explaining it's forged from arch alchem, rendering it virtually indestructible yet as light as a feather, with every impact hitting like a freight train. Sepia is now fully embracing the hype, boasting that each blow lands with tenfold the force, acting as a human billboard for this legendary artifact. But there's a rather unpleasant twist. The sword carries a curse. Any wound inflicted by it is unhealable, ensuring a grim fate in combat. Sepia grins slyly, preparing to unveil the brilliant mind behind this formidable implement, clearly beaming with pride, while the man in question looks like he were to melt into the floor. Behold our protagonist, Bill Bark. Amidst the adulation, he stands awkwardly, perhaps wishing for global harmony or whether he remembered to turn off the forge. Bill stutters his way through, downplaying his abilities with mumbled pronouncements. Dude, you just created a gut-tier weapon. Perhaps a dash of self-assurance wouldn't hurt. The protagonist is captivated, leaning in with an expression that screams recognition of true talent, complimenting Bill's skill, noting even the royal smith's struggle with arch alchem. The hero, looking ever so regal with his new saber, humbly inquires if it's truly appropriate for him to wield such a potent artifact, a potential bonding moment brewing. Bill dismisses it with a chuckle, a sheepish grin on his face. He posits that a weapon's efficacy hinges on the wielder, otherwise, it's merely ornate scrap. The hero places a weighty hand on Bill's shoulder, locking eyes with profound sincerity, demonstrating immense respect for Bill's craftsmanship, the coolness surely transferring to our hero. In that very instant, the hero makes a grand declaration, promising to elevate Bill to the esteemed status of the continent's premier blacksmith. No small feat, by any means. Bill is utterly dumbfounded, his gaze fixed upwards, absorbing the magnitude of the promise. It's a pivotal, life-altering juncture typical of many protagonists' journeys. The hero radiates an undeniable protagonist aura, rendering Bill a mere shadow in comparison. The narrative explicitly states the hero shone, making Bill appear like a prop. Bill can only offer a humble bow and a trembling expression of gratitude. Standing beside a legend, the sheer height disparity makes him feel like a supporting character in his own unfolding narrative. Profound introspection begins. Bill views himself as a provincial smith from a remote village, while the hero and Sepia are clearly destined for greatness. He observes them from a distance, accepting his role as an unassuming background player, content as long as his subtle contributions aid his companion's perilous endeavors. Later, Bill intercepts Sepia privately, calling out to her, his demeanor exuding a nervous energy that often precedes a confession or a significant misfortune. Bill, visibly flushed, extracts an item from his pocket, claiming he coincidentally fashioned it while working on the sword, a statement we all suspect is a fabrication. He presents a stunning ringwork from Ord Chakum, his hand quivering with apprehension. He attempts a nonchalant demeanor, asserting it would suit her perfectly, yet his nervousness is palpable. He starts blabbering, attempting a hasty retreat and claiming it holds no special significance. Sepia, meanwhile, just stares with a vacant expression, observing his verbal flailing. We get a close-up of his internal turmoil, a mental screamfest where Bill battles his own mind, desperately seeking the bravery to articulate his true desires, but the dread of rejection looms large. He finally manages to get the words out, confessing he'd be delighted if she accepted this piece of jewelry. He proffers it like a sacred artifact, earnestly hoping she'll embrace his affections along with the trinket. Sepia gently places her hand atop his, yet she doesn't immediately snatch the ring. The atmosphere is so thick with anticipation, you could carve it with a butter knife. She flashes him a sweet, melancholic grin, explaining that if the ring means so much, he ought to bestow it upon her only after they've vanquished the demonic overlord. Oh dear, that return alive pledge, it's practically a death sentence. Bill's spirits plummet. He's not oblivious. He grasps the sentiment in her gaze and understands his current standing all too well. With a forced, pained grin and a bead of sweat, he consents to her proposition. He's just been politely ushered into the friend zone, a particularly unpleasant sting. Bill grips the ring with newfound clarity, the full impact hitting him with the force of a runaway freight train. He fully comprehends Sepia's underlying meaning behind the delay. The narrative confirms our suspicions, revealing Sepia's true affections lie with the valiant hero. Bill, regrettably, is now an unfortunate bystander in his own legendary adventuring party. He gazes at the hero's retreating figure, acknowledging a long-held suspicion he'd harbored. He feared that if he didn't make his move now, the chance for even a polite refusal might vanish forever. He observes their departure from a considerable distance, deceiving them as journeying to a realm forever beyond his reach, a world of valor and menace that has no space for him. Bill's face is obscured by shadow as he silently wishes Sepia joy with the hero. While noble, this act is profoundly heart-wrenching. The screen goes dark with a poignant message, be happy. It's a somber conclusion to his innocent affection, leaving a palpable sense of his solitude. Jumping ahead to the present, Uncle Phil is thoroughly intoxicated. He's downing liquor with wild abandon, cackling like a lunatic, clearly attempting to numb some significant emotional distress. Uncle Phil launches into a tirade, lamenting that despite Bill being the youngest meister and a world saver, their inability to cover taxes is a bitter pill. He's justifiably irked that the blacksmith shop faces foreclosure. Another apprentice tries to placate him, but Phil is on a verbal rampage. He rails against the injustice of their plight, while poor Bill just tolls in the background, looking utterly spent. Uncle Phil gets unexpectedly clocked on the head by a flying hammer, a blunt testament to the fact that someone has had enough of his drunken grievances. Phil points accusatorily, continuing to blame the Empire for siphoning all funds to major conglomerates, leaving humble village smiths like them to languish. He's not entirely mistaken. The kingdom's economy appears to be in dire straits. Bill attempts to mediate, gently suggesting to his uncle that perhaps the authorities have their reasons. He remains his characteristically humble self, always seeking the silver lining, even in a bleak sky. Bill keeps at his smithing, sweat pouring down but a smile on his face. He tells his uncle that the sheer pride of having aided the hero in saving the world is ample reward. Bless his oval and benevolent heart. Uncle Phil remains unconvinced. He dismisses the hero as a mere lord protector and scoffs at the title, clearly miffed that Bill's savior hasn't offered any succor to his old friend's financial woes. Phil's demeanor softens, revealing genuine remorse. He apologizes to Bill, feeling he may have hindered the young man's potential by steering him towards the family business rather than the esteemed imperial court. Bill stands resolutely, hammer in hand, assuring his uncle that this path was his own choosing. He's determined to find a way to secure the necessary funds, demonstrating a backbone beneath his gentle exterior. As evening descends, the forge fire must be extinguished due to a strict curfew. The Lord Protector has enacted robust public safety measures, and being out after dark carries severe consequences. The following day, Bill embarks on a journey into town, his tools in tow. The city appears serene at first glance, yet an undercurrent of unease permeates the atmosphere. Absent before, Bill engages in on-site repair work to supplement their income, holding out hope they can settle their overdue taxes by month's end. However, this focus is shattered by distant shouts concerning merchants' rights. He stumbles upon a colossal demonstration. The street is thronged with people brandishing placards and vociferously demanding the Empire uphold their fundamental rights. It's a volatile situation teetering on the brink. Bill inquires of a passerby about the commotion, appearing utterly bewildered. The individual explains that the Empire is now exclusively patronizing large guilds, effectively driving smaller enterprises into bankruptcy. The bystander expresses concern, remarking that the entire nation is on tenterhooks, and even the Empire seems adrift, unsure how to quell the growing dissent. Bill absorbs this information, his expression growing grim. We observe lines of uniformed soldiers standing vigilant, their lances poised. They're closely monitoring the protesters, and it's evident that events are about to take a severe turn. Bill's inner thoughts grow grim, branding the demonstrators as dolts, convinced that yelling in public thoroughfares achieves nothing significant for the nation's progress. He observes the fervent mob with a touch of sympathy, pondering the fate of their kin once apprehended by the Empire's dreaded enforcers. Bill turns away, dismissing the spectacle as utterly foolish, deciding it's none of his concern and he simply wishes to do his work, avoiding any conflict. However, as he departs, the chant for a promise echoes through the streets, prompting him to glance back one final time. The burden of societal turmoil finally weighing on him. Bill halts abruptly, his gaze widening in astonishment upon spotting a most unexpected individual amidst the throng. It's Uncle Phil, the seasoned craftsman, right in the thick of things, vociferously advocating for traders' rights, leaving Bill utterly aghast that his relative is risking his neck. Bill's perception darkens as sheer terror washes over him, enveloped in a surreal, purplish fog of shock. His thoughts a frantic whirl as he stares at his uncle, bewildered by his presence. The camera sweeps across the crowd, underscoring the precarious situation Phil finds himself in, while Bill, frozen in place, grasps that his desire to remain uninvolved has evaporated. Abruptly, the bareheaded, battle-scarred soldier clad in formidable armor advances, bellowing for order. This is the commander of the Lord Protector's Guard, and he appears decidedly unamused. The commander raises a gauntleted hand, his visage twisted with fury, proclaiming the imposition of martial law and instructing his troops to present their spears, signaling a dire predicament. A formidable array of spears pieces the sky, the polished surfaces catching the sunlight and transforming the thoroughfare into a menacing forest of sharpened steel. The directive is issued to advance their spears, and the soldiers aim their weaponry at the defenseless gathering, bypassing any warning and proceeding directly to lethal intent. The soldiers charge into the protesters with a deafening clamor of boots, and the crowd erupts in panicked shrieks as the grim reality of the situation dawns upon them. The assault is swift and savage, with individuals impaled on spears and blood spattering nearby walls amidst cries of agony, revealing the Empire's intent as a massacre, not an arrest. Bill finds himself swept up in the chaotic surge, peering utterly disoriented, with everything a dizzying swirl of movement and gore, struggling to comprehend the unfolding slaughter. He witnesses a man impaled directly before him, a spearhead protruding from his torso, and Bill's eyes, wide with the horror of near death, register the extreme peril. Bill's countenance is streaked with gore as he stares at the ghastly scene, peering on the verge of collapse, the ordinary man who craved tranquility now confronting the brutal truth of the Lord Protector's reign. Amidst the pandemonium, he spots Uncle Phil, the elder gentleman injured and clutching a woman, urging Bill to flee, his face awash with blood. Without a second thought, Bill surges forward, seizing Phil's tunic and yanking him from harm's way. Having discovered an escape route and determined to extract his uncle from this abattoir, they bolt into a side passage, Bill in the lead, his weighty toolkit in tow, imploring Phil to keep pace, desperately seeking refuge before the soldiers give chase. From behind, the commander's voice thunders, forbidding any escape and treating them like quarry. Bill and Phil hurtle through a constricted pathway, soldiers relentlessly pursuing them, the palpable terror intensifying as Bill glances back at the advancing armored wall. A soldier lunges with a spear, the cold steel narrowly missing them. The clear command being to eliminate any who resist, as no quarter will be given today. The demonstrator trailing behind isn't so fortunate, receiving a sword thrust through his back, his final, pain gasp the only sound he makes. Bill, panting heavily, his face slick with exertion and dirt, pushes his limits, his grip still firm on his tool case as he searches for an exit. They plunge into a dim, narrow passage, the breathing ragged, the dead end appearing as if by convention. Suddenly, Bill's eyes emit an unusual blue luminescence, recalling his father's tutelage in the forge and a unique understanding he once acquired. Bill's perception undergoes a profound transformation, the surroundings shifting into a blue wireframe schematic, revealing the fundamental construction of all he observes. He now perceives the buildings and the alleyway with an entirely novel perspective, as if viewing the skeletal frameworks, discerning every vulnerability and structural imperfection. These wireframes ascend the edifices, exposing the skeletal supports and internal frameworks that uphold the metropolis, a veritable advantage for a skilled artisan. Billy Boy understands his magical eagle eyes are strictly a solo feature, and this odd visual glitch is basically the divine intervention required to stop them from becoming chunky salsa. Glancing from the pavement to the dunes, his noggin executes a gazillion math problems faster than a calculator on steroids, proving he is a genius engineer masquerading as a simple metal banger. Our hero gets a look as stiff as yesterday's bread when he finds a golden ticket, transforming from a cowardly jogger into a tactical mastermind of urban landscaping. Focusing on an overhead timber beam like a hawk on a field mouse, he observes a neon target indicating exactly where one solid tap will turn the scenery into a floor-based puzzle. Reaching deep into his kit, he grabs his favorite pounding stick which usually treats Ian kindly, though today it will be serving as a portable wrecking ball for structural carnage. With a swing that would make a baseball player weep, he clovers the magic spot, turning the solid lumber into a million tiny wooden snacks for the ants below. That wallop sends jitters through the foundations, birthing a perfect ring of damage that signals he has successfully started an unscheduled urban renewal project while being chased. Overhead, the angry uniforms are busy yelling mean stuff about traitors while stomping into the alleyway, blissfully unaware that the floor is about to quit its day job. Tossing a frigid glance behind him, he mutters for everyone to freeze, not aiming at the protesters but at the armored jerks who are currently scheduled for a rocky surprise party. Planked up warriors sprint down the passage like rowdy metal trash cans, convinced they have trapped their snack, totally missing the invisible timer ticking down their imminent downfall. Initiating the ultimate 3 count, he monitors the spiderweb pattern growing in the ceiling while the bat is run right into the target zone like moths to a bug zapper. Those shouty men continue hollering about fiscal responsibility regarding crimes, never noticing that the neighborhood is literally about to come down on their shiny metal helmets. At number 2, the lumber screams in agony as that big circular gap grows, and the balcony decides it no longer wishes to hover in midair anymore. As Sordus descends like festive glitter, the snapping beams signal the final act for the armored dude standing directly where gravity is about to do its worst work. The load-bearing bits turn to confetti with a sound loud enough to wake the dead, sending shrapnel and dirt flying everywhere as the architecture embraces the sidework. Zero arrives as our hand-wielder hits the final tick, witnessing the huge wooden carcass slam into the dirt right on top of the overly eager hunting party. Total structural failure ensues as the corridor gets force-fed a mountain of wreckage, burying the screeching troopers under a new hill of garbage that keeps more traffic from passing. The lucky non-pancake survivors stare at the fresh mountain of masonry with blank looks, processing the sudden loss of both their marks and half their bowling team. Flipping through the footy grime, Bill drags his relative through the chaos, comforted by the distant orchestral sounds of armored men groaning about their poor life choices. The scene shifts to a tiny shack hiding in the shadows of the forest beyond the walls, marking a successful escape from the bloodbath albeit a heavy mental toll. Indoors, our boy is basically vibrating with panic while grabbing his cranium and muttering colorful words, finally having a mental meltdown over the weird digital eyesight and scary stuff. His orbs retain an eerie azure shimmer while he gazes blankly at the woodwork, paralyzed by the fear of his new identity and the horrors he witnessed today. Dropping against the vertical support like a sack of damp flour, he looks shattered, isolated in his own mind while the other understudies hover helplessly nearby. Looking worn out like a dirty rag, Phil stares with exhausted eyes through the grime of battle, gently suggesting that his nephew spilled the beans on how this all happened. Bill raises his head with a bewildered look, having zero words to describe the architectural heads-up display or the fact he used a tool to demolish city property. Turning aside with a sigh as deep as a well, he confesses that nobody has a clue about the specifics, though the imperial temper tantrum feels unusually spicy lately. The elder begins a lecture about the grim truth of how government deers crush regular folks into dust, while Bill stands there looking like a battery on 0%. Not feeling the vibes of an uprising today, Bill clearly states that he wishes to continue existing, demanding that his relative stop doing political street theater forever. Zoom reveals his trembling digits pressing into the deck, vibrating enough to stir coffee, signaling that his anxiety levels have successfully breached the safety barrier. Looking downward through a mask of gore and fatigue, Phil asks what becomes of the nation if people quit caring, remaining a hopeful optimist despite being near death. Bill theatrically collapsed, imploring his uncle to simply allow the Lord Protector to manage national affairs, utterly convinced Phil's starry-eyed vision would just lead to the pass. His folks, conscripted as war mechanics, never came back home, and now he'd even lost touch with Sibir, so he simply couldn't endure another farewell. Bill swore he was absolutely toiling relentlessly, purely to keep the forge from going under, even if it meant skipping the demonstrations, truly hoping for a route that avoided a pointy object through his sternum. They launched a truly devastating emotional bombshell, demanding whether national allegiance truly trumped familial bonds, essentially implying that Phil's grandstanding heroism looked suspiciously like utter self-absorption to those who actually loved him. Bill became an absolute mess, great rivers of tears carving paths down his cheeks, as he whimpered what on earth he'd do should Phil also vanish, a truly heart-rending plea that obviously struck Uncle Phil right in the emotional solar plexus. Phil tenderly rested a hand upon Bill's head, finally truly grasping the sheer emotional havoc his fervent activism had wreaked upon the young lad, delivering a soft, understated apology that conveyed absolutely every unspoken sentiment. Phil enveloped Bill in a comforting embrace, vowing he'd personally ensure Bill would never again carry such a heavy burden of concern, thereby witnessing the movement abruptly forfeit its most fervent firebrand, all for the tranquility of a beloved nephew. Phil pivoted towards his fellow laborers, declaring his immediate resignation from the entire political spectacle, having unequivocally selected kin over the crusade, a decision from which he adamantly refused to retreat. This declaration sparked an immediate chain reaction, with the remaining gentlemen swiftly choosing to abandon ship as well, for none of them truly harbored a death wish, merely a desire for improved circumstances, and the imminent peril had finally become undeniably palpable. A fleeting glimpse appears of the cerulean heavens, avian creatures soaring gracefully above, suggesting tranquility has at long last graced the forge, though as every seasoned storyteller knows, such serene moments typically precede utter chaos. The sun ascended above the forge, illuminating everyone still slumbering profoundly on the workshop floor. seemingly signaling a brand new chapter for the entire ensemble, an opportunity to simply resume their respectable careers as metalworkers. Bill stirred awake with an audible moan, luxuriating in a full-body stretch on his improvised storm mattress, peering as if he just experienced the most blissful slumber imaginable. Now that the entire oppressive burden of the protest had magically lifted, the Earl's sunlight streamed in, vibrant and full of promise, as Bill gazed thoughtfully at the rafters, quite likely already meticulously charting his forthcoming day of laborious creation within the forge. Uncle Phil then roused himself beside him, extending yet another heartfelt apology for the immense mental anguish he'd inflicted, genuinely appearing rather delighted to finally be completely absolved of all political entanglements. Bill mused silently, a smug satisfaction blooming within. Pleased he'd successfully cajoled his uncle away from the brink, absolutely resolved to guarantee Phil would never again be forced into such strenuous labor. He stretched out again, a contented smirk playing on his lips, fully believing everything would finally return to normal. The notion so deliciously ironic it practically wrote its own punchline. Bill briefly shuttered his eyes, luxuriating in the newfound tranquility, utterly persuaded that the terrifying ordeal had concluded, blissfully unaware that the cosmos, apparently, had a far more dramatic script prepared. Abruptly, the precious silence was violently obliterated when a hulking boot unceremoniously punted the main entrance inward with a deafening crash, signaling that the unwelcome military guests had, indeed, located their hideout. Imperial troops burst into the forge, their polished cuirasses catching the Earl morning glare like malevolent mirrors, advancing with grim determination, making it abundantly obvious they weren't exactly dropping by for tea and biscuits. Bill found himself instantly impaled against the solid wall, a cold spear point pressing ominously against his windpipe, as the commanding officer roared that every single soul within the forge was being apprehended for high treason against the crown, announcing the impending double cross with booming theatricality. The troops commenced systematically ransacking the premises, meticulously combing through every dusty nook and cranny of the forge, leaving Bill utterly baffled as to how on earth they'd discovered this secluded spot in the first place, given its remarkable isolation. Bill suddenly comprehended a crucial anomaly, a blaring tactical misstep, for if the authorities genuinely knew of their whereabouts, the nighttime or pre-dawn assault, catching everyone slumbering, would have been the obvious move, making this midday raid suspiciously impeccable. He surveyed the ensuing pandemonium, his thoughts spiraling at warp speed, keenly aware that this desolate region was practically devoid of inhabitants, thus eliminating any possibility they simply happened upon this location by sheer, random luck. The lens dramatically focused on Bill's widening iris just as the stunning insight slammed into his consciousness, for he had unequivocally identified the treacherous rodent lurking amidst their unsuspecting ranks. One of the young apprentices, a fellow named Tom, stood restrained by the armed guards, frantically yelling that this outcome was absolutely not what had been promised, clearly realizing his previous shady agreement with the soldiers was now being conveniently tossed out. Tom, in sheer desperation, shrieked that Uncle Phil had never once participated in any rebellious demonstrations, clearly attempting to salvage his own hide, but simultaneously appearing to grasp that the shrewd imperial game he'd played had just decisively played him. Bill's expression contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated treachery, utterly unable to even articulate a single coherent thought, the searing impact of being so utterly double-crossed by one of his own kind proving far too profound to process. Tom's features became a public exhibition of profound culpability as he shamefacedly averted his gaze, absolutely incapable of locking eyes with Bill, perfectly aware he managed to spectacularly botch things. We observe Bill's hands bound rigorously with coarse cordage, as he softly exhales a solitary, agonizing question, why, desperately attempting to mentally parse the monumental act of ultimate treachery that had just unfolded. Bill ultimately lost all composure, unleashing a furious torrent of screams at Tom, demanding to know the exact reasoning behind such a heinous sellout, utterly shattered, with his anguished outcry radiating unadulterated, primal suffering. Tom, blubbering like a leaky faucet, whines that they promised not to nab Bill if he spilled the beans. He thought he was being a clever pal, safeguarding his buddy, but clearly, the whole empire thing is lost on him. Off to the side, Bill slumped, looking like he just lost his last biscuit. He probably saw this whole kerfuffle brewing the instant the door met the boot. Tom then attempts to weave his tangled tale, a sad excuse of logic where the forge was doomed anyway, and he was over Phil's boozy activism. He genuinely believed ratting Phil out for a payout was the only path to save the little business. He's really digging himself a grave, chirping about how, with that reward cash, they could keep the forge humming and start a new once that deadbeat uncle was out of the picture. This chap is, without a doubt, a slippery character. Still in tears, Tom tries to spin his double cross as a victim's plight, acting as if he's the one who was ruined when, in reality, he's the one who ordered the hit. Bill, trussed up in the gloom, sports a look of utter dejection. Tom's pathetic apology is now worth less than a bent nail in this situation. Suddenly, a grand fanfare of trumpets shatters the mood, yanking us from a grimy workshop into a realm of immense authority. Bill finds himself at the foot of an enormous, crimson carpet leading into what can only be described as an impossibly vast throne room, making him feel as insignificant as a dust mote, and he's sporting the appropriate level of abject terror. The thunderous voice booms out a greeting, hailing him as his old comrade, Sir Bill Bark, proclaiming it's been ages. Behold, none other than the magnificent Oliver Prime. Oliver, perched regally on a gilded throne, embodies the very essence of the Empire's Lord Protector. He tells Bill to chill, attempting to smooth over their shared history as if they're still equals. He encourages Bill to make himself at home, but Bill's visibly sweating, managing a quavering response while looking like he's bracing for a swift and unpleasant demise. Oliver casually drops a mention about hearing whispers of Bill dabbling in the citizen movement, a statement delivered with a condescending gaze from his lofty seat that's truly unnerving. Bill, in a flurry of panic gestures, vehemently denies any involvement, claiming he's merely an admirer of the hero. Oliver chuckles, dismissively referring to hero as an antiquated term. His fellows certainly evolved since their adventuring escapades. Oliver leans back, noting with a hint of amusement that Bill is likely the sole individual who still refers to him as hero, a comment carrying a subtle undertone, acknowledging his current unpopularity across the land. Oliver beams, assuring Bill he was only jesting, and confirms that his hands are clean, thanks to the testimony of a certain citizen named Tom, who vouched for Bill's innocence. A wave of sheer relief washes over Bill, nearly buckling his knees as he mutters a fervent thank you, briefly pondering if Tom has, for once, actually done something commendable. Oliver escalates his magnanimity, mentioning he'd heard about the forge's financial woes and had personally settled the overdue taxes. He bids Bill to cast aside his anxieties, acting every bit the benevolent savior. Bill is utterly floored by Oliver's extraordinary generosity, seeing him as a beacon of goodness. Oliver, with a casual flick of his hand, dismisses it as the least he could do for the chap who saved humankind with his masterful creations. In the background, a few soldiers are audibly murmuring, utterly perplexed about the identity of this unknown individual and why their esteemed Lord Protector is showering him with such kindness. The stern-faced captain swivels towards them, an expression that suggests he's about to impart some truly earth-shattering revelations to these green recruits. He elaborates that there exist 3 supreme masters of the craft globally, illustrating with the image of a spooky, one-eyed demon realm entity. Following that, we're introduced to Volcanus the duplicator from the Aveline Kingdom, and finally, the Voltron Empire's very own meters, the Golden Hand. The captain then dramatically unveils the astonishing truth. Bill Bark is none other than the legendary Golden Hand meters, the very artisan who forged the blade that vanquished the Demon King. Our guy is a bona fide, working legend. The junior soldiers gape in astonishment, though one attempts to downplay the significance by mentioning the kingdom boasts 20 meisters, to which the captain dismissively retorts that those are mere participation ribbons awarded by the Empire. Shifting focus back to Bill, who maintains his characteristic humility, preferring obscurity. The captain observes that this very modesty is why Bill's true identity remains a mystery to most. Mustering his resolve, Bill tentatively requests permission to pose one final question to the esteemed hero, displaying that familiar, concerned expression of a friend from days gone by. Oliver, with a beaming smile, grants Bill full liberty to inquire, perfectly embodying the role of the gracious sovereign thus far. Bill, once again beaded with desperation, hesitates, struggling to articulate his thoughts, evidently burdened by concerns extending far beyond the fate of his forge. He finally voices his query about Sepia, admitting he's lost all contact with her, prompting Oliver's hand on the throne to subtle a tighten, a clear indication that this is a rather sensitive subject. Oliver calmly informs him that Sepia is presently engaged on a mission and will be dispatched back to the forge once her assignment is concluded, delivering it with an almost dismissive, "Don't you worry your head about it" air. Bill's utterly chuffed, showering the hero with praise for the assist, but Oliver just shrugs it off, claiming there's absolutely no need for thanks between them. Bill's got one final, trembling ask, eyeing his own hands nervously as he braces for the potentially earth-shattering response. He meekly inquires if Uncle Phil might be allowed to tag along back home, banking on the long-standing camaraderie to smooth things over for the man who practically raised him. Oliver's face instantly turns into a frostbitten tundra, and with a chilling stare, he asks Bill if perhaps it's already too late for any sort of intervention. Plummeting, the rooms move faster than a lead balloon. Bill freezes in pure terror, his voice cracking as he pleads for clarification on Oliver's ominous pronouncement. His deepest fears about his uncle's activism was now a terrifying reality. Then, out of nowhere, Oliver erupts into uproarious laughter, leaning back with such gustowits as if he's just delivered the punchline to the universe's funnest gag torque about a twisted sense of humor. Bill, however, remains utterly unamused, a shiver of sheer shock coursing through him, his eyes wide as he attempts to process this joke. This hero's regal brand of wit is less amusing and more akin to psychological warfare. Oliver dabs a tear from his eye, confessing he thought a bit of levity might ease the tension, but seeing Bill's bewildered expression, he concedes it was a rather unfortunate attempt at humor. "Gee, you think?" Shifting gears to full seriousness, Oliver explains that while Bill might be in the clear, Uncle Phil's situation is far more complex. He states that safeguarding an entire nation prevents him from doling out favors like party favors. He instructs Bill to head on back for the day, promising to investigate the possibilities. A classic political deflection, but Bill, with no other recourse, has to grudgingly accept. Bill departs the grand establishment, still clinging to the belief that Oliver is a beacon of hope for his considerable efforts, so desperate for a savior that he's willfully blind to all the blaring warning signs. The screen beams the phrase, "a shining light," delivered with such unsubtle earnestness that it practically guarantees impending doom. A close-up reveals Oliver's face as Bill departs, sporting a smirk that oozes more sinister intent than any heroic facade. This chap is definitely hiding a rather significant secret. Bill's back at the forge, enthusiastically banging away, insisting that the weight wasn't too taxing, trying to maintain a semblance of optimism while his beloved uncle remains behind bars. He casually mentions Tom's sudden vanishing act, leaving naught but a contrite note and some cash, to which one can only respond with a resounding good riddance, as nobody wants a treacherous sort lurking about. Bill keeps himself occupied, diligently crafting new implements for Sepia and procuring a rather nice bottle of wine for Phil's eventual triumphant return, sustenance by hope and sheer hard graft. He toils through the twilight hours, the rhythmic clang of his hammer the sole companion in the otherwise silent workshop, resolutely ensuring everything is shipshape for his family's homecoming. As days tick by, Bill's demeanor grows increasingly charged, each second meticulously counted, his gaze alight with a desperate, almost feverish, anticipation. A firm rap echoes at the portal, followed by an official pronouncement from the imperial household requesting Bill's presence. This must be it, the moment he's been yearning for. Bill's heart leaps into his throat, convinced his beloved family is about to be reunited with him, his face radiating an almost blinding pure delight. He joyfully bellows an affirmative, coming, and bolts towards the entryway, moving with an urgency unseen for days, his sheer elation practically radiating off him. He vividly envisions the duration of his agonizing wait, practically soaring down the corridor, eager to embrace the cherished faces of his loved ones. Within his mind's eye, a joyful tableau unfolds, Sepia and Uncle Phil sharing a tender moment, the very future he's poured his heart and soul into, the one for which he's made immense sacrifices. He's already rehearsed his welcoming speech, planning a feast of home-cooked delights and that special bottle of wine for Phil, his sheer happiness almost too poignant to witness. He yanks the door ajar with a resounding boom, allowing a torrent of daylight to flood the space, poised to unleash a triumphant cry of welcome. "Welcome home," he exclaims, his face alight with an unparalleled, unadulterated joy that's truly heartwarming to behold. But then, His gaze falls upon a startling sight. Seebeer is seated upon a substantial wooden chest just outside the threshold, utterly motionless, her eyes fixed blankly forward. A ghastly close-up reveals Seebeer's visage. Her eyes are vacant pools, and a trickle of blood mars her lips, a macabre tableau of death propped up like a grim, unsettling memento. Bill's eyes drift to the wooden crate Seebeer is perched upon, the horrifying realization dawning that it's a coffin, and a chilling question forms, is Uncle Phil entombed within? The impact of this dawning horror is like a physical blow. This devastating day marked the turning point, the text conveying a simple yet gut-wrenching truth about how everything irrevocably shifted. Poor Bill's world just imploded. We see his dark outline with tear streaks and a smile twisted into a frightful grimace, proving the immense strain finally shattered our shining beacon, and life as we knew it is over. Bill's in a state of pure disbelief, watching Seebeer perched atop Uncle Phil's coffin, acting as if they've just bumped into each other after a lengthy holiday. Then, Seebeer's body abruptly topples off the coffin with a sickening thud, a grim and undeniable confirmation that she has indeed departed this mortal coil. Standing in the crushing silence of the forge, Bill's eyes well up, utterly flabbergasted by the sheer depravity required to deliver her remains in such a callous manner. He drifts through the scene like a phantom, questioning if this whole ordeal is merely a dreadful dream, his mind lost in a blank, white expanse that mirrors his total detachment from reality. We zoom in on a hand revealing the coffin's lid. The weighty creak amplifies the summer mood as he braces himself to face the last of his kin. Bill's sanity unravels. His face is a cascade of tears and encroaching shadows as he converses with Uncle Phil's deceased form, lamenting the fine spirits he'd intended for their upcoming celebration. Gazing into the coffin at Phil's unseeing eyes, the deep shadows render the tableau even more macabre, a stark and painful image of the man who raised him lying inert. Bill erupts into a paroxysm of hysterical laughter, but it's the sound of a mind completely fractured, signaling he's officially past his breaking point. The uproarious laughter morphs into a guttural, world-shattering howl of despair. His voice roars as he bellows wide at the heavens, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated anguish. He's frantically clutching his head, pleading with them to awaken his sweat and tears mingle and fly. Ororth, agonizing mental collapse unfolding before our eyes. Kneeling beside the coffin, Bill is an absolute wreck, the narrative depicting his agony as if his very flesh were being ripped asunder. This is beyond mere sorrow, it's soul-shattering trauma. A close-up of his mouth captures his desperate screams until his voice fails, the artwork darkening and becoming more abrasive to reflect the crushing weight of his despair. We're transported back to Oliver Prime's deceitful face, who had assured Seebeer she was on a crucial mission and would be sent directly to the forge, fully aware of the grim fate he'd already orchestrated. Back in the present, Bill's eyes blaze with a terrifying fervor, his profound grief now igniting into incandescent rage as he fixes his gaze upon the distant palace. Another flashback shows Oliver smugly enthroned, feigning benevolence while plotting to dismantle Bill's entire existence. A masterful manipulation indeed. The flashback tightens on Oliver's countenance, revealing the icy calculation of a true despot. The stark monochrome treatment amplifies his sinister aura. Bill kneels within the vast emptiness, his voice a torrent of screams hurled at the sky as his world goes up in flames, his fury finally finding a target, pretending dire consequences for all within the palace walls. Shadows cloak his face, but his eyes gleam with an unnerving white intensity. His rage has found its focus, and that's decidedly bad news for anyone residing in the palace. Returning to the palace flashback, Oliver presents Bill with a golden token, maintaining the pretense of the long-standing camaraderie. Oliver elaborates, calling it a guest token signifying Bill's esteemed status, subtle alluring Bill into compliance while presumably already sealing the doom of his companions. He offers a gold trinket, casually suggesting Bill could even trade it for currency if strapped for cash, the ultimate bait of hush money cunningly disguised as a friendly gesture. Oliver's smooth, entirely genuine-sounding proclamation about the token should have been a glaring alarm bell, but Bill, with his excessive humility, claims he'd never dream of parting with it. Bill proudly clutches the token, a hopeful smile gracing his lips, vowing to reciprocate the kindness Oliver has bestowed upon him, and the overwhelming irony is almost unbearable to witness now. We leap forward to a stormy evening at the castle, with Bill positioned outside the gates, prepared to fulfill his pledge to Oliver, though the repayment will hardly be a gift. In the driving rain, Bill presents the golden token to a guard, who instantly recognizes the Lord Protector's personal insignia and his demeanor undergoes a drastic shift. Bill stands composed, yet radiating quiet determination, this heavy tool case at his side, informing the guard he's arrived to tend to the Lord Protector's blade. The guard instructs him to wait while he relays the information to his superiors. Bill politely acknowledges, expertly playing the role of the unassuming, unsuspecting artisan. Bill's grip on his tool case handle is so intense his knuckles turn stark white, his internal struggle to suppress the urge to unleash his hammer evident. A glimpse of Bill in training, or perhaps engaged in a friendly spar with a hero, reveals his dawning realization of the vast chasm in skill separating a mere craftsman from a seasoned warrior. Bill charges with a practiced blade, howling like a banshee, yet he resembles a bumbling novice next to Oliver, who handles the weapon like a natural-born virtuoso. Oliver sidesteps that clumsy poke with the ease of a cat, proving that Bill facing him in a duel has exactly as much hope as a chocolate teapot in a furnace. Our poor Blacksmith has zero chance of victory, as the sheer canyon between their abilities looks like a vertical cliff that even a caffeinated goat couldn't scale. With Bill face planting into the dirt, the giant zero hovering over him like a neon sign perfectly captures the sad reality that he is completely out of his league. The hero sneers at the pathetic rat, and since Bill is moving at the speed of a sloth, he probably failed to notice the sharp slice he just received. Bill admits he's just a lowly metal basha, not a soldier, because he prefers crafting legendary tools rather than waving them around in a chaotic deathmatch. Beyond the massive gap in their agility, the hero wields a cursedly powerful artifact, leaving Bill scrambling to invent a clever trick to close the distance. That blade is the legendary masterpiece Bill forged himself to topple the Demon King, so irony real hits hard when you are playing to duel your own invention. Trapped in a flashback at his forge, Bill realizes that solving this lethal puzzle is actually quite straightforward if you simply think like a hardened craftsman. Peering at his reflection in a slab of steel with crazed intensity, he hatches a devious scheme that only a man obsessed with gears and sparks could devise. Raising his mallet high, he realizes that feigning a routine maintenance call is a genius disguise. Since nobody suspects the humble repairman of playing a targeted assassination, the close shock shows his hammer hitting hot iron, because nothing looks more innocent than his fifth adjusting gear, allowing him to infiltrate the inner sanctum undetected. Oliver stands in his throne room, back turned to the light, utterly oblivious to the fact that his favorite toolsmith has arrived to turn his world upside down. Bill firmly grips the hero's blade, marveling at his own handiwork while mentally preparing to shove it into the arrogant monster who requested the commission. Watching the king from behind, Bill relishes how his clever trap exploits the hero's inflated ego, turning the man's own vanity into a sharp, pointed downfall. Hidden in the gloom with his trusty tools, Bill weighs his dark options carefully, aiming to deliver one final, permanent adjustment to the king's royal spinal column. Bill bellows an insult at the monarch's spine, and when Oliver finally turns around, he hears a stinging bite of true, unadulterated loathing for the very first time. Looking baffled, Oliver asks why Bill is so upset, trying to brush off the lethal tension as if his guest is just grumbling about the weather or low wages. The hero gazes toward the horizon, spewing fake philosophical nonsense about how one hero cannot save everyone, desperately trying to justify his reign of absolute terror, digging his fingers into the sword hilt until they turn ghostly white. Bill isn't buying this pretentious load of cutswallop for even a single fleeting heartbeat. Oliver admits he saved the realm, then poses a silly hypothetical question about whether the Demon King might have stayed home if they were just stronger. He spins a narrative about iron-fisted rule preventing future conflict, which is essentially the same tired script every power-tripping dictator recites to his subjects. Standing like a pebble beneath the shadow of the throne, Bill listens to the hero lecture him on why becoming a murderous tyrant was the only logical path. Looking down from his high perch, Oliver treats Bill like a toddler needing a math lesson, which is frankly a rude way to talk to your future executioner. He claims they needed supreme power to silence all opposition, clearly signaling that the hero has traded his morality for a shiny, gold-plated ego trip. Clenching his fist, Oliver suggests the war was everyone else's fault for being too weak, effectively blaming the victims for not being as terrifying as himself. As we survey the city from the clouds, Oliver asks if Bill finally gets his grand vision for a world cured of its flaws through ruthless dominance. With his head hung low in complete disgust, Bill finally acknowledges that his former hero is long dead, leaving only a delusional god complex in his place. Oliver declares himself the rightful ruler of all, embracing his new role as a dictator with a kind of smug satisfaction that usually ends in a revolution. He claims that purging the useless nobles led to a golden age, failing to see that his control is simply a gilded cage built on top of a pile of bodies. With a grand gesture, as though cradling the entire planet, he quizzes Bill, hoping for a sudden epiphany and assuming Bill owes him a standing ovation for this imposed tranquility. Oliver, practically preening, inquires why Bill was even summoned, radiating an air of supreme self-satisfaction, like he's the undisputed star of this whole saga. Bill, thoroughly over the chit-chat, makes a mad dash, channeling every last drop of his remaining vigor into a wild swing of the hero's sword. A stark close-up captures Bill's enraged visage as he attacks, his gaze a scorching inferno of pure loathing, silently urging Oliver to meet his maker without further ado. Oliver remains unfazed, nonchalantly raising a hand with a fingertip ablaze with emerald light, dismissing Bill's effort as a mere pestilent annoyance, much like flicking away above some insect. With a flick of his wrist, a magical emerald arrow rockets forth, striking Bill squarely in the shoulder, its incandescent energy impaling him instantly and halting his aggressive advance cold. Bill clenches his jaw against the searing agony, a cascade of perspiration tracing paths down his face, yet he tenaciously clings to the weapon despite the brutal blow. A guttural shriek of torment erupts from Bill as the sword is wrenched from his grasp, the crimson spray painting the floor, the crack powerfully encapsulating the roar moment. Bill buckles to his knees, his wounded shoulder a crimson mess, the magical luminescence now a dying ember, just as a phalanx of heavily armed guards storms in, weapons at the ready. Oliver stands composed, this personal security detail fussing over his well-being, as if the attempted assassination were merely a trivial, tiresome inconvenience. The guards converge on Bill, barking charges of treason for the assassination attempt on Oliver Prime, while Bill remains on his knees, gasping and bleeding profusely from his wounded limb. Oliver casts a frigid glance downward from his vantage point. Bill, thoroughly demoralized, asks when Oliver caught onto his intent to attack. Utterly vanquished, Oliver dismissively waves a hand, declaring Bill's question misplaced, reverting instantly to his persona of the haughty, unsaleable champion. He elaborates that the actual query should be why he procrastinated in dispatching Bill, having detected his murderous intent from the outset, implying he was merely toying with him. Speechless, Bill stares up at the man he once considered a comrade, sweat beating on his chin, the chasm in their power utterly insurmountable. Oliver gazes down, his eyes a pair of chilling golden orbs, explaining that Bill's continued existence was a calculated choice, a strategic asset, not an act of kindness. Oliver leans in, his features dramatically shadowed, revealing himself as the archetypal villain, proclaiming his desire for Bill to join his ranks and extending an offering hand. The close-up focuses on Oliver's outstretched palm, presenting a stark ultimatum, join me or perish, as he patiently awaits Bill's capitulation. Still grounded and surrounded by the watchful guards, Bill gazes up at Oliver, his expression a complex tapestry of dread, astonishment, and unyielding defiance. Bill feigns disbelief, questioning Oliver's sincerity after the recent violent confrontation, while subtly trying to stall and requesting a moment to pose one final question. Oliver chuckles at the audacity of the counter-proposal, finding it rather amusing, and agrees to address Bill's subsequent inquiry with utmost sincerity before the decision is made. Bill's face is obscured by shadow as he prepares to articulate his most critical inquiry, his countenance reflecting that of a man who has absolutely nothing left to lose. With burning intensity in his gaze, he implores Oliver to reveal the truth behind Sepier's tragic fate, driven by a desperate need to understand what befell the woman he cherished. Oliver strokes his chin thoughtfully, acknowledging Sepier's considerable prowess, even noting her remarkable feat of single-handedly repelling over 200,000 demons. A vivid flashback depicts Sepier valiantly fighting, her head tragically severed by a colossal demon amidst a crimson deluge. Yet, astonishingly, the narrative states he remained undeterred. Now the scene unfolds, portraying the hero's fellowship united after vanquishing the demonic sovereign, a fleeting peace achieved at an immeasurable cost. The flashback shows sunlight piecing the clouds, a seemingly blissful resolution, yet the ensuing narrative portends an era far from joyous. The newfound peace proved ephemeral, as humanity, once the shared adversary was defeated, immediately turned inward, plunging into an even more brutal conflict where people were mercilessly trampled. The youthful Oliver surveys the widespread pandemonium with a somber expression, declaring the dire necessity of deploying even injured heroes to the front lines simply to ensure their collective survival. The present day reveals Sepir in solitary confinement within a darkened room, confined to a wheelchair, being the sole hero conspicuously absent from the escalating war. Bill loiters near her wheelchair feeling like a forgotten relic, so Oliver quizzes him on the sting of abandonment while his peers were busy saving the day. A spilled golden goblet stains the floor with dark wine, signaling that Sepir finally surrendered her sanity to the suffocating chill of loneliness. Desperation pushed her toward forbidden secrets, and we see her shadow looming over a sinister, pulsing circle of glowing dark magic. Sepir drifts back to the fray as a mere shell of herself, shrouded in eerie violet smog and shuffling along with the grace of a restless duel. Returning to reality, Oliver notes the grisly side effects of that dark craft, proving Sepir traded her soul just to feel useful for a few more minutes. Oliver fixes a steely gaze on Bill, declaring the history lesson finished, and demands an immediate answer to his earlier ultimatum. Bill wears the expression of a man who just learned his puppy was a tax collector, looking shattered by the grim reality of Sepir's spiral. Ignoring the bargain, Bill demands to know why Oliver left his friend to rot alone, sobbing with the kind of misery that makes onions look cheerful. He shrieks that Sepir was a loyal comrade, his voice wavering like a cheap radio while he questions why Oliver committed such a tragic decline. Bill bellows at the sky in sheer torture, clutching his chest as if his heart decided to stage a dramatic protest against reality. He rants about her lost leg on the front lines, calling out the king for living in luxury while his soldier wallowed in deep, lonely agony. With an accusatory finger, he claims Oliver held all the cards but refused to fold them in her favor, his rage finally boiling over the top. A sepia-tone memory flickers on screen, showing the pair in happy times, serving as a cruel punchline to the misery happening right now. Bill collapses before the guards while Oliver perches on his throne, looking about as moved as a decorated gargoyle watching a parade. Oliver tosses out a chilly inquiry, essentially asking if Sepir's entire sacrifice and subsequent decay really matter in the grand scheme of things. He leans in to ask if Bill honestly believes he is his brother's keeper, shedding any lingering pretense of loyalty to his former teammates. Clasping a hand of his chest, Oliver mucks the concept of accountability, proving that he has fully graduated to the rank of premier narcissist. He jabs a finger at Bill, demanding why he stayed home during the war, effectively twisting the narrative to label the craftsman a cowardly hermit. Oliver ridicules Bill for hiding in his shop, scoffing at the safe life that he graciously permitted his former pal to enjoy. The king lunges forward and roars at Bill, daring him to lecture anyone on morality, finally dropping his mask to show the troll beneath. A tight zoom on Oliver's eye reveals a murderous gleam, and he spits out the word coward like he's trying to remove a bad tooth, looming over Bill like a dark thunderstorm. Oliver belittles him as a small, pathetic man who runs from the heavy burdens of leadership. We see Bill slump back as he absorbs the verbal assault, barely clinging to consciousness while he bleeds out on the cold floor. Oliver saunters away with his back turned, chuckling like a cartoon villain while he repeatedly tosses the word coward into the air. Deep shadow masks Bill's face, save for eyes burning with a haunting white light, as he mutters about responsibility while his mental tether snaps. In one swift, carrying motion, his arm is hacked clean off his body before the king even bothers to glance back. Bill howls in absolute, unfiltered agony as his limb describes a gruesome arc through the air, plunging him into a dark abyss of shock. Standing over the victim with his blade drawn, Oliver asks why he should bother with a broken tool, discarding Bill like a rusty screwdriver. As Bill cradles his stump, Oliver offers to spare his miserable life as a final, backhanded gesture of his supposed royal generosity. The severed hand rests in a puddle of gore, and Oliver dismisses him to a hollow future, calling this pathetic survival a mercy. Bill howls into the darkness, his face a horrifying mess of tears, blood, and sheer madness. The supposed hero systematically tore away everything he held dear, leaving nothing behind but ruin. The scene pulls back, revealing Bill kneeling in a vast white void while Oliver casually walks away into the distance. Bill's anguished cries echo into the empty space as the chapter ends on a note of absolute, gut-wrenching despair. Finally, some peace and quiet, or perhaps not. We find ourselves staring at a remote cabin in the middle of nowhere, just as someone calls out to see if anyone is actually home. A pale hind lightly knocks on the door, but the ensuing silence is deafening. The voice ponders whether they traveled all this way only to find a ghost town. Wait a minute, I recognize that face. It's the dark-haired girl from the hero's party, and she's peering suspiciously through the gaps in the doorframe. The door creaks open, revealing Bill, looking like he hasn't seen sunlight in weeks. He recognizes her immediately, and honestly, he looks about as thrilled as someone finding a spider in the coffee. Meet Sarah, the former master thief of the hero's group. She appears far too relaxed for someone whose leader just became a dictator, assessing Bill as if he were simply a new book. The two of them walk down to the nearby river for a talk, which quickly becomes very serious. Sarah proceeds to recap the absolute catastrophe Bill endured at the royal palace. Sarah attempts a joke about the country's development under Oliver, only to immediately retract it when she sees Bill's expression. Read the room, Sarah, read the room. She sighs dramatically, suggesting her trip was a complete waste of time because Bill resembles a mere shadow of his former self. She's remarkably blunt about his current state. Sarah points out the obvious issue, Bill's bandaged stump. She flatly tells him that with only one arm, he's basically finished as a blacksmith, but Bill vehemently disagrees, muttering he can still work. The fire in his eyes is starting to reignite. She tries to tempt him, asking for a new dagger or some minor repairs, but Bill instantly shuts her down. He refuses to forge gear for anyone associated with the hero's faction ever again. Sarah then deploys her trump card, relaxing on the grass while dangling some compelling bait. She claims she can give him the true, unfiltered story of what happened to Sepir, that gets his undivided attention. Bill breaks out in a sweat, his resolve crumbling because he desperately needs the truth. He stutters out that he'll do it just this once, and Sarah gives him an eye smirk. Sarah springs up, thrilled that she got her way. She asks for his price on the dagger, clearly ready to pay whatever it takes for the coveted golden hand quality. Bill looks directly into her eyes, adopting a serious expression. His payment consists of the cost of materials and the full, unedited account of Seebeer's past. Because he's finished believing Oliver's lies, the deal is struck and sealed in the shade of the trees. This marks the beginning of a truly perilous alliance, but the thick with dangerous secrets. Sarah begins narrating as we see Bill back at the forge. She calls out Oliver for being a manipulative snake who twisted the story of Seebeer's injury to cast himself as the tragic protagonist. Bill pours everything into his work, sweat pouring down his temples as the hammer strikes the metal. He always suspected Oliver was hiding something, but the reality is usually far nastier than people imagine. Sarah posed a chilling question, wondering if Bill honestly believes a person as blindingly fast as Seebeer could actually fail to dodge the Demon King. She's about to dismantle everything Bill thought he understood. We cut to a flashback of the Demon King, a literal mountain of dark power. Seebeer was the second quickest person Sarah knew, so getting caught like that simply defies logic. Sarah explains that the Demon King's real threat wasn't his speed, but his roar, planet-cracking force. There was no way Seebeer should have lost both legs in a single strike unless she allowed it. We see a ring fall onto the dusty ground. It's a small detail, but it signifies the exact moment when the true tragedy began. The truth is revealed. Seebeer made the choice not to evade the attack. She's shown sitting on the ground, looking absolutely exhausted and shattered. She threw herself directly into the line of fire to shield the hero. Oliver was completely exposed, and Seebeer paid the price in blood just to ensure his survival. Seebeer appears haunted, her eyes vacant as she struggles to process the loss of her limbs. Sarah reveals that the reason she eventually returned to the front lines was far darker than mere obligation. A new flashback shows Oliver kneeling before Seebeer in her wheelchair. He turns on the charm, telling her he needs her help to secure his victory and become the Lord Protector. Oliver acts increasingly desperate, claiming the tides have turned against him and only she can reverse their fortunes. He's weaponizing her loyalty to the party. Seebeer looks completely crushed, asking him what he expects her to accomplish missing a leg. She's ready to retire, but Oliver hasn't finished exploiting her. She clutches the blanket tightly over her missing limb, her hand trembling slightly. It's an incredibly vulnerable moment that Oliver is completely prepared to exploit. Oliver reassures her about the injury with a suspiciously chilled demeanor, pinning he's conjured a clever scheme. You just know it's some grim, otherworldly realm, and he pitches a deal. She'll not only work again, but come back stronger than ever. Talk about a shady bargain. Seebeer, understandably freaked out, rightly calls it sorcery, the dark art no one should mess with, but Oliver's expression is morphing, gazing directly at him, her voice steady. She rejects the notion. Her ethical compass still spins true, but Oliver's about to throw a monumental fit. The close-up shows Oliver's jaw clenching, revealing the hero facade cracking as his anger flares because his little puppet refuses to dance. Oliver loses it, lunging forward with a yell, completely dismissing her genuine fears about actual dark magic as mere trivial annoyances. He launches into a guilt trap, questioning the partnership and how she could possibly deny him after all he's done, making her the villain for valuing her soul. He's practically bellowing in her face, claiming he cared for them and their connection, a masterclass in emotional blackmail. Towering over her wheelchair, Oliver bellows that he considered her more than just a teammate, laying on the saccharine manipulation so thick it's truly sickening. Seebeer is floored, her eyes wide with betrayal, stammering, completely shattered by the hero she trusted transforming into a monstrous figure. Abruptly, Oliver stops, clutches his face, and pretends to be mortified by his outburst, questioning his own sanity. What a rapid emotional roller coaster. He turns his back, telling her to just act like this whole debacle never occurred, a classic move designed to make her feel terrible for upsetting him. Seebeer watches him depart, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. He totally knew how to play that card to get his way. Oliver's boot halts. He's patiently awaiting the consequence, and sure enough, he gets it. Wait a minute, Seebeer calls out, and you can practically hear the gears of a trap clicking shut, unable to bear being the cause of their rift. Oliver slightly turns his head, flashing that unnervingly wide grin, and agrees to help, though we all know that's about as true as a $3 bill. Sarah, observing this whole charade from the shadows, sees Seebeer concede to Oliver's demands, and the look on Sarah's face screams this is it. No turning back. A flashback unfolds. Young Seebeer is startled by a metallic clatter as something rings out. It's the ring Bill crafted, bouncing on the ground, a poignant symbol of the youthful pledge dissolving. The ring skids across the floor, and a boot in the frame signals the moment Bill grasped that something was terribly amiss. Young Bill stares at the ring, his face ashen with bewilderment, utterly baffled as to why the item he painstakingly created isn't functioning. He asks Seebeer to let him see her hand, determined to mend whatever bizarre issue has arisen. Still trying to play the valiant rescuer, he takes her hand and attempts to slip the ring on, assuring her it's hers and that it won't be lost if she wears it. It's so endearingly naive, yet utterly heartbreaking. He gently pushes the ring onto her finger, anticipating a perfect, snug fit as it should be. But then it simply slips off, gliding right past her digit as if she's no longer made of solid material. The clatter as it hits the ground is the echo of his shattered spirit. Bill stands dumbfounded, gazing at the ring on the floor, muttering about the strangeness of it all, his mind struggling to comprehend supernatural malfunction. He's breaking into a sweat now, his face contorted with worry, unable to fathom why it doesn't fit when he was so precise with his measurements. He insists he fashioned it to be a perfect fit for her, practically begging the universe to bend to his will, yet the ring remains mockingly still in the dirt. He tries once more, his hands trembling as he attempts to jam the ring onto her finger, completely lost in denial at this point. The ring passes through her hand yet again, as if her very being is already beginning to detach from reality due to the dark magic Oliver inflicted upon her. Bill hits the deck and goggles at the shiny band while Seebeer stands guard, noting how the gap between the souls is widening faster than a pothole in winter. His hand wobbles toward the jewelry as his eyeballs leak like broken faucets, begging the universe for a reason, since no amount of metal bashing can fix this crumbling romance. Zoom in on a grimy knuckle sandwich parked on the soil, where Bill feels like he is wearing lead boots in a swimming pool, watching his legacy and promises dissolve into muddy sprinkles. The guy releases a sound like a dying accordion, finally grasping that his fancy smithing degrees are basically expensive toilet paper if his favorite person gets snatched away. Sorrow transforms into a chilly bucket of rage, causing him to grind his molars into powder while his trembling hand prepares for a very violent handshake. He's a soggy bundle of fury, barking a quick noise as he realizes that Oliver really did him dirty, which hurts more than a massive toast-up. Our hero wallops the planet with a haymaker, shouting some spicy words, sending a cloud of dirt everywhere. Yet the world refuses to give him a refund. Plump like an old sack of potatoes, he queers the atmosphere about his life choices, involving Uncle Phil and Seabeer, feeling heavier than a backpack full of bricks. A highlight reel of his worst blunders plays back, firing that intern, letting the girl work, and handing Oliver a pointy stick, proving he is the king of bad decisions. The narrative wonders if picking up that big mallet was a mistake, as he ponders if his career in the smithy was just a long way to fail miserably. Bill is essentially a heap of scrap metal, wheezing for oxygen, feeling like every blade he ever sharpened is currently trying to give him a very uncomfortable neck massage. He looks tiny and pathetic in the bloom, while the story notes his lack of control is grabbing him by the collar, making it hard to swallow his pride. Out of nowhere, a shiny palm pats his noggin, offering a bit of weirdly sweet affection right when he was about to give up on everything including lunch. It is either a hallucination or a ghost of Sebia, radiating like a nightlight and grinning as if she could magically delete his heavy emotional baggage. Bill stares upward with dinner-plate eyes, muttering Seabeer's name, wondering if he has finally lost his marbles or if this is a farewell gift he desperately required. Bill peeps at the luminous figure through wet lashes, terrified to trust his own senses, worried the cosmos is just pulling another mean prank on him. Resting on his joints, he asks if she is truly attempting to cheer him up, while his inner vibes finally start to toast up like a cozy fireplace. The waterworks intensify as he complains about his lack of chivalry, drowning in guilt, though the shiny lady seems content to just hang out for a bit. Bill gazes at his hardware with a fresh perspective, keeping his sadness but cooking it into a focused plan that does not involve sitting around moping anymore. He snatches a chunky mallet off the workbench, holding it tight, signaling that this tool is no longer for chores but for kicking some serious butt. Bill lifts the iron high, letting it sparkle like a disco ball, bowing to Sepia that his crying session is over and his punching session has begun. The metal hits the block with a noise loud enough to wake the dead, showering the room in glitter while Bill pours his anger into the rhythm. He swings with scary energy, flinging perspiration around while pushing through the ache, chanting his intention like he is trying to summon a very loud god. One more smash, even beefier than the previous one, as he cooks up some vengeance with every clink, turning the workshop into a spicy sauna. The furnace goes boom once he wraps up the job, and he screams his commitment so loud that you would bet your last dollar he is serious. Returning to the now, Sarah checks if her pointy toy will be ready in a fortnight, indicating that the business deal is legally binding and ready to roll. Sarah strolls over the knoll, leaving Bill to chat with the warder, as a quiet time expires and the machinery of conflict starts grinding its rusty cogs. Sarah pauses to cast a gloomy glance, confessing she failed to prevent Oliver from exploiting Seabeer, proving she also has a heavy heart and bad memories. She owns up to her share of the mess, clarifying that she is seeking more than just a kitchen knife. She wants to fix the cosmic scoreboard. Sarah gives him a parting stare and offers her digits for any future emergencies, basically inviting him to join her club for taking down the main guy. With a flippant wave, she vanished, pledging to assist him precisely one time only. It was a classic I'm helping, but don't get used to a thief departure. Yet Bill recognized he'd just secured his inaugural partner in crime. The forge erupted in a spectacular shower of sparks, bright enough to blind a lesser man. Bill was clearly constructing something far beyond a simple sword. The sheer energy crackling from the creation was absolutely terrifying. The scene concludes with Bill silhouetted by the inferno of the forge, hoisting a complex, multi-jointed metal arm. He's determined to ensure revenge is served precisely, turning his boyish determination into a fearsome golden gauntlet of war. Back in the wildlands, an elite squad of students tore through the terrain on an important assignment. The absolute silence of the wilderness was punctuated solely by the rhythmic thudding of their boots on the rocks below. The scarred commander leading the pack shouted to his star pupil Hans, requesting an immediate update on the mission objectives. Hans didn't even break stride in his sprint as he responded. Hans reported that local villagers were complaining about strange, loud explosions in the surrounding territory. The task was straightforward, locate the source of the big booms before anyone accidentally got flattened. The team fanned out to sweep the terrain. Hans theorized it was either highly illegal weapons development or criminals preparing a major score. Regardless, he concluded, this was not great for property values in the area. The commander issued a stern warning, reminding them that they were still in training. The primary focus remained on reconnaissance and information gathering, not charging headfirst into every skirmish they encountered. Like that ever works with teenagers. The squad chorused yes, sir in perfect synchronization, instantly increasing their pace. They were highly professional, incredibly efficient, and absolutely itching for a confrontation. When they reached the explosion site, the scene was one of total devastation, featuring shattered trees and numerous craters. This was definitely not caused by a small firecracker. Whoever made this mess was carrying serious firepower. Lynn, the team's only girl, knelt to examine and sniff a scorched tree trunk. She reported no scent of gunpowder, concluding that they were probably dealing with high-level magical attacks rather than conventional explosives. Fallum, identifiable by his spiky hair, observed that the swordist hadn't even dispersed from the blast yet. This meant the perpetrator was still nearby, and the team was quickly closing in on their quarry. The teammate suggested that perhaps the culprit used teleportation spells or a very quick steed to flee the scene, voicing genuine concern about the attacker's ability to evade capture. Pence quickly dismissed that idea. If the individual had reliable transportation, they would be creating these massive blasts much further away from the village to avoid detection. This suspect was stuck here and likely becoming desperate. The commander's face lit up with pride, confirming Hens's hypothesis. He adored watching his star students dissect the situation so perfectly. They were clearly top tier for a reason. He acknowledged the lack of evidence but remained convinced that the suspect lacked any form of getaway vehicle. Just as he finished speaking, another enormous blast thundered from the distance, confirming they had found the guy. The team observed from the concealing shadows as they located the quarry in a small clearing. It was only one person, and he appeared to be quite preoccupied with his current activities. It was Bill, violently swinging a practice sword as if a failure would mean immediate death. He was obviously trying to master combat, but honestly, he looked like a complete novice. Bill gazed at the sword with a baffled expression, questioning whether he was even holding it correctly. Whispering to himself, "Dude, you're a blacksmith, just stick with the hammer." He persisted, emitting a low grunt with every awkward swing. While he certainly put forth the effort, next to the elite students observing him, he resembled a small child wielding a branch. Bill was entirely out of breath, puffing and puffing after only a few minutes of exercise. Pens washed from the trees, sounding slightly let down as he wondered aloud if this person was truly just a beginner swordsman. Bill sensed eyes upon him and glanced into the canopy. The students were perched in the branches like a flock of predatory birds, silently critiquing his absolutely dreadful technique. Pens made a harsh assessment, claiming Bill's abilities were comparable to an anonymous bandit lackey at best. He had hoped for an actual challenge, not some amateur who could barely lift his weapon. The girl with pigtails smirked, suggesting there was no point in all three of them bothering to jump a target so obviously weak. They were underestimating him already, which is often a terrible error in this line of work. Phyla nodded in agreement, appearing completely unenthusiastic. They were treating the Centea mission like an irritating household chore rather than a serious assignment. Pens inquired whether the commander wanted to formally change the mission objective from simple scouting to actively apprehending a criminal. He was quite ready to finish up and head back to base. The commander produced a wanted poster, warning them against labeling someone a criminal too quickly. He looked at the paper, then exclaimed, "Oh, wait, there he is." Indeed, it was a wanted notice for one Bill Bark. He was officially considered a criminal by the state, and the bounty was likely substantial. Bill remained standing in the clearing, completely unaware as the students reviewed his record. They began to question why a simple blacksmith would have so many additional notations in his file. The commander's face drained of color as he read the list of charges: attempted assassination of the Lord Protector. Suddenly, the rookie suspect appeared significantly more dangerous than previously thought. The commanding officer bellows at the group, snapping them out of their daze. The recess bell has rung. Folks, it's time to transition from playground antics to a crucial, top priority apprehension. The commander clarifies that the official directive is to prioritize a non-lethal apprehension, yet in the same breath, he grants them full permission to unleash whatever level of overwhelming force might be necessary to ensure compliance. Phylon immediately interprets the subtext. Preferable to capture is apparently code for it's completely acceptable if the target doesn't survive the encounter. The moral compass at this academy seems to be pointing south, permanently. Pens agrees with the logic, convincing himself that anyone who would attack the Lord Protector must be a genuine, terrifying cryptid in disguise. They are basically psyching themselves up for an epic brawl they absolutely cannot handle. The young woman adjusts her pigtails, carefully preparing her whip-up weapon. A small, unsettling grin plays across her lips, clearly indicating she's savoring this chase like a predator at a buffet. The trio launches themselves from the treetops in a perfectly synchronized 3 versus 1 ambush. They are leaving absolutely nothing to chance against the individual accused of attempting to assassinate Oliver. Bill is caught entirely unawares. The student squad delivers a vicious barrage of blows and kicks, immediately sending up a huge cloud of grit and debris as they completely overwhelm him in a chaotic swarm. Bill lies prone on the earth, looking utterly bewildered and completely swamped by the unexpected assault. He barely had time to register their approach before impact. Arn pauses, staring in confusion, trying to figure out why this guy is such a pushover. He finds it completely unbelievable that this pathetic figure supposedly took on the most powerful individual in the entire empire. The girl speculates that maybe he's only a low-level informant, while Phylon observes that he failed to land even one counterattack. Their collective pride immediately inflates like a balloon hitting a hot air vent. Arn falls silent for a brief moment, contemplating the sorry spectacle of the craftsman lying defeated on the dirt below him. Arn casually nudges Bill's sword back in his direction with his foot. He clearly prefers to amuse himself by playing with his victim before ultimately taking him out. He instructs Bill to retrieve the weapon, claiming that finishing the encounter this easily would be incredibly dull. He demands Bill die with some dignity, an incredibly condescending statement coming from someone still in training. The girl proudly announces that this show of mercy exemplifies the generosity of the next great hero, Arn himself. Arn is sporting a truly evil smirk, and the atmosphere practically suffocates with his overblown sense of superiority. Bill glances upward from the ground, covered in sweat and shaking uncontrollably. He resembles a trapped creature, and this alleged kindness from the students feels more like deliberate cruelty. Bill extends a trembling hand toward his sword. Arn immediately declares that Bill completely misunderstands the situation, preparing himself to deliver a thorough and painful lecture. Bill rises to his feet, gripping the sword and wearing a very summer expression. Arn observes that the time for polite conversation has passed, clearly anticipating the physical confrontation with great pleasure. Arn launches into an impromptu, mid-combat instructional session, starting with the very fundamentals of a sword. You see, he's attempting to explain basic physics to a blacksmith who likely understands metallurgy better than Arn understands how to inhale air. Arn adopts a picture-perfect professional posture, offering pointers on how to gauge the spacing between yourself and your adversary. He's behaving as if this were a friendly sparring session in a training hall, not a high-stakes, violent capture attempt. Bill executes a slow, truly terrible swing, which Arn easily evades with an excessively flashy dodge. He is completely humiliating Bill in front of his audience. Arn accelerates with ridiculous speed, materializing behind Bill before the unfortunate man can even complete his clumsy attack. The gulf in expertise between these two is absolutely staggering. Subsequently, in a single fluid motion, Pans delivers a savage kick to Bill's leg from the rear, completely disrupting his equilibrium and destroying his defensive posture. Pans immediately follows through with a strike from his own sword at ludicrous speed. He is moving with such intensity that he's rendered as a simple, high-velocity streak on the battlefield. Bill receives a small cut on his cheek, spraying droplets of blood as he stares in complete disbelief. He simply cannot process the velocity of Hans' movements. Pens presses on with his instruction, advising Bill on techniques to prevent his swing from collapsing mid-attack. He's essentially ridiculing every single attempt Bill makes to defend himself. He strikes Bill squarely in the face with the hilt of his sword, demonstrating exactly how you do this. Pans is clearly enjoying himself immensely, pummeling someone utterly incapable of self-defense. To finish the demonstration, Pans delivers one final, extremely hard kick that sends Bill soaring through the air. He has effectively reduced Bill to nothing more than a training dummy. Bill is knocked back and forth like a literal pinball machine, each impact making a heavy, audible thud. Pans maintains a wide grin throughout, resembling a playground tormentor far more than a budding savior. Bill clenches his jaw against the searing pain. He is enduring a relentless punishment while the students find the whole ordeal absolutely hilarious. Bill is launched backward through the atmosphere, crashing heavily across the ground, as the remaining students observe the spectacle and shout words of encouragement from the edges of the fight. Bill's face introduced itself to the ground. Hans, looming above, critiqued his performance as seriously weak tea. He completely blew off the guy he was actually supposed to be arresting. Hans towered over the guy, demanding to know how Bill planned to reimburse him for all the precious seconds he wasted. This kid's ego really needed a leash. The commander watched from the sidelines, his face obscured by shadow. He whispered to himself, feeling like something wasn't quite right with this entire brawl. The commander began connecting the dots. The mission was to find the source of massive blasts, yet all they had witnessed was a fellow who couldn't swing a blade to save his life. He recalled the splintered trees at the scene of the explosion. Those injuries were from serious power, definitely not from a simple sword swing. He concluded the culprit must be either a magic user or someone with explosives. He remembered Lynn's report, 0 gunpowder odor, 0 magical residue. If Bill wasn't a wizard and didn't use bumps, then exactly how did he create those blasts? The commander eyed the struggling swordsman on the dirt. He realized that if Bill Bark was indeed the suspect, this weapon absolutely couldn't be a sword. They had completely misjudged the situation from the start. Pence prepared to land another hit, but Bill reached out, pleading for him to just stop, please. He looked utterly defeated, yet there was a faint spark hidden in his gaze. Pence paused his assault, bewildered, asking what exactly he should stop. He mistakenly believed he had already won, unaware that the real match was just about to kick off. The commander's epiphany landed like a concrete block. If Bill was alone, then his weapon must be. Suddenly, a colossal beam of light exploded from Bill's hand. Bill's mechanical arm materialized in a cloud of light and steam, glowing intensely. It resembled a piece of siege equipment attached to his missing limb. He stated calmly, let's finish this already. Not a sword at all, but something more like a cannon. The commander shrieked in surprise. Penz's face became a portrait of pure horror as he finally grasped what exactly he had just been poking at. The blast was enormous, a circular shockwave ripping through the field with a deafening thunderclap. Pence found himself directly in the epicenter of the destruction. The close-up showed Bill's mechanical hand, with steam billowing and sparks flying from its intricate joints. This thing was truly a masterpiece, and Bill had finally unleashed its full power. Pence shrieked in agonizing pain, grasping his head as the intense heat of the explosion scorched him. The commander bellowed that Bill had targeted his weapon, calling him a cowardly little. Well, you get the picture. Pence continued to scream accusations of cowardice, while Bill simply observed him with a cold, almost lifeless expression. The roles had officially reversed in spectacular fashion. Pence was propelled backward by the residual shockwave, his sword spinning from his grasp. The resulting dust cloud was so dense that visibility dropped to zero. Bill stood in the center of the destruction, breathing heavily. He hurled Penz's earlier insults right back at him, demanding, and you actually call yourself a swordsman now? That's cold. Pence looked completely demonic, his face smeared with soot and cast in deep shadow. He had utterly lost his mind, his perfect hero image shattered by one explosive surprise. Pence trembled with fury, demanding to know what Bill had just called him. A real jerk move. His immense ego simply could not cope with being insulted by a beginner. Pence snatched up his sword and charged for the kill, yelling that he would cut off Bill's foul mouth along with everything else. The kid had officially lost his marbles entirely. Pence put every ounce of strength into his blade, screaming out a death cry that echoed through the woods. But just as the weapon was about to connect, blind, it was blocked. The blade stopped dead in the air, creating a shower of sparks from the sudden impact. It was the commander. He had intervened, stopping Penz's killing blow with nothing more than his armored forearm, stating with a voice like cold steel, that is plenty. Pence stood frozen. The commander, completely expressionless, looked toward Bill while praising his strategy. He understood Bill hadn't been weak. He had been setting an elaborate trap. He clarified the situation for the students. Bill had deployed a lethal amount of destructive force, luring the enemy in close to ensure maximum impact. The smith was clearly a tactical genius. Bill remained on the ground, his mechanical hand raised defensively. He looked like someone who had just barely managed to dodge a lethal strike. He closed his eyes. We saw a close-up of Bill flinching right as he fired the explosion. He simply couldn't bear to look at the destruction he was about to cause. The commander watched the trembling smith. He realized Bill had never actually taken a life before. Despite his incredible power and clever strategy, Bill was far too gentle for this line of work. The commander stood tall, his shadow casting itself over the clearing. He informed his students that killing another person is always difficult, even if they are trying to kill you first. This was a true lesson in combat, unlike Hans's previous antics. In the background, 2 other students lurked. Balin, ever the eloquent one, was busy turning Hans to zip it, reminding him how close he came to meeting his maker just because he spaced out. Pans, for his part, looked like he was plotting to spontaneously combust from sheer mortification. The commando, clearly tired of their adolescent squabbling, ordered them to pack down and pay attention, intending to demonstrate precisely what a person looks like after tangling with death itself. Bill, meanwhile, was just a heap of exhaustion in the dirt, puffing and wheezing like a rusty teapot, thoroughly run out both physically and emotionally by the recent chaos. Hans, never one to give up gracefully, continued to grouse, wondering if they truly planned to drag him away mid-spat, clearly yearning for another round until he reclaimed his honor. The commander thoughtfully observed that Bill hadn't displayed any genuine hostility towards them from the start, merely acting on defensive instinct rather than a murderous impulse. He further elaborated that without true animosity, one simply can't engage in a serious fight, a logical statement that nearly made Hans's head explode, though he couldn't actually dispute his mentor's wisdom. Suddenly, the commander fixed his students with an expression that could curdle milk, then instructed Class 3, Group A, to retrieve the talismans, signaling a very unsettling shift in atmosphere. Bill, upon hearing the cryptic mention of talismans, glanced up, utterly bewildered, having no earthly idea what these seemingly ordinary youngsters were about to inflict upon him. The commander then formally addressed him as Criminal Bill Bark, inquiring if he happened to be acquainted with the Hero Academy's distinctive curriculum, forcing the ambient peril to visibly thicken. He proceeded to unveil a mandatory program, meticulously training students to dispatch evil without the slightest hesitation, making the academy sound less like a school and more like a macabre finishing camp for assassins. With disturbing clarity, he described how they dismantle living criminals' bodies. Also, the students could become comfortably numb to blood and screams, a revelation that absolutely horrified Bill, witnessing such cruelty from those he once aided. The students, with an unsettling enthusiasm, produced their glowing talismans, poised to commence their grim practice, regarding Bill with a chilling nonchalance typically reserved for a training dummy. The commander, with a dramatic flourish of his finger, then unleashed the ultimate, gut-wrenching revelation. The group's current practice assignment was disturbingly named Phil Bark. Bill's mind shattered entirely, the word family screaming across his vision as his eyes flared white with an unholy, blinding fury. They hadn't just murdered Uncle Phil, they desecrated his corpse as a gruesome training aid. The commando, sporting a frigid, predatory grin, simply uttered, "Correct," clearly savoring the precise moment he had utterly demolished Bill's last shred of hope and sanity. Bill began to shiver violently, his teeth rattling like dice in a cup, while the students cruelly mocked his apparent lack of resolve, utterly oblivious to the hurricane of pure wrath they had just unleashed. He clutched his chest, a haunted whisper escaping his lips about Phil still enduring pain, utterly adrift in a suffocating fog of profound sorrow and encroaching madness. Suddenly, it clicked. Bill was clawing at his face, his eyes wide and utterly terrifying, having finally glimpsed the true, monstrous heart of the empire he once served, and he knew exactly what came next. He slowly rose, fixing his gaze on the ground with a cold, lifeless stare, convinced that by taking Oliver's life, he would finally unlock the hostility he desperately sought. He then turned his gaze upon the students and the commander with an intensity that could extinguish flames, a single thought echoing in his mind, obliterate everything you created. This vendetta now spanned the entire nefarious system. Bill, a chilling spectacle, was simultaneously weeping and grinning, looking like a textbook case of a total lunatic, determined to wipe out every last bit of it, ending the chapter on a horrifying precipice where the hero's hopeful gleam was about to be extinguished. Hold on just a second. Bill abruptly called a halt to the impending execution, boldly standing his ground in the clearing, encircled by the elite student squad and the commanding officer. Bill stared them down, directly into their eyes, and asked if they genuinely required a legitimate target for their grim practice. He was utterly fed up with being the world's least appreciated punching bag and fully intended to redefine the rules. He astutely reminded them of his humble profession as a blacksmith, pointing out that merely butchering him right now would yield precisely zero meaningful training, essentially accusing them of being glorified schoolyard bullies. The commander, looking notably intrigued, allowed his scarred face to contort into a slow, unsettling grin, then asked Bill precisely what he meant, genuinely curious about the criminal's unexpected gambit. We were treated to a truly chilling close-up of the commander's discerning eye just as Bill laid down his unexpected demand. He only wanted one simple thing, and that was time. Bill's expression descended into an abyss of darkness, his eyes casting an unnerving shadow, as he commanded them to grant him sufficient time to arm himself, sealing the deal with a bone-chilling vow to do his absolute best to murder them all. Hans, of course, merely scuffed it off, convinced Bill was simply attempting to buy precious minutes for a hasty retreat, then promptly advised the commander they should just dispatch the fellow now and be done with it. The commander thoughtfully examined his own hand, echoing the word run with a peculiar inflection, suggesting he harbored insights far beyond the comprehension of his youthful students. He pondered aloud whether Bill was truly the fly-cursed type, casting a measuring gaze upon the very youth who had just brazenly threatened to annihilate a squadron of highly trained combatants. The commander was beginning to sense a primal force stirring beneath the surface. Bill drops his head with a low, sorrowful sound, the crushing sorrow and the ghost of Uncle Phil undeniably fueling this dramatic personality shift. With a grin that could curdle milk, Bill looks up, his face a silent proclamation that their destiny is already sealed, asking if they are not joining him. The commander, flapping his hands together in a sharp, decisive clap, is thoroughly impressed and bellows his approval, clearly relishing the spectacle. The commander, standing regally, posed the crucial inquiry, "How much time do you require?" As he's now treating this entire affair like a formal showdown. Bill declares an hour to be more than sufficient, prompting the commander to dismiss him with a nod to prepare, a move that sighed audacious brilliance or a student's ultimate blunder. The commander sternly reminds Bill of the dire consequences for tardiness, emphasizing the empire's zero tolerance for broken promises, particularly from those branded as traitors. Hans watches Bill vanish into the gloom, his hand firmly on his charm, outwardly joking about feeding Bill to the farm animals, yet a subtle unease betrays his bravado. He brandishes the talisman with a triumphant smirk, declaring to the commander, "See, I told you so." Convinced Bill has already fled the premises, the students mill about the clearing, exuding an air of profound boredom as time drags on, while Hans bemoans the lost bonus points, assuming Bill's desertion. Hans continues his grumbling as the commander sits stoically, puffing on his pipe, suggesting they wait a little longer, a hunch telling him the real show is yet to unfold. Lynn, the girl with the pit dills, stretches and yawns, voicing her impatience and surmising they're wasting precious time in the wilderness for a fugitive already halfway to the border. She stretches her arms skyward, completely letting her guard down, a colossal misstep, to put it mildly. Suddenly, a streak of dazzling light and a deafening roar rips through the clearing, shattering the tranquil atmosphere. A colossal metallic cord descends, unleashing a torrent of steam and sparks, a formidable implement clearly designed for annihilation, not mere crafting. then lets out a shriek as a chain-link projectile violently propels her backward, revealing Bill has transformed into a formidable, mobile fortress. From the dissipating dust emerges a figure-clad and imposing, heavy armor, none other than Bill, now encased in a mechanical exoskeleton fit for a deity of war. Peering through the visor's narrow opening, Bill's eyes are chillingly clear as he murmurs, 35 fingers remaining, coldly ticking off his targets, commencing with the digits. Lin, incandescent with fury, bellows at her companions to finish the rogue with extreme prejudice, her pride wounded far more grievously than her physical form. With a unified battle cry, the two remaining combatants surge forward, abandoning subtlety for a decisive, lethal strike, unaware of the true meaning of the Golden Hind. A relentless barrage of metallic impacts rings out as they batter the armor, an intense onslaught that Bill's formidable suit seems to absorb without the slightest tremor. Hens recoils, his face a mask of sheer astonishment, having unleashed his full might only to find his blows leave not even a superficial mark on the impenetrable shell. The armored Bill stands unmoving and imposing, stoically weathering the most potent assaults, absorbing each blow as if it were mere child's play. The commander interjects with a sharp tactical observation, questioning their approach against an adversary with such an impenetrable exterior, treating it like a practical combat drill. He bellows the critical directive, target the vulnerable joints, to which Hans exasperatedly retorts that he's already aware, desperately searching for a chink in Bill's formidable defense. With sharp metallic scrapes, the students attempt to work their blades into the armor seams, employing precision tactics to counter the sheer brute force. A helpful textual aside clarifies the underlying principle. Armor joints typically consist of mere fabric or delicate chainmail, representing a fundamental design flaw, a basic tenet of blacksmithing. However, Bill is a master craftsman for a very good reason. He effortlessly deflects their attempts to exploit joint weaknesses, his movements a symphony of mechanical grace. Having designed and built the suit himself, Hans is verging on madness as his sword is arrested by a supposedly pliable joint, realizing that even these intended weak points are sealed shut, confirming Bill's meticulous design has left no exploitable flaws. Lin hurtles through the air, her mace held aloft, a visceral scream of dye escaping her lips as she unleashes an all-out, overhead crushing blow. She executes a powerful swing with a mighty whoosh, her countenance contorted in a visage of unadulterated wrath, intensely focused on shattering the helmet before her. That heavy bludgeon ricochets off William's noggin like some bouncy marble head in granite, achieving nothing beyond creating a comical thud. This is Bill dazed below, as the commander notes the boy possesses too much mercy to actually commit murder today. Close-ups reveal a mangled palm dripping fluids, as Bill slowly harvests chucks rather than concluding the bout, hoping for maximum pain. Labeling William an idiot regarding his mercy, the leader instructs those youngsters to fight without limits, initiating a lethal combat scenario. Lin shrieks insults about his mother while rushing back, proving these adolescents lose their sanity the moment they start tasting dirt. The pair of boys deliver a synchronized bash which triggers a giant shower of embers, yelling for his demise while assuming victory arrived. That deer remains stubbornly stationary despite the group effort, making it seem like they are punching a very grumpy, metal mountain. Suddenly, the chunky iron slipper crunches the soil with enough force to rattle teeth, signaling the end of his kindness. Pupils pounds atop that gear hoping to immobilize the man, as Lin shrieks for his destruction, scrambling to find some minor edge. Countless hits hammer the trap casing, sending metallic echoes across the forest, proving these youngsters behave like feral predators instead of champions. Halting briefly to inhale some oxygen, Pence questions whether the strikes possess any impact, becoming noticeably rattled by the beast beneath his soles. Fallon screams to target hinges, repeating a useless tactic repeatedly, which truly showcases the lack of any tactical brain power. Bill's rumbling voice mucks them from his suit, calling it cowardly for future saviors to outnumber one opponent. Entering peak boss fight roasting, gripping the facial bard, Pence snarls regarding how victory remains paramount, trying to disguise his cowardly nature behind a pathetic justification. Lin kicks the dime, swearing they will execute him using maximum torture, confirming these adolescents represent the actual villains today. Pence strikes once more, telling the fighter to avoid resentment over a simple workout, which sounds like an absolute load of horse manure. One chilly optic peeps out from the facial armor as he mutters regarding the fate, indicating his power bar has finally reached max capacity. Lin giggles while preparing another wallop, repeating the forgiveness line, far too joyful about bowling a target she assumes is helpless. A subsequent bash connects, yet the mechanism produces a strange whirring vibration, suggesting a massive discharge is imminent within the frame. A colossal mechanical snare or surge of electricity bursts from the limb. The thunders crash, proving the real carnage has begun. Those trainees get launched everywhere via a massive ripple of energy, as William concludes his mercy and creates a complete massacre. Standing up through the haze like a phantom, he mentions their attempts at grappling were completely foreseen, as he remains miles ahead of them. The armored tank turns toward the leader, inquiring when the grown-ups might intervene, clearly fatigued by children and seeking genuine opposition. The superior officer returns his gaze with a dark smirk, having eventually seen sufficient proof that William is a legitimate legend. Those pupils are flopping around like dying fish, having been thoroughly wrecked by Bill without him even breaking a tiny sweat. He unsheathes a tiny neon toothpick with a bored sigh, prepared to conclude this pathetic workout permanently for everyone involved. A single stroke hurls a colossal azure arc across the woods, exhibiting a technique reserved for mythical icons instead of humble metal workers. That detonation digs an enormous pit, instantly pancaking the nearby landscape and proving that his raw strength is absolutely off the charts. Breathless within his iron shell, the guy drips sweat while complaining that his blade lacks length, realizing he is still a total amateur. Scanning the distance separating him from those trainees, the warrior acknowledges his physical limitations, fretting over his inability to strike such amateurs. Our camera focuses on Oliver from behind, the exact man Bill truly wants to meet. The hero appears absolutely untouchable, a golden statue of war. Bill's internal thoughts are filled with both self-doubt and serious ambition, wondering how he will ever reach Oliver. He feels like the mountain he has to conquer never ends. Bill takes a very deep breath, reminding himself not to rush things, because he needs to approach combat with the same care he uses for his craft. His eyes glow blue as he analyzes the situation, realizing it's just like working with red-hot steel, and he plans on hammering his enemies into submission. We see a flashback of a hammer striking red-hot metal, illustrating that you cannot achieve a truly desirable outcome with a single tap. It takes thousands of strikes. Once, the imaginary hammer falls in his mind as he prepares for his next attack. Then once more, he starts building momentum, transforming his fighting style into a rhythmic, almost unstoppable force of nature. And again, Bill lunges forward with a huge energy slash, putting absolutely everything into the single hit, resulting in a blinding blue light. Blood sprays into the atmosphere as a powerful strike connects, marking the very first truly clean hit he has managed to land on any of the students. Bill stands there with his sword, resembling a demonic knight, deciding he won't stop until every single one of them is completely defeated in the dirt. The attack finally lands, generating a massive shockwave of red energy that explodes from the impact point, thoroughly tearing the ground apart. Pence clutches a bleeding arm, looking completely stunned, and tries to act casual by calling it a lucky scrape, but the fear in his eyes tells a different story. Fallon asks both Hans and Lin for some ideas on how to finish this, as they are finally realizing they are way over their heads. Bill raises a glowing mechanical hand and responds that he certainly does have an idea, getting ready to demonstrate what a real special move looks like. A series of mechanical panels pop open on his armor, unleashing a sudden barrage of capture wires and traps with a rapid-fire sound effect. The students find themselves caught in a massive web made of metallic wires, tangled up and completely pinned to the ground before they could even react. Lin is trapped in the net, looking absolutely terrified, as the hero candidate is now just a helpless bug caught in a spider's web. Lin screams that struggling won't break the wires, to which Bill casually replies that she should struggle all she wants, because it truly won't change anything at all. He informs them that even the strength of a mythical ogre couldn't snap these wires, as they were designed to contain genuinely powerful creatures, making three mere hero students laughably insignificant by comparison. Pence tries to issue a clumsy threat, insisting the academy will certainly send more people if they don't return, clinging desperately to the prestige of his student status. Pence manages a shaky, nervous grin, muttering that time is on their side, hoping reinforcements show up before Bill decides to finish things. Bill stands over Hans, his immense shadow completely covering the boy's face, asking if Hans truly believed he hadn't thought about reinforcements, his voice completely devoid of any warmth. Do you know exactly why I sprung this little trap right now? Yes, a rhetorical question promising an answer that will be pure, unadulterated nightmare fuel. Bill reveals the truth. He also required some live combat practice, just like them, and thanks them with a cold, mechanical voice for being such excellent research subjects. Hans starts subbing uncontrollably, apologizing profusely and begging for his very life, while Bill just stares down at him and responds, I think I'll start by collecting those fingers first. Bill's mechanical hand slowly descends toward Hans' face, forcing Hans to shriek in pure terror, desperately yelling at him to keep that metallic appendage away. Hans spins toward the commander, screaming desperately for assistance, having completely abandoned all pretense of pride and reverting to a terrified child pleading for his teacher to rescue him. The camera zooms tightly onto Hans' face as he releases a final, ugly soul-shredding scream, the background blurring into a chaotic mixture of motion and blood. A massive splash of crimson covers the entire scene, a brutal final attack that instantly silences the clearing and ends all arguments. Bill's armored helmet is splattered completely with blood, making him look exactly like a monster that just finished enjoying a particularly messy meal. The field commander surveyed the gruesome aftermath, fixing his gaze upon Bill. He then announced, Bill barked, you've passed the test, sounding almost admiring of the widespread destruction he had just witnessed. With a chilling, wide-eyed smirk, the commander's face glowed eerily from below, resembling a classic horror movie villain. He informed Bill Bark of his success, and it was immediately clear the true nightmare had only just begun. We're kicking things off right after that spectacular fiasco. The supposedly elite students remain comically ensnared in Bill's high-tech wiring, much like common insects, as the commander observes the entire spectacle with an unnervingly composed demeanor. Lin was absolutely losing her marbles, shrieking an opponent cocktail of agony and profound embarrassment, as being outmaneuvered by a backorder artisan certainly wasn't on her agenda for the day. Commander reiterated those chilling words, you pass, Bill barked, while the two remaining students in the background stood utterly frozen, finally grasping that the former bullying target was, in fact, a literal force of nature. All at once, a murky streak blurred across the platform with a sickening crunch. One of the students was struck by a blow so swift, it appeared as little more than a violent splash of crimson. The unfortunate student couldn't even register what had occurred, his expression locked in utter bewilderment just milliseconds before his consciousness flickered out, the commander's hand clearly visible, confirming his decisive action. The vast torrent of dark ink splattered across the panorama, silhouetted against a brilliant scarlet backdrop, with a sickening thud of impact serving as the final sound that unfortunate youth would ever perceive. The commander casually wiped fresh blood from his weapon with complete apathy, murmuring, may the departed find their eternal slumber, as if concluding a horrible prey rather than a fresh spree of fatalities. He casually strolled away from the fresh casualties of his own star pupils, offering them a wish for reincarnation into a realm populated solely by decent adults. This individual clearly holds the title of the most unsettling mentor ever conceived. Bill remained enclosed within his weighty armor, his ornamented hand quivering as he tightly gripped his blade, having just witnessed an instructor decimate his entire class in mere moments, a sight that would leave any ordinary person trembling uncontrollably. The commander paused and glanced back, reassuring Bill there was no need to maintain his guard. His laid-back attitude, however, served only to amplify the sheer menace of the entire situation tenfold. He continued his progression into the distance, repeating that Bill had successfully cleared the assessment. For him, those pupils were merely expendable instruments for measuring Bill's latent capabilities. Bill gazed after him, his armor filled with a drenching sweat, pondering the bizarre events that had just unfolded. Having perceived absolutely no motion, as the commander had moved with an unnatural speed defying all human reason, the commander cast a fleeting glance over his shoulder at the fallen students, or what remained of them, his thoughts already detached and focused on meticulously calculating the subsequent maneuver for his news position. We behold a shadowy figure of the commander enveloped in a sinister, fiery radiance, as he poses a truly unsettling inquiry. How exactly are we meant to contend with a monstrosity such as that one? Ostensibly referring to Bill, though frankly, he should really take a look in a mirror. Bill maintained his defensive posture, his luminous eyes locked firmly on the men, while the commander merely stood there with his batons extended, clearly prepared to administer another lesson if Bill didn't grasp the unspoken implication. He explained to Bill that his perspective on those young individuals was misguided, contending they were precisely the sort who deserved their grim fate, which certainly made one wonder how he handled his adversaries. He leaned closer, his features illuminated from one side, declaring that succumbing to torment was a pitiable end, and thus, he had actually done them a service by delivering a swift conclusion, a warped logic that was profoundly alarming. The close-up reveals his desolate, lifeless gaze, reflecting his belief that it's far better to usher them into the afterlife without suffering, essentially casting himself as a benevolent angel of death. In a burst of action, Bill, having heard quite enough, launched forward with a potent burst of energy, pouring every single drop of his anguish into this desperate counterattack. The commander merely offered a subtle, knowing smirk, effortlessly evading the aggressive assault and observing that such a predictable maneuver was precisely what he had anticipated from Bill. He gracefully glided backward, expertly maintaining an optimal separation, then instructed Bill to listen, asserting he had traveled this immense distance specifically to encounter the legendary Golden Hand. Bill once more surged ahead, yet his strikes met only empty air, for the commander navigated with the ethereal fluidity of a phantom, rendering Bill's heavy battle suit ponderous and ungainly by comparison. They collided in a brilliant cascade of sparks, and the commander abruptly inquired if Bill harbored a deep animosity for the Guardian Knights, attempting to forge an alliance based on mutual dislike even as they tried to pulverize each other. He delivered a crushing impact to Bill's breastplate, eliciting a sharp gasp of agony, then declared, "We share that sentiment," a statement that unmistakably hinted at a potentially massive insurgence on the horizon. The commander stepped back, proposing they at least engage in a preliminary discussion, signaling he was temporarily finished with the bloodshed, yet the ambient tension remained thick enough to be sliced with a hacksaw. The close-up focused on his face, revealing a rugged scar marring his chin, portraying a man who had clearly endured unimaginable horrors and was now unequivocally prepared to scorch the surface world to its foundations. Bill appeared suspended in a murky, abstract void, gasping for breath and visibly exhausted, his mental reserves completely depleted, with only his Fairy Bailey sustaining his upright posture. Suddenly, a blinding eruption of brilliant white energy engulfed the clearing, and the commander calmly stated, "This simply cannot be helped," looking as though he were preparing to gently put the perceived menace into a permanent slumber. Hovering like a phantom bathed in crimson mist, he grumbled that Bill had orchestrated his own downfall, a symphony of suffering soon to begin. Bill's helmet endured a cataclysmic thud, the sheer kinetic energy sparking a shockwave that likely jumbled his grey matter like lottery balls in a blender, if brains could play the lottery. With a violent crack, his protective gear exploded, Bill's last, desperate breath swallowed by an encroaching void, utterly flattened by one impeccably aimed, lights-out punch. Bill bolted awake, abruptly seated in what felt like an absurdly plush wooden bed, his initial musing a profound, "I haven't quite kicked the bucket yet," as he scanned the oddly snug chamber with utter bewilderment. He gripped his face and skull, his fingers trembling from the shock, the gruesome events of the massacre and the brutal skirmish apparently stuck on an endless, mental rerun, worse than any late-night infomercial. He scrutinized his surroundings, pondering his current, perplexing location. His formidable armor vanished and replaced by ordinary attire, making him appear considerably more exposed than a politician at a town hall meeting just 60 minutes prior. Beyond the threshold, he caught snippets of conversation regarding an inspection of the northern route, his face rapidly morphing from utterly baffled to overtly wary faster than a chameleon changing colors. He observed a hand meticulously jotting down remarks with a writing instrument, an image of serene composure, oddly contrary to the whirlwind of destruction he had only moments ago barely survived. Bill stealthily peered through the groaning door, catching hushed whispers about shifting wind patterns and the telltale signs they leave, sounding distinctly like a clandestine spy briefing, or perhaps an overly dramatic meteorology club. He ambled into the passageway, still appearing thoroughly bewildered, like a sleepwalker who'd wandered into a conspiracy theory convention, picking up further fragments of discourse concerning peril and the need for vigilance. Bill observed from the gloomy fringes, his visage partially obscured by a doorway, as he eavesdropped on a collective emphasizing proactive wariness, confirming this was no mere dwelling, but rather a clandestine command center, definitely not a bed and breakfast. A gargantuan text balloon dominated the scene, signifying the energetic hum of base operations, the general mood buzzing with activity and a distinctly driven, mission-oriented resolve. Bill discovered himself amidst a sprawling chamber brimming with diverse factions, as one inquired about the elusive warehouse access while others diligently readied their equipment, remarkably similar to a clandestine adventurer's society, only with more sensible footwear. The battle-hardened leader was present, conversing with another fellow about an individual's utterly wild command over their own power. He addressed the man as Barhan, thus finally bestowing a moniker upon the enigmatic figure previously known simply as the Reaper. In the periphery, boisterous individuals guzzled beverages and clamored for additional libations, while a crimson-maned pugilist advised a comrade to cease imbibing lest they shuffle off this mortal coil prematurely, exhibiting an unmistakably boisterous, rebellious ambience. A pine-sized ginger-haired youth sat cross-legged on the ground, tinkering with an assortment of vibrant pebbles, innocently inquiring if his sibling desired one as well, a bizarrely suburban tableau unfolding within the heart of a militant underground stronghold. Bill experienced a fleeting, agonizing hallucination of sepia munching on an apple, her name escaping his lips as a soft murmur, his very essence still inextricably bound to the calamitous incident that had unleashed this entire predicament. A firm hand settled upon his shoulder, followed by a composed query, You have regained consciousness, causing Bill to leap skyward, his gaze widening dramatically in absolute astonishment, probably leaving a small crater where he'd been. Pure, unadulterated primal reflex seized him, Bill then launching himself at the individual behind him, delivering a substantial blow, behaving with the wild desperation of a badger trapped in a teacup. The entire chamber instantly burst into pandemonium. Individuals sprang to their feet, bellowing chief, as they poised themselves to absolutely dismantle Bill for daring to lay a hand on their revered head honcho. The fellow Bill had just ambushed simply offered a placid grin and instructed everyone to remain settled, entirely unshaken by the unexpected offensive, maintaining a composure so serene it would make his Zen master envious. He presented his hand, crimson liquid trickling from it, revealing he hadn't merely absorbed the blow but had expertly intercepted Bill's attempt to incapacitate him, prompting a subordinate to shriek in utter dismay that the attack had cut straight through. The fiery-haired pugilist was held back by his companions, roaring furiously about Bill's apparent lack of self-preservation, or perhaps just his complete idiocy. The leader leaned over Bill, his back facing the observer, gently informing him he was likely bewildered and terrified, possessing an undeniable magnetic charm that made one either want to follow him blindly or sprint screaming in the opposite direction. Bill raised his gaze, his expression a fortress of distrust, as the leader offered his regrets for transporting Lady Seabeer without prior consultation, explaining they believed Bill would find greater comfort with her proximity, making Bill silently question, could she actually be breathing? He presented himself as Witala, the esteemed head of the imperial faction known as Orient. His aristocratic bearing, kin to a fancy duke, made his occupation as a revolutionary figure an incredibly intriguing paradox. Wood declared his intention to forgo all trivial niceties and proceed directly to the crux of the matter, clearly a decisive individual poised to extend Bill an exceedingly grave proposition. No small talk required. He stood centrally amidst his loyal cohort, imploring Bill to unite with the cause in expelling the formidable Guardian Knights, a startling summons to a conflict Bill had no prior awareness of, a real surprise party invitation, minus the cake. Bill remained motionless, head lowered, absorbing Wit's commendations regarding his considerable talents, presented with an opportunity to wield his extraordinary golden appendage in pursuit of her genuinely meaningful objective, not just opening stubborn pickle jars. Bill lifted his gaze, revealing utterly emotionless, vacant orbs, and delivered an unequivocal, unyielding negative, entirely disinclined to serve as another's disposable piece on the chessboard, no matter how noble the grand scheme. He insists his sole mission is raising the Guardian Knights, not merely chasing them away but permanently deleting them, fueled by a grudge so deep it makes his soul look like a charcoal briquette. Wittal flashes a knowing grin, realizing he is dealing with a vengeful blacksmith who has essentially evolved into a human-sized wrecking ball of pure spite. Raising his palm, Wit cautions that dismantling such a powerful regime is no work in the park, desperately trying to inject some common sense into the volcano of Bill's rage. He suggests a temporary team-up, essentially the classic enemy of my enemy strategy, promising Bill can settle his scores once the Knights are nothing but bad memories. He calls it a partnership and extends his hand, looking so genuinely sincere that one might suspect he is secretly the CEO of a shady corporate recruitment firm. The Orion crowd watches with mixed reactions, some intrigued and others deeply skeptical, clearly aware that this handshake might accidentally start a world war. The camera zooms in on the parms meeting, but despite the professional appearance, Bill is treating this contact like he is touching something slimy. Bill grips Wit's hand with enough pressure to make a stone weep, producing a sickening crunch that suggests he is currently auditioning to see if human fingers are made of brittle chalk. Staring with pure acid in his eyes, Bill wonders if joining these rebels is just swapping one set of monsters for another, given their questionable history. Bathed in a demonic crimson glow, he tells them to scram before he decides to turn the entire group into permanent interior decor, proving he has officially quit the errand boy life. Bahan, the grizzled commander, tries cooling the tension by claiming that Bill's murderous temper is actually a glowing review of his potential as a weapon. Wit leans in close, whispering into Bill's ear to ask if slaughtering them all solo is truly a viable career path, effectively weaponizing the poor guy's insecurities. Getting uncomfortably close, Wit hits where it hurts most by questioning whether the blacksmith even has the guts to face his targets given his absolute lack of combat skills. A shot of Wit's shadowed gaze reveals Bill shivering like a wet puppy, proving that Wit is basically a masterclass instructor in the fine art of psychological demolition. Clutching his chest in agony, Bill gasps that he might not have the strength to carry out his revenge, making it sound like he's trying to lift a heavy emotional suitcase. Brainy, red-soaked visions of the Forge massacre flash through his mind, serving as a gruesome reminder that his trauma is still the primary operating system for his brain. Bill collapses onto his knees and lets out a roar so loud and pathetic that it likely startled the local ghosts, proving he has completely crashed his internal operating system. Grabbing his head, he wails about how he's supposed to hold a sword with that bum arm, clearly using his missing limb as an excuse for a full emotional breakdown. Wittal stares down with a face as stoic as a garden gnome, just biding his time until the emotional fireworks show finishes so he can grab the leftover debris. As Bill wallows in the dirt like a broken toy, Wit stands ready with an emotional ladder to help him climb out of this spectacular pit of self-pity. A hand reaches down to assist, and a cheery voice says hello, signaling a weirdly abrupt mood shift from the previous episode of public subbing. We get a zoom-in shot of Bill's eyeball looking like a fried egg as he stares at his own hand in absolute shock. He examines his own fingers as if he is encountering them for the very first time, showing just how deeply his trauma has scrambled his internal reality. The blonde guy Edric flashes a dazzling smile and invites Bill to lend an ear before making any rash decisions about quitting the revolution. A massive heap of weaponry hits the floor with a deafening clatter, signaling that the local armory is finally open for some dangerous retail therapy. Wittal stands before a group of shivering convicts and suggests they pick up a weapon, effectively rebranding them as his new boutique brand of soldiers. An announcer shouts that the Count's mercy involves letting the survivor of this death trap work free, which is really just a glorified reality show for sociopaths. The commoner cries out that he only came for the protest and has never held a blade, realizing he has accidentally signed up for a front row seat to his own funeral. A pale, creepy noble shivers with a disturbing level of glee in the back, clearly getting a massive kick out of watching human despair unfold in real time. More shackled souls are dragged into the pit, the chains ringing out like a grim musical score for a funeral service that hasn't officially started yet. Seeing his kin bound in iron, the poor peasant shrieks their names, proving that the Count possesses the moral compass of a rusty spoon. An oversized, shirtless hulk in a violet gown rises, lecturing that he only respects folks who earn it, proving he is the undisputed king of being a total jerk. He stares at the captives, claiming they were no different before grabbing weapons, essentially stripping their humanity to make his impending violence feel like a hobby. Texts show the captives as farmers and miners, basically ordinary folks turned into fleshy toys for the amusement of some bored, wealthy weirdo. This gladiator rejects claims that past life is irrelevant, insisting that only their current state is fodder for his amusement matters. He looms over the trembling peasant like a rejected demon extra, clearly deriving way too much joy from the poor guy's sweaty, terrified face. He grabs the man's wife, murmuring that he will force her fighting spirit to bloom, a move so greasy it deserves its own slip and slide. The peasant finally snaps, charging with a dull blade to protect his wife, a valiant effort that sadly guarantees his own hilarious demise. With a casual backhand, the giant swatting the man aside makes his jaw sound like a sack of marbles being dropped down a flight of stairs. The wife watches in horror as her husband hits the floor, effectively vaporizing every scrap of hope left in that gloomy, dungeon-like space. Our gladiator palpitates the limp body like a discarded sucker ball, showing he possesses the emotional depth of a damp cardboard box. He turns to the shivering crowd and asks why they are idling about, clearly eager to start the main course of this tragic talent show. The prisoners remain frozen in terror, prompting the gladiator to threaten further violence if they refuse to dance for him on cue. The arena descends into pure chaos as the brute charges, turning the event from a strategic battle into an extremely one-sided meat grinder. The close-up reveals our villain looks totally zen while butchering everyone, which is honestly more creepy than if he were actually screaming in rage. He tosses his blade skyward, treating his lethal weapon like a child playing with a slightly dangerous, spinning plastic toy, sanding in a sea of gore. He resembles some dark deity, his purple robes providing a fashion choice that truly pops against the red backsplash. Blood rains down while he stands there with closed eyes, soaking in the carnage like he is getting a hot stone massage at a spar. The screen turns black, flashing a text about how being weak is a sin, which is just a fancy way of saying life is rigged. Meet Count Tahir, the hero party veteran who clearly finds the taste of blood more refreshing than his morning cup of lukewarm coffee. Back at base, Wittal points at maps while explaining that Tahir now commands the entire army, making him the region's top bully. Wit adjusts his suspenders and drops the heavy news that Tahir is so efficient that the Lord Protector barely needs to lift a finger. The group realizes Tahir is a one-man army, making Bill feel like he finally understands the sheer size of the mountain he has to climb. Bill asks the million-dollar question, wondering if their group of lovable losers has any actual hope against a highly trained professional military. Draco, the local firecracker, laughs like Bill just told a funny joke, proving his ego is much larger than his actual tactical common sense. Draco mucks Bill for suggesting a head-on collision with the army, acting like he is the only genius in the room with a hidden trick. Pointing a finger, Draco asks if Bill knows the current location, clearly preparing a gotcha moment that he thinks is far more clever than it is. Bill offers a blank stare, waiting for the punchline because he honestly has zero patience for Draco's dramatic, middle school style games today. The tech readout shows the base relies on high humidity and fans, basically proving it is a very expensive, high-tech version of a damp cellar. Bill notices the soggy dirt and rhythmic pumping sounds, correctly guessing that they are just hanging out in a glorified, depressing basement. Draco slaps his hand to his forehead, labeling the result incredibly dull. He's clearly unimpressed by Bill's thought process, wishing for a bit more action in the secret hideaway. Sarah steps in to interrupt him, ordering Bill to pay attention. She clarifies that this isn't simply some musty cellar they found under a pub. The perspective widens to show the entire crew seated around the lengthy dining surface. Witalo gets ready to spill the truth about Orient's ability to stay alive. The huge revelation arrives. They're currently inside a hidden cavern network stretching underneath the whole territory. No, Wit says, cutting through the general confusion. He has a much bigger surprise waiting specifically for our protagonist Bill. The gigantic blue blueprint lights up, revealing an immense complex. It's a subterranean metropolis, a complete stronghold concealed from the protagonist's view. Bill's jaw drops. A hidden city beneath the ground. He slowly begins to comprehend that Orion isn't just a tiny group of rebels, they've established an entire society living in the shadows. Wit details how these tunnels link up every single part of the kingdom. It's essentially the ultimate delivery system for a revolution. He slams his palm onto Zahir's portrait, his strategy finally taking shape. They'll utilize these tunnels to chase the target like a panicked rodent in a maze. The plan is harsh. They will cut off Zahir and take out his closest advisor sequentially. Wit tightens his wrapped hand, confirming his willingness for this grim business. The goal is straightforward yet horrifying, shattering the enemy spirit by systematically murdering the leaders. These aren't just troops, they're professional assassins. Wit Tyler grins and tightens his grip. This is the ultimate form of sneaky combat, and he happens to be the evil genius orchestrating the whole mess. The setting changes to the practice area where dozens of resistance members are yelling and exercising. The atmosphere hangs heavy with desperation and single-minded focus. Bill stands in the open wielding a training blade, sparring against a wooden target. He's concentrating hard, attempting to transfer his forged precision into fighting skill. He successfully strikes the dummy's wooden limb with force. He is definitely improving, but he still carries that noticeable rookie energy next to the experienced fighters. Bill pauses to catch his breath, scrubbing the moisture from his brow. He appears totally drained, yet refuses to give up, the thought of Seabeer drying him forward. He gets ready for a new round, his gaze becoming sharply focused. He whispers to himself while attempting to lock into a suitable flow with the sword. He manages to land a heavy strike to the dummy's skull, the impact of wood against wood reverberating across the practice zone. The dummy's noggin shakes as Bill steps away. He's definitely trying his hardest, but a highly critical observer is carefully watching his performance. Bill releases his grip, letting the wooden blade drop to the floor with a heavy clunk. He has obviously maxed out his physical capacity for this session. Bahan, the commander with the facial scars, stands far away having observed the entire scene. He remarks that Bill truly has no fighting ability whatsoever, hitting him where it hurts. Barhan props himself on his equipment, advising Bill to reconsider his options. He reminds Bill that the deal was for him to craft gear, and his persistent desire for combat is visibly irritating the commander. The tight shot focuses on Barhan's eye as he issues a grim caution, declaring that Bill's excessive desire for vengeance will certainly be his downfall. Bill simply glances toward the ground, his expression hardening with stubborn determination. He understands his shortcomings, yet possesses enough spite to power an entire arsenal. A wider view captures the two individuals. Bill reaches down to retrieve his practice blade once more, demonstrating his refusal to choose the simpler path. Barhan begins to depart, complaining under his breath that Bill still isn't paying attention to him. He considers his time looking after the novice officially over. "Pay," Bill shouts, causing Barhan to freeze completely. Bill possesses a look in his stare indicating he might have caught something Barhan overlooked. Bill poses an unusual inquiring about how to collect magical energy. Barhan turns back bewildered, completely perplexed by the blacksmith's strange line of questioning. Barhan snorts derisively, suggesting Bill ask a wizard about such topics instead. He assumes Bill is simply desperate to uncover some kind of shortcut to power. Bill quickly clarifies that he means exactly what Barhan did while executing his former apprentices. He specifically references that horrific, incredibly rapid attack. A memory shows Barhan's stick shining with scary blue magic, which Bill definitely noticed, as the power concentrated right at the point for extra pain. Barhan looks like he saw a ghost, sweating buckets and questioning his life, unable to fathom how a regular nobody spotted his secret ninja move. Zooming into Barhan's massive eyeball, he finally understands that he totally misjudged the weirdo hanging out right under his nose. Barhan whispers, "No way, can you actually spot the magic here?" His tone sounding shaky, because if Bill sees vibes, he just leveled up big time. Barhan starts cackling like a total lunatic, feeling super pumped and announcing that a genuine freak of nature is finally on the team. He clutches Bill's arms, flipping his opinion instantly, retracting all the insults about Bill being useless since spotting Marner is basically a cheat code. Barhan strolls along with Bill, feeling much better, muttering that this might actually be fun, having finally discovered a pupil worth his precious time. Barhan grabs a thick cord, mentioning he is swamped currently, having to move some chunky stuff before the actual workout for Bill can begin. The man is a total unit, hoisting a giant net filled with mystery cargo above his skull as if it were light snacks, showing off crazy muscles. Bill stares as the guy hauls that mountain of junk, asking where he is headed, likely puzzled how a person's spine hasn't turned into dust yet. Barhan smirks over his shoulder, saying he is off to hero school, needing to pad his resume to get back into his secret agent gig. There is the lowdown on the new teacher, Barhan, the big boss of the Zeppa Tech Squad, who is definitely not a guy to mess with. Everything changes to a scary castle sitting on a high mound, introducing Count Zahir's neighborhood. The following stop on this very messy road trip, the heavy castle doors creak open, exposing the strict management style of the local Count living inside. A bunch of Zahir's grunts work out in sync, getting told to divide into 3 groups to comb the forest for any suspicious smells. The speed-toting guards shout a big yes sir, looking way more professional and better dressed than those losers Bill punched out a while ago. Looking down from the sky, the 3 teams spread out through the woods, working very carefully to make sure they find every single hiding spot. The troops tiptoe past the heavy trees, searching the bushes for scary traps or surprise parties they definitely did not get invited to attend. The guard freezes up, catching a weird noise in the leaves, knowing he found something but not quite sure if it is a bunny or death. His buddy glares over, and both of them stare at the plants, feeling the awkward silence grow as they get ready to check the shrub. The trio of guards walks toward the greenery with pointy sticks out, doing that stupid thing characters always do right before they die in movies. The guy shoves his long blade into the leaves for a quick test, refusing to gamble with whatever might be lurking inside that suspicious garden. He retreats with a yawn, assuming it was just a squirrel or something, and releases a very annoyed breath because he wasted his energy. He teases his pals about cooking his discovery for a midday snack while he stomps over the crunchy ground like a noisy elephant. All at once, a spooky shadow pops up in the branches, signaling that the trap has sprung while the dummies have no clue what's happening. Draco and his gang drop from the trees, shouting, "We found you. Now prepare for a very bad day." The fight area is a complete mess, the fighters and guards strewn about, while the scent of burned air and ain fills everyone's noses. The crimson-haired boss lady is totally panicking, spotting a giant human boulder emerging from the haze, realizing the ultimate villain has finally arrived. Say hello to Qasim, the Count's favorite henchman, a literal mountain of meat with a mean streak who wants to squash everyone like bugs. The lady figures out that charging forward is just a polite term for dying, seeing her friends thrown like toys and needing a smarter strategy. Gnashing molars while her pupils contract, she spots a tiny silver lining. A path exists, she whispers, pulling her mental faculties back together for the fight. Shouting instructions like a drill sergeant, she commands that group to divide sideways. They are attempting a pincer move to give the behemoth a massive headache. Those insurgents sprint from the edges with a collective howl. It is a messy whirlpool of blades and yelling while they attempt to overwhelm Qasim. Guerrillas pounce, yet Qasim remains stationed like a stubborn peak. These fellers have guts, credit where it is due, but they are playing a dangerous game. The Titan heaves his heavy bat, resembling a demolition crane smashing a bungalow. Freedom fighters are soaring through the sky, though the diversion is succeeding. Big guy is occupied slapping the tiny pests, totally preoccupied with the soldiers directly ahead. He is working headfirst into a very unpleasant snare. That crimson-haired warrior zips around like a caffeinated ghost. She exploits the bedlam to get close, benching from his vision with a quick breeze. Finding her moment, she takes flight. She is gliding through the atmosphere aimed straight at the big man's unaware backside. He feels a disturbance at the final tick, his pupils ballooning as he comprehends a ruse. Bad luck, tall, dark and ugly. She connects a heavy strike against his plated rear. It barely leaves a scratch, but it serves as a flay they anticipated. Floating briefly in midair while radiating mystical power, she hollers, "Go," giving the cue for the actual show to commence. Zooming in on her features, she appears fiercely determined. She gambled her whole being on this ruse, and the burden now falls on Bill. Plummeting while soul starts vibrating, she realizes actual explosive festivities commence right now. Our boy Bill waits far off, appearing remarkably chill. He has hoisted his robotic limb, which is pulsing with an alarming level of juice. He is gathering strength. The limb-based blaster is buzzing with static, and it is obvious that whatever fires next will definitely hurt. Cut to a brief memory of the smithy. Bill examines the cannon configuration, his genius intellect already plotting how to ignore the rules of nature. He asks the head cannon maker a nerd-level query. He suggests they simply soak the gunpowder in magic fuel to create a much bigger bang. The boss, Deshin, stares at Bill as if he has lost his marbles. Mixing sorcery with powder usually just makes the user go poof. Introducing the legend, Deshin, the Blast Master General. He is the professional in all things explosive, and he believes Bill's concept is total lunacy. He rattles off every obstacle, mentioning moisho, fate, and barometric weight. It is essentially a calculus hellscape that no logical human would attempt. Bill smirks while hearing the lecture. The expert confesses that if someone actually succeeded, it would flip the entire battlefield upside down. He inquires if a deity could manage it. His pupils begin to shine. "Hold my beer, friend." Returning to the brawl, Bill whispers a quiet boom. The oxygen surrounding his prosthetic limb spontaneously bursts into flame. The giant flaming orb zips through the meadow. Plus spicy magic. This is not merely a blast. It is a menace on greeting the soul. The brew peaks skyward exactly when his history flashes past. He remains positioned directly inside that lethal area. That inferno consumes the scenery, generating a colossal fungus-shaped cloud of heat that devours the brute entirely. The haze dissipates to reveal charred earth. Bill remains planted, his metallic limb venting steam from the sheer intensity of the detonation. The fighters are speechless. Holy smokes, look at the destruction. They are catching on that the repairman is basically a mobile fortress. Hold on. Something is shifting within the embers. Kasim barrels out of the soot howling, looking toasted but incredibly ticked off. Some fight a Bella's boss while Kasim reduces that space. Our monster starts rampaging while he sprints directly toward his next victim. Kasim whirls his hulking mace with a whistle, moving with a velocity that should be physically impossible for such a bulky fellow. He swats a rebel away like a golfer practicing his swing, clearly acting as the raid boss of this miserable dungeon. Kasim stares daggers at Bill while his blade drips blood, signaling he is finished with games and ready to delete the problem. Bill remains unblinking as he swaps ammo, whispering ice boom while the surrounding air transforms into a frigid winter wasteland. A tremendous wave of azure energy detonates, acting as the polar inverse of his previous assault by instantly flash freezing everything. Combining grenades with frost magic, the blast catches Kasim squarely and coats his heavy plate in sharp, shimmering icicles. Kasim effectively becomes a giant popsicle, stuck mid-sprint and resembling a pricey, albeit very grumpy, piece of lawn art. The ice explodes as Kasim flexes, grumbling about how bothersome it was while shrugging off crowd control like cheap wrapping paper. The behemoth towers over Bill like a creature from a fever dream, yet the small man refuses to budge an inch. Bill inspects his cybernetic palm and realizes his DIY tech is hitting a wall, meaning he needs a massive upgrade to stop this tank. He contemplates his third and final auction while loading the chamber, knowing he has one more ridiculous surprise left to deploy. Shield Bill, the red-headed rebel shrieks while rushing forward to stall for time, well aware he is their only hope for victory. Kasim descends from the heavens like a falling star, pouring every ounce of his massive weight into a singular, devastating strike. Kasim bellows that it is too late for his opponent, making it appear as if the game is finally over for our guy Bill. Terror consumes the girl, who watches the inevitable impact unfold in slow motion while remaining far too distant to intervene. A hand strikes the earth, bellowing Sinkfeng, as the soul obeys the command and begins to twist and shift beneath them. The terrain gapes open directly under Kasim, catching the midday giant as the dirt transforms into a ravenous, hungry maw. Kasim bug-eyes in pure disbelief, clearly having failed to anticipate the literal ground deciding to participate in the fisticuffs. A cavernous sinkhole engulfs the giant to his collarbone in an instant, which is certainly a very literal grounding experience. Bill studies the trap with a blank face, having meticulously calculated the coordinates and executed the trigger with perfect precision. He peered down into the murky abyss to verify the containment of his target, mostly just to be absolutely certain of the result. Sarcastic text mucks Bill as a hiked amateur, showing the rebels are not quite ready to crown him the local champion. Draco the redhead saunters up with a spade, peering as relaxed as a gardener despite just orchestrating a complex battlefield maneuver. Fantastic timing. A rebel yells, clearly astonished that Draco managed to spring such an exact trap at the perfect moment. Draco stares into the hole and gasps, realizing he accidentally snagged Captain Cosmo the Knights instead of a common thug. Draco erupts into maniacal giggles, thrilled that he managed to snare an elite commander inside a common dirt hole. Suddenly, a brilliant pillar of light shoots from the pit, silencing the laughter as the surrounding earth begins to shatter. Cosmo rockets from the depths with terrifying force, leaving everyone baffled by the raw physical might this man possesses. Draco breaks into a cold sweat, struggling to process how Cosmo jumped out of such a hole purely through leg strength. Cosmo hits the ground with a crater-forming boom, looking like an angry demon returning from the depths of the underworld. Cosmo's shadowed face screamed pure rage, a bad sign, like a video game boss hitting his second form and threatening to crush the entire system. His biceps rippled like angry pythons as he vowed to snap Bill's legs, ensuring the boy couldn't escape before all his bones became mere dust. Truly a delightful individual. Bill, however, seemed utterly unfazed, already revving his mechanical arm for round 2, which now pulsed with an aggressive, ice-searing yellow glow. The world dissolved into a whirlwind of incredible speed, the very atmosphere thrumming with an electric anticipation, as two forces geared up for the grand finale. Draco sees Bill and began dragging him off, genuinely questioning the boy's sanity. Since what kind of marksman tries to snatch someone from arm's length, clearly trying to prevent a self-inflicted facepalm? Bill merely offered a serene gaze and replied, "There's one," radiating that unmistakable aura of secret knowledge, a vibe that often precedes somebody getting gloriously clobbered. Bill's mind replayed his early tactics, like the fiery blast and the chilly shockwave, noting they both landed, realizing he was only dipping his toes in the pool before unleashing the full cannonball. Draco peered over his shoulder, completely bewildered, wondering what on earth Bill was babbling about, while the boy himself was already mentally choreographing the next 10 moves. Draco continued sprinting, Bill still clinging to his back, desperately attempting to establish a significant buffer zone between themselves and the increasingly irritated behemoth. Then Draco's tiny mole companion, Muth, let out an impressive squeak and leapt free, arguably the most adorable participant on this chaotic scene, yet clearly also armed with a serious agenda. Draco, still moving at a respectable clip, began sketching a peculiar black streak across the dirt, causing Bill, for once, to wear an expression of pure bewilderment. He flawlessly traced a complete circuit around Bill, the dark energy now softly radiating from the ground, clearly some ominous ritual that screamed, extremely hesitant, "Do not touch." Bill remained rooted in the circle's heart, glancing about as the unsettling realization dawned that he'd just been unceremoniously dropped into a magical, no-go area. Draco then bellowed for everyone to evacuate immediately, sporting the frantic expression of a man about to detonate something explosive and really not wanting any collateral damage amongst his buddies. Dutchin observed from a safe distance, his brow furrowed with concern, muttering that they barely had sufficient forces combined, and now Bill had apparently vanished from the roster. Draco informed Bill that he was clearly too inexperienced to understand his own boundaries, declaring he was taking the reins of the skirmish and unleashing his absolute top-tier performance. Draco drew back his trusty shovel with the reverence usually reserved for an ancient, mythical broadsword, proclaiming, "One shall suffice," sounding impossibly cool for a guy wielding garden tools. He then plunged the shovel into the soil with such incredible power it cracked the very ground beneath, unleashing an enormous shockwave of raw energy. Draco's eyes flared with an intense, amber luminescence as he bellowed the name of his ultimate technique, Pelpit, causing the very earth to let out a theatrical sigh of protest. A colossal pillar of dirt then burst forth from the earth, acting like some kind of geologic elevator, catapulting Kasim skyward on a towering shaft of solid stone. Kasim found himself awkwardly cartwheeling down the sheer face of the colossal earthen spike, for a fleeting moment appearing destined for an unscheduled meeting with the void below. He was absolutely livid, grumbling about yet another bothersome gimmick, vowing to scramble right back up and complete the unfinished business he so desired. The close-up revealed his teeth grinding with such ferocity you'd expect them to shatter, confirming that this fellow was now 99% pure, unadulterated venom. The immense earthen column began to fracture and contort beneath Kasim's substantial bulk, transforming into a mesmerizing, slow-motion cascade of rock and dust. The entire edifice then spectacularly gave way, unleashing an enormous concussive wave and a sky-darkening plume of particulate matter, completely redesigning the local topography. The dense curtain of dust and detritus slowly descended upon the blast zone, ushering in a silence so profound it actually made your ears ring. Draco then swiped the perspiration from his brow, exhaling a triumphant, "Phew, success." Looking utterly spent, as if he'd just completed a triathlon while juggling flaming torches, he surveyed the deserted battlefield, concluding that all the other players had wisely bailed, so he should probably follow suit, deciding the coast was finally clear, or at least, that's what he hoped. He nonchalantly pivoted, assuming the mission was accomplished, swaggering with that unmistakable gait of a protagonist who just saved the day and knows it. Draco suddenly froze mid-stride, his complexion draining to a ghostly white as he slowly glanced back at the wreckage, sensing an anomaly that definitely defied all logical expectations. Bill sprints toward him, hollering about a secret tunnel, while Draco realizes he lingered far too long to revel in his triumph. Draco is losing his cool, squawking that they lack time and must flee immediately because that enchanted dirt is literally dissolving beneath them. He yells at Bill, questioning if he is deaf, since they needed to vacate this dangerous spot 5 seconds ago. Bill stares at the deck with a focused look, murmuring that he agrees while staying weirdly composed for someone about to perish. That fancy magical platform Draco brute is already turning into vapor, and the floor is basically deciding to stop existing under their feet. A bellow erupts from the depths, and surprise, that giant is still kicking and scrambling through the debris like some persistent horror movie villain. The brute is scaling the cliff face with bare hands, roaring that he will squash those pests for making him injured himself so much today. Bill aims his heavy metal arm cannon at the climbing menace, shouting at Draco to find that escape hatch right this instant. Draco keeps shrieking that they must bolt, yet Bill stays locked in, standing firm on the crumbling ledge for one final gambit. Kasim breaches the top and bursts through the smoke with a terrifying yelp, aiming for a flying smash with his oversized club. Bill's eyes glow with a frantic electric blue hue, as he pushes his hardware way past the recommended safety thresholds. Kasim is airborne, his face twisted into a mask of pure homicidal spite, thinking he finally has a brat trap. Bill points his glowing mechanical appendage at the Titan, standing as calm as someone waiting for a bus rather than a lethal brawl. Thunder boom, the blinding arc of roar lightning erupts from his hand with a deafening, reality-shattering crack. A glimpse of Kasim's eyes reveals total disbelief, as he braced for heat or frost but never expected the smithy to pack high voltage. A massive surge of current blasts Kasim midair, and the popping sound suggests his ticker just suffered an extremely nasty short circuit. Kasim plummets into the abyss, his armor smoking with a gaping hole, and he mutters a final word before his internal batteries go dark. Kasim is scored taking a brief snooze, seemingly oblivious to the chaos, but he is about to receive an extremely rude wake-up call. Something just slammed into the floor nearby with enough force to rattle the entire foundation, which is quite a chaotic way to initiate combat. Kasim is already posture shifting, leaping backward while Bill maintains his ground within the haze, looking calm and prepared for Act 2. Bill wears the classic main character expression, ignoring the giant blathering about turning him into powder as if he were just hearing background noise. We get a zoom shot of the giant's sour face while he growls, but he's just making noise so far, lacking the actual teeth to bite. Kasim charges with a red glowing fist, dumping his entire weight into a strike intended to finish things, though he is merely punching shatters. Bill ducks the blow by a hair, acknowledging that the velocity of that punch is no laughing matter and carries serious weight. Kasim flashes a smug, sinister grin while retreating, clearly assuming he has secured the win despite having zero clue who he is fighting. Bill triggers a blast to shroud the getaway, leaving his foe choking in dust while he tactically repositions for better odds. Kasim grinds his teeth in annoyance since his quarry slipped away again, shivering with rage which honestly suits a villainous persona perfectly. Bill and Draco are racing for their lives through the thicket, with Draco screeching about why his partner keeps sabotaging the clean exit. Bill knows they are currently outclassed and refuses to die needlessly, urging Draco to quit whining so they can upgrade for a rematch. Bill already ponders his next mechanical revision, trusting his instincts to maximize the mana reserves and grant the gear a massive spike in power. The boy prattles on about mixing troll juice with magic juice to make things go boom, essentially transforming into a deranged lab geek for pointy sticks. Kasim shouts at the lonely trees for those burrowing jerks to show their faces, his brain completely fried while Bill enjoys the mental meltdown. The duo vanishes like sneaky ninjas and ditches the grumpy titan, because today was merely stretching time before the actual carnage starts. Words on the screen explain how messy the next brawl will get, promising a spicy reunion. At that moment, Bill looks incredibly serious while planning to grab a giant mallet, proving he is just relocating to find better smashers. Someone greets him at headquarters with a pat on the back for a job well done, since overturning a monarchy requires emotional support. Everyone huddles over the map to discuss their near-death experience, feeling quite shaky after seeing how hard Kasim actually hit stuff. Draco looks like he wrestled a llama but still holds his fuzzy pet, while Bill stares at the plans for the upcoming mayhem. He demands the strategy immediately, vibrating with such intense grudge energy that everyone else looks like they are taking a nap. Looking fancy and calm, Wit tells the kid to chill for a minute before he explains how to turn the Count's army into confetti. He moves a little game piece for the sneaky scout squad, marking the transition from just staying alive to performing unwanted medical procedures. The leader claims a massive army is unnecessary for this phase, since a few elite weirdos are better than 1,000 clumsy idiots. With a creepy sparkle in his eyes, he explains that making the enemy wet their pants in anticipation is the primary objective here. He slams another marker down on the board, indicating that the initial beatdown will commence within the eastern woods. The government grunt gets poked from the rear before he can blink, signaling that the quiet killers are finally having some fun. Two blades find a different victim who dies with a pathetic noise, never noticing the dark shapes dancing through the foliage. Jiffing another token, he prepares a northern ambush while treating the enemy forces like disposable pieces in a very violent board game. Someone else gets skewered and leaks all over the dirt, as the resistance forces the invaders to buy every inch of forest with life. Corpses stack up while the survivors freak out, allowing one lucky coward to bolt away so he can describe his nightmare to others. That lonely runner acts as a spark for a massive panic, planning to ramble about forest phantoms to anyone who will listen. Gossip spreads like wildfire through the stone halls, suggesting that even the fancy 7th unit got deleted from existence without a sound. Guards on the ramparts mutter about those annoying tunnel rats, realizing that working in circles is now the deadliest career choice available. Tales of hard travel quickly, causing everyone to fake illness to avoid work, while the army's morale goes straight into the toilet. A pair of night watchmen lie to themselves about having an easy job, though their trembling chins suggest they are actually terrified. Wit thinks to himself that the idiots believe stone walls protect them, which is precisely when they are most likely to get stabbed. A sleepy sentry yawns while waiting for his replacement, completely unaware that eternal rest is currently hovering directly at his back. The floor begins to vibrate like a giant blender, leaving the confused guards to wonder if Mother Nature is angry or something. Draco and his digging nerds sit directly under the foundation, having tunneled inside with expressions suggesting they are about to ruin everyone's week. Men yell for everyone to hit the deck because they think the earth is breaking, having absolutely no idea the rebels are beneath them. A hidden passage slams into the center of the stronghold with a loud boom, allowing the insurgents to skip the front door entirely. Draco is practically howling with laughter, ridiculing the guards for hoping to catch some shut-eye, as Orient completely dominates this mental warfare. Surprise, the rebels bellow while emerging from the supposedly stable earth, turning the fortress interior into a total comedy of errors. Another trooper bites the dust in the eerie midnight hue, proving the Empire has as much chance of safety as a goldfish in a blender. Waitala shuffles his map markers, orchestrating a sudden strike with the precision of a conductor leading a very violent orchestra. A spear through the chest leaves a soldier cold in the mist, illustrating that the infantry is currently less prepared than a toddler at a gala. The camera cruises over the ramparts, where the breeze serves as the only lively company in this desolate, high-altitude snooze fest. The sentry emits a mournful wail, his bloodshot gaze wandering as he hits the ceiling of human tolerance for pure, unadulterated terror. The fortress gate looms large and sturdy, yet thanks to Draco's antics, the real catastrophe has clearly already invited itself inside. The sentry is fighting a losing battle against his own eyelids, proving that chronic insomnia is the ultimate enemy of military discipline. The poor guy finally drifts off into dreamland, leaving the castle's defenses about as secure as a screen door on a submarine. An explosive blast punctuates the air, signaling that the rebellion is shifting into high gear to dismantle the stronghold for good. Kasim returns to bark orders at his frantic patrol units, desperately trying to glue his disintegrating defense together with pure grit. Shadowy and savage, Kasim prepares for a mole hunt, finally snapping after being toyed with like a kitten by these guerrilla rebels. Back at base, Wit watches his prophecy unfold, noting how his scheme compels Kasim to abandon his post for a desperate manhunt. Draco gets giddy thinking they have cornered the boss, but Wit shuts that down faster than a saloon door in a western. Kasim storks through the timber, falling hook, line and sinker for the bait while Wit lets the giant wander in circles aimlessly. Draco inquires why they are stalling, assuming the grand strategy involved snagging Zahir by kidnapping his prized second-in-command. Wit offers a chilly smell, explaining they must snip a few more loose threads before treating Kasim to his final nervous breakdown. Kasim is out there playing amateur gardener in the mud, while Wit chuckles from afar at the absurdity of the whole charade, kicking dust like a toddler. The tactical mastermind curses his luck, hopelessly outclassed by a strategist who treats war like a puzzle. The narrative remains clear, showing that while Kasim plays in the dirt, the snare is tightening around his throat quite nicely. Stealthy silhouettes glide through the urban corridors, marking the second phase of this masterclass in total tactical subversion. The assassins systematically purge the leadership, leaving officers to meet their bloody demise before they can even reach their pillows. Wit breaks down his sinister curriculum, starting with the classic psychological tactic of weaponizing rumors and unfounded paranoia. Next comes the sleep deprivation strategy, leaving the guards looking like zombies who haven't seen a pillow since the previous century. Finally, the officers drop like flies, allowing Wit to dismantle the entire imperial hierarchy from his comfortable desk chair. Kasim once ruled his cohorts through sheer intimidation, lording over them like a self-important monarch on a throne of incompetence. Yet a fresh wave of anxiety robs him of control, leaving him isolated in the shadows as his empire disintegrates into confetti. A broken Kasim rests in the hall, utterly shattered by the realization that he has lost everything to a bunch of phantom insurgents. Someone calls his name and the once mighty leader squeaks out a timid response, sounding more like a toddler in the dark than a warrior. Count Zahir, a connoisseur of dark whispers, was perched in the gloom, casting a rather condescending gaze upon his underling. He casually informed Kasim that chaos was apparently trending, and oh, the gossip was simply delicious. Zahir elaborated, noting the buzz that the rank and file had apparently decided Kasim's leadership was more of a suggestion than an order, essentially delivering a pink slip with extra dramatic flair. Zahir fixated on Kasim with an expression of icy disdain, a look suggesting being dismissed so easily must sting far worse than even Bill's most electrifying zaps to the backside. Kasim, now if human D's are a flop sweat, stammered a frantic defense, stuttering, no, who in their right mind would ever disrespect Kasim, the very paragon of power you, yourself, bandit. Zahir merely uttered a thoughtful thump, while perusing some paperwork, his expression betraying that the verdict was already in for his rather underperforming second-in-command. Zahir gave the report a dramatic, paper-crushing squeeze, which sounded rather like a dying crisp packet. Yeah, he confirmed, a glint in his eye promising a performance review with extremely permanent consequences. Zahir unleashed his wrath, a crimson bolt of pure malice landing into Kasim's chest plate, sending him sprawling with a distinctly untrained session-like thud. Kasim became an involuntary projectile, skidding across the opulent throne room floor, while Zahir, looking about as engaged as someone watching paint dry, casually walloped his very own subordinate. Zahir towered menacingly, a shadow of impending doom, inquiring if Kasim was perhaps suggesting his superior might be incorrect, the air growing thick with an almost comically villainous dread. Kasim, now a puddle of abject misery on the floor with a bit of her mouth bleed, managed a whimpering, no, that certainly wasn't my intention. I do apologize. A truly masterful display of spinelessness. Zahir declared he possessed perfect logical justifications for elevating an intellect like Kasim to such a position of power, essentially confirming Kasim was always just a glorified, single-use wrench. With an accusatory digit aimed squarely at Kasim, he demanded to know if the message had resonated, requiring absolute, puppy-dog obedience before considering whether to allow the big lug another breath. Demonstrate your utility, Zahir commanded, presenting Kasim with a rather stark choice of either a magnificent comeback or a spectacular, terminal failure. Over in the Orient War Room, Wit Tyler wrapped up the briefing, announcing that Kasim had finally been successfully ghosted, thus completing the perfectly wicked mind game. Wit gazed upon the tactical map with an expression usually reserved for tax season, declaring that the clock was officially ticking for Zahir's trusty sidekick, Kasim, and the highly anticipated rematch was ready to roll. Wit then posed the crucial question of who would brave the Kasim challenge this round, noting Selbier's endorsement of Barhan Arena, but insisted on hearing from everyone who survived the inaugural bout. Draco enthusiastically concurred, 1000% agreed. He emphasized, conceding that Kasim, despite his recent career downturn, remained an unadulterated, prey to beast. Draco began to step forward, a reassuring hand settling on Bill's shoulder, stating he would graciously serve as the intermediary between Mr. Barhan and Rena if a choice simply had to be made, a truly noble act of Urka shielding. Yet Bill advanced with an unwavering gait, his gaze blazing with that familiar icy blue glow, declaring, I bet this guy, causing the entire room to fall into an utterly dumbfounded hush. Draco stood utterly flabbergasted, stuttering, what, how, and pray tell, with what magical implements, regarding Bill as if the young man had just announced he could sprout wings and file his own taxes. Draco pointedly recalled that Kasim hadn't so much as blinked at Bill's prior attempts, a previous encounter that could most charitably be described as a rather enthusiastic game of whack-a-mole. Wit Tyler fixed his gaze on Bill, a spark of curiosity in his eyes, observing, well, you two seem to be narrating entirely different sagas, perhaps you have a little surprise hidden. Bill barked. Bill clarified that his prior defeat was solely due to those magic bullets being, shall we say, more of a spur-of-the-moment craft project. The true artisan like himself requires proper equipment for optimal destruction. No, this round is a completely different kettle of fish, Bill declared, his face set with the rigidity of a freshly forged anvil, prepared to unveil the true might of a meticulous artisan with ample preparation. He then dramatically produced a colossal, brand new power cell for his arm cannon, an imposing piece of machinery that screamed factory-grade overkill and promised considerably more bang for his buck. Draco, ever the cautious one, remained unconvinced, pressing, and if that fancy battery still flops, what's the backup plan? Expressing concern Bill might squander their one shot at glory. Wit Tyler nodded in solemn agreement with Draco's apprehension, pointing out that if they whiffed this golden opportunity, who knew when they'd next get a crack at Zahir's notoriously exclusive club. Bill then dramatically slammed his hand onto the table, causing a rather theatrical puff of steam to rise from his fist, clearly signaling his readiness for a truly absurd, pyrola bet. Should I fall short, you can have my right arm, Bill declared, elevating the stakes to a level usually reserved for intergalactic poker tournaments, indicating he'd sacrifice anything for his sweet vengeance. The entire room was plunged into stunned silence by the sudden, anatomical wager, as Draco simply gorked, incoherently stammering, "What? No, I certainly don't require that particular limb." Wit Tyler suddenly erupted into maniacal laughter, completely taken by the outrageous nerve of this fresh face. Wit gave Bill a quick once-over before calling out to the captain, obviously delighted by the chaotic little soap opera Bill had created for the rebels. Bill simply stared back at Wit, mentally agreeing to the game, but internally fuming that the silly armband was no laughing matter. Wit Tyler pressed his palms together, shadows deepening over his face as he grew serious, having officially decided to accept the high-stakes wager. Wit lifted his gaze, a sharp tactical gleam in his eyes, effectively asking what the plan was. Having officially ceded command to Bill for the Casimir match, a breezy sigh drifted across the headquarters as the team mobilized for the upcoming assault, signaling that the final showdown was definitely happening. We observed Casim wandering through a forest clearing, appearing fatigued and isolated, perfectly positioned according to Wit's calculations. Casim froze mid-step, his spidey senses tingling with a feeling of unseen observers. Instantly recognizing he was a prey, he scanned the tree line, his expression hardening into pure venom when he found the hiding spot, noting that they had finally gotten together again. Bill and Draco materialized from the shade, Draco gripping his trusty shovel and Bill powering up his brand new arm cannon, leading Kishum to greet them warmly as mole bastards. Bill began charging the arm cannon, which spun with a mechanical whir, instantly generating 10 times the destructive force of the earlier model. Bill aimed the glowing barrel directly at Casim's sternum, declaring the opening move light boom, kicking off the long-awaited boss battle. Kishum remained standing, the colossal club leaning casually in his grip, arrogantly asking the rebels whether they comprehended why he selected such an unsophisticated tool for combat. The camera zoomed in on Kishum's face as he revealed a truly malevolent grin, poised to offer them an incredibly violent explanation for his weapon selection. Casim charged ahead, brandishing his club in a furious, unrestrained assault, shouting that a blunt instrument was ideal for exterminating bothersome rodents. Draco wasted 0 milliseconds, dropping low and planting his palm in the earth, initiating his unique Sink Fang move designed to create an enormous, swallowing chasm. Casim proved immune to the ploy this time, stomping his foot directly onto the destabilized ground, attempting to resist the collapsing earth with brute force muscle mass. Draco's eyes bulged as he felt the spell weaken, absolutely flabbergasted that a person could escape a magical sinkhole purely through physical exertion. Casim stood firm, his massive muscles bulging as he stubbornly refused to sink into the dirt, completely trivializing Draco's ultimate technique as a silly prank. Draco straightened up, beads of perspiration rolling down his face as he observed the giant's resistance, yelling that the brute was staying put with pure force while Bill prepared his gauntlet nearby. Bill moved into position, extending his mechanical arm forward, and casually remarked that it was high time to see what these upgrades could really do. Bill discharged a blinding, colossal ray of energy from his mechanical arm, which immediately illuminated the battlefield as if someone had flipped a massive light switch. Casim stayed upwards, his features suddenly rendered in brilliant yellow light, completely paralyzed as a huge beam of energy barreled toward his position. Casim braced for impact as a dazzling light engulfed him, shutting his eyes tightly and clenching his jaw, anticipating the inevitable strike. Casim exhaled deeply, profoundly relieved he had managed to avoid a direct hit, as a massive light beam barely missed his shoulder, leaving him slightly burnt but miraculously intact. The tight shot on Bill's eye showed his disbelief as the smoke dissipated. Utterly flabbergasted that Casim worked away from a point-blank blast. An immense cloud of pulverized rock and grime erupted where the attack struck, plunging the battlefield into an awkward silence as everyone held their breath for the outcome. Draco sweated through his clothes while staring at the immense destruction, utterly flabbergasted by the magnitude of power Bill had just demonstrated. Casim strode out of the lingering haze, practically unharmed and twirling his club in boredom, begrudgingly agreeing that Bill was slightly more significant than your average field mole. Draco stepped protectively in front of Bill, grinding his teeth with exasperation, convinced that Casim was disrespecting them and ready to jump back into the fight. Casim charges forward once more, roaring like a startled bear. He raises his enormous club high, yelling a promise to show them exactly who they were dealing with. Draco swiftly spins his shovel around, adopting a defensive posture. He mentally crosses his fingers, hoping this flimsy piece of metal is sturdy enough to withstand a direct hit from the giant. Bill shrieks in pure panic, frantically telling Draco to abandon the block and simply dodge. He knows precisely how much force that oversized toothpick contains. It's too late. Casim's massive club connects directly with Draco's shovel, unleashing a concussive force that ripples through the very air. A tremendous explosion of rubble erupts as Casim easily overpowers the weak block. He smashes the ground with his club, sending Draco flying high into the atmosphere. Draco screams as he is violently tossed backward by the sheer impact. Even his tiny pet looks absolutely horrified by the roar. A controlled power. Casim stands triumphantly inside the massive crater he just created. He appears entirely unstoppable, a truly terrifying mountain of muscle and rage. Both Draco and Bill immediately turn tail and sprint away at full speed. Draco shouts that they are initiating a tactical retreat because immediate regrouping is vital. As they run, Bill explains to Draco that Casim channeled magical energy into his club. Draco stops dead in his tracks, utterly shocked, and asks if Bill can truly perceive Marner. Bill snaps back that there isn't time for a lengthy explanation and orders Draco to focus up, as the giant is already charging again and quickly closing the distance between them. The close-up shows Draco's face contorted in sheer panic as a monstrous shadow looms directly over them. They have completely run out of time to escape. Casim leaps into the air with his club raised high for a crushing overhead blow. Bill and Draco glance up in horror, frantically screaming, and dive back into the comforting safety of the dirt. Casim slams his club down with a thunderous impact, creating a massive crater. Bill and Draco manage to vanish into the burrowed tunnels just milliseconds before impact. Casim furiously grinds his teeth as he glares at the empty holes in the ground. He spits out a furious curse, calling them damn filthy moles for hiding. Casim stands completely alone in the clearing, his enemies having vanished without a trace. He roars at the empty air, demanding they come out and face him like proper warriors. Bill pops his upper body out of the ground, his mechanical arm glowing brightly. He yells "Fire boom," initiating his counter-assault from below. He unleashes a tremendous pillar of fire that shoots straight upward from the hole. The flames instantly engulf the precise spot where Kasim was standing. Kasim is launched high into the air by the force of the explosion. He yells in pain as the intense heat begins to scorch his heavy armor. Close shot captures Kasim engulfed in flames and screaming with pure rage. He is getting completely tilted by these sneaky and frustrating hit-and-run tactics. Inside his tunnel, Bill readies his gauntlet for another shot. He recognizes that a standard output blast won't be sufficient to permanently incapacitate the behemoth. Meanwhile, Draco is shown kneeling in his own tunnel, planting his trusty shovel into the ground. He is setting up another massive earth trap to immediately follow Bill's fiery attack. Draco shouts ground pop just as a giant spike of stone erupts from the earth. The newly formed pill launches Kasim back into the atmosphere for a second time. Kasim is shown falling through the air, wearing an expression that blends annoyance with bewilderment. He absolutely loathes being tossed around like a discarded toy. Kasim slams into the ground hard, generating a huge plume of dirt and debris. The impact resonated, causing the entire nearby clearing to tremble. Draco yells down we go as he quickly plunges his upper body back into the earth, needing to stay concealed to continue evading the giant's wrath. Both Draco and Bill disappear into two different holes in the ground. They vanish into the dark, hidden tunnels just before Kasim regained his footing. Kasim stands there, clicking his tongue in pure irritation. He taunts them by calling them filthy little moles who only know how to cower underground. Kasim infuses his right leg with vibrant blue magic, preparing to stomp the ground with immense power. He plans to collapse the tunnels directly onto their heads. Kasim slams his foot down with every ounce of his strength. A tremendous shockwave ripples through the earth, shattering the surrounding terrain. Back in the tunnel, Bill and Draco are shown getting rapidly buried by falling debris. Kasim's shockwave had caused the roof to collapse right above them. A small graphic mentions Kasim bellowing at the soil dwellers to quit their tunneling and relocate to the top immediately. Kasim launches into the sky with a sturdy wooden stick, pounding the patio to vape the underground crew with smoke. Draco is situated in the dirt, pressing his molars together as stones hit his skin. Deciding that a new maneuver is required, Bill hoists his torso through the grass like a speedy rodent, arriving on the flat landscape to meet the tall fellow. The tight focus highlights Bill's enlarged pupils, which are directed at the large figure occupying his personal bubble right now. Bill stands at Kasim's toes, where the oversized opponent has a giant bludgeon lifted high to turn him into pavement. Draco exits the subsurface area quickly to intercept the wooden swing with his metal spade, acting as a human shield. Draco looks at Kasim and speaks about being the new rival, while Bill gathers blue sparkles into his weapon nearby. Bill remains stationary while viewing the wrestling match between the two, as his lens work like an old steam train. A square of text questions Bill's visual expression, as this marks his initial sighting of glowing blue Marner in action. An early scene shows Whit Tyler asking if Bill has spent his childhood weekends in gladiatorial arenas or fight clubs. Bill provides a negative verbal response, which causes Whit to inquire about where he gets his weapon blueprints from instead. Bill says he utilized literature and interviewed local armed guards, labeling himself as an independent student of magical blueprints. Whit displays a static expression while repeating the word books, appearing completely stationary as he stares at the mechanic. Whit performs a repetitive jaw motion and loud laughter, labeling Bill as a highly unusual character with weird technical habits. Bill shifts his gaze sideways, asking if moving energy is a frequent habit, as he views it as elementary algebra. Whit notes that it is not exactly common, since many fighters swing the hardware without understanding the glowing juice inside. Whit presents a spear with a glowing blue tip, mentioning that simple concentration is a difficult task for meat-headed soldiers. The memory concludes as Bill watches Draco and Kasim engage in a physical struggle on the terrain once more. Draco rotates his gardening implement, vocalizing his official title as he sets his feet for a massive heavy impact. Kasim drives a wooden hammer toward Draco with serious force, while Draco sets a low posture with his equipment. The display shows Draco speaking to himself about directing all internal batteries into stopping this one specific downward swing. Draco is coated in a blue glow, placing 80% of energy into his palms and 20 into his footing. Draco hits the heavy implement with his shovel, producing a large circular cloud of dust and blue energy sparkles. A close-up displays Draco with clamped lips, maintaining his spade's position as if the giant weight was barely noticeable. Draco becomes white in the face as a visual projectile indicator moves toward his stomach area without prior notice. Kasim boots Draco in the sandwich locker while their main weapons are frozen, making Draco emit a sudden groan. Draco travels backward through the clouds from the kick, tumbling like a sack of potatoes across the flat terrain. Draco is pushed across the battlefield floor, creating a long horizontal streak of dirt directly behind his sliding frame. Draco rests without motion on the ground inside a cloud of particles, finished with his current sequence of activities. A close-up reveals Draco's mug, thoroughly bruised and out for the count on the dusty earth. Bill stands, gauntlet in hand, pondering the recent kerfuffle, realizing Kshum's feint was pure genius for flattening Draco. Bill mentally replays the bout, noting Kshum cleverly held back on powering up his club, hence Draco's defense is going kaput. Bill pictures the actual blow, Kshum's right foot nudging Draco, the whole thing a meticulously crafted ruse. Kshum saunters over to Bill, a mocking grin plastered on his face, declaring Bill the last man standing and dubbing him a magic tool mole. Bill tenses, glancing at his gauntlet, figuring he needs serious power to tickle Kshum, but those magic bullets take a sweet time to juice up. Bill eyes the downed Draco, realizing that with his buddy out of commission, there's no one left to buy Bill those precious seconds needed to charge his arm. A little text box pops up, confirming Bill's unfortunate realization. No more time buyers for his fancy mechanical arms charging session. Bill snatches a regular old sword in his left mid, knowing his weak arm won't stop that club, but hey, it's his only option. Bill strikes a heroic pose, his sword blending in the sun, ready to tango with a gargantuan foe without any sneaky stuff. Kasim raises an eyebrow, amused that the smith pulled out a sword, and inquires if Bill's also a dab hand with blades. Kasim lets out a bellow and brings his club down, boldly asserting that Bill's weapons are mere trifles before his mighty club. Kasim brings his club crashing down, but to the giant's utter bewilderment, Bill parries the colossal swing with his ordinary sword. Bill strains to maintain the parry with his sword, his face a mask of exertion, while his mechanical gauntlet on his other arm begins to shimmer. As their weapons lock, Bill unleashes his gauntlet at point-blank range, triumphantly shouting, "Point-blank fi boom." A colossal explosion erupts as Bill blasts Kasim point blank with his cannon, the screen dissolving into a tempest of flames and smoke. A handy text panel appears, showing Kasim's utter shock at being flung backward by a little shrimp. Bill stands firm with his sword, while Kasim marvels that Bill's blade somehow survived his club's onslaught. Bill readies his gauntlet once more, bellowing as boom, capitalizing on Kasim's dazed state. With a mighty blast of frost, Bill encases Kasim in ice, completely freezing him in place. Kasim, now a frozen statue, clicks his tongue in irritation at being momentarily flummoxed. Bill gasps for air. Kasim will soon break free, and there's simply not enough time to crank up the gauntlet's power for a finishing move. Bill charges forward with his sword, deciding he must lop off Kasim while he's still stuck in the frosty predicament. Kasim roars with fury, shattering the ice prison and wildly swinging his club to flatten Bill. Kasim swings his club downwards, but Bill nimbly dodges by sliding gracefully between the giant's legs. Kasim's club slams into the ground mere inches from Bill, completely missing its target. With a swift slide, Bill expertly thrusts his sword into a vulnerable joint in Kasim's lead armor. Bill severs the joint, causing a splash of blood, proving he could indeed bypass the sturdy plate. Kasim stumbles to one knee, groaning in agony, utterly incredulous at being bested by a mere blacksmith. Draco, nursing his aches on the ground, chuckles heartily, realizing Barjon was spot on about Bill's latent awesomeness. Draco ponders in a text box how Bill perceives magical currents and crafts gear that is basically top-tier wizardry. Standing firm with his blade and gauntlet, Bill resembles a legendary fighter primed to wrap up this messy business. The caption notes Bill convincing himself that even items packed with raw mana can be sliced apart by his steel. Zooming in on Bill, his pupils are shining with an intense sapphire hue reflecting total concentration. Bill dashes ahead, fixating purely on Kasim's physical vulnerabilities to settle this brawl once and for all. Kasim stands utterly baffled, gripping a nasty gash on his leg while struggling to accept injury from a mere tinker. Bill holds his ground, panting but looking sharper than ever as Kasim fumes about losing pride to some annoying rookie. Kasim slams his massive stone boulder with earth-shattering force, enraged by the realization that a brat outplayed him. They square off in the clearing while dust drifts away, Kasim finally grasping that this task is far beyond routine. A focus on Kasim's eyes shows him rethinking tactics as his brain gears grind to halt his playful amateurish approach. He roars about ending his sloppy defense and surges forward with enough crushing weight to scare the living daylights out of anyone. Bill stares wide-eyed at the charging behemoth, his face displaying that classic realization that his rival is finally playing hard. As Kasim radiates a violent azure aura, Bill notes aloud that the commander is cranking his power levels way up. Kasim spins his club frantically, yet Bill channels his inner gymnast, leaving the shocked giant yelling about these impossible dodges. Rather than sprinting, Bill lets his mechanical glove hum with a crimson heat, signaling that the engine is primed. A massive burst from Bill rockets Kasim backward, a sudden display of kinetic force that completely resets the tactical standing. Bill skids across the soil to stabilize, staying out of reach because one direct impact would surely turn him into jelly. Rushing back in with his sword raised, Bill refuses to grant Kasim even a heartbeat of time to regain his composure. The giant barely parries the blade with his heavy stone weapon, turning the skirmish into a desperate dance amidst the debris. A mechanical overview shows the gauntlet shaking and clicking like a lethal alarm clock attached to Bill's own forearm. Bill triggers a localized blast at his feet to launch himself away, demonstrating combat maneuvers typical of a clever engineer. Bill connects with a solid strike to the off-balanced giant, yelling that he finally decoded the rhythm of these massive limbs. The explosion slams right into Kasim's face, proving that even a tiny underdog can leave a massive bruise of seeing stars. Standing amidst the smoke like a coal furnace, the boss looks completely unhinged as he enters a total rampage state. He hollers insults while rushing through the embers, fueled by a level of rage that defies all basic biological logic. A gruesome shot of his distorted face shows veins popping as the commander loses his remaining grip on sanity. The club swings with enough momentum to displace the air, placing Bill square in the path of a building leveling strike. Bill's eyes ignite with blue light as he identifies the fiend, sensing the subtle trap within the theatrical swing. Predicting the real strike, Bill fires an icy gauntlet blast to counter, completely schooling the seasoned Imperial commander today. Bill forces his blade through the enemy plate armor, hearing the steel scream as he carves into the vulnerable gap. The gauntlet blasts again, as Bill pulls every sneaky trick from his dusty textbook to keep the massive giant reeling. Kasim gets toasted in a fiery boom, proving those moles are absolutely crushing this hunting match right now. Locked in a gritty struggle, Bill tries cracking that club defense while the crunching noises signal pure muscle fatigue. Kasim bellows as Bill lands another brutal wallop, leaving the bleeding giant looking about as stable as a house of cards. Sent tumbling backward from that heavy strike, the prideful brute stumbles through the dirt with his ego bruised worse than his ribs. Bill sticks the landing with professional flair, looking less like a rookie apprentice and more like a seasoned arena champ. Gripping his gushing arm with a stunned look, Kasim realizes he's actually losing this brawl to a mere mortal. He glares at Bill, shouting insults about magic, baffled that this guy's wrecking him without even touching a drop of Marner. Inspecting his buzzing gauntlet, Bill mutters that his wild science theories are actually turning into a winning strategy today. His variables hold steady as Bill launches another shot, basically beta testing his lethal new gadgets on a grumpy bus. The blast detonates right near Kasim, allowing Bill to dictate the dance and keep the oversized target exactly where he wants. Bill huffs while his arm steams, knowing his overheating tech is dancing dangerously close to a complete mechanical meltdown. Kasim grunts while dodging quick potshots, finally starting to sync up with the annoying rhythm of that metal launcher. A close zoom on his glowing eye reveals Bill shifting into analytical mode, punting for the winning glitch in his enemy. Brace yourself, Bill whispers as Kasim boots his speed with fancy magic, signaling the start of the final showdown. A massive fog of snow and dirt erupts as they collide again, cranking the tension up to a blistering level. Bill gracefully sidesteps a swing, noticing that following Marner trails makes this high-stakes fight feel like a slow-motion cartoon. He spots the truly dangerous moves, but since the giant is basically a magical neon sign, Bill is the perfect counterplay. Landing a low hit, Bill thinks these shallow strikes are enough to steadily whittle down the behemoth's thick health bar. with eyes blazing in pure focus. Bill dodges a club swing like a hungry predator stalking a very clumsy dinner. Kasim manages a glancing hit that knocks Bill off kilter, proving one tiny lapse can turn a victory into a headache. Laughing, Kasim mucks his blade work is too dull for real armor, betting his thick hide will outlast those fancy toys. Bill smirks at his sword, confident that his handcrafted blade matches the legendary quality of any hero's shining steel. Thinking fast before the giant evolves, Bill charges back in, determined to finish this before his opponent gets any smarter. Time to go all out, Bill decides, flooding the area with rapid-fire bursts to keep the grumpy giant completely overwhelmed. Bill slides a clean cut across the midsection, finally identifying the soft spots hiding behind the bulky plate armor. Kasim flashes a disturbing, blood-stained grin, wearing that classic expression which screams he is about to do something unhinged. The giant recklessly absorbs a blast to the face, using his own sturdy skin as a shield to close the gap. Kasim tosses Bill upward like a bag of garbage, shifting the momentum back in the massive brute's favor instantly. Noticing the shots fizzling out, Kasim cackles about the dwindling power, realizing his enemy is finally running low on steam. Bill touches down and shifts into survival mode, knowing that dodging that blade is his only path to not becoming a kebab. His bullets are ghosting him, but the peril is definitely staying for dinner. Bill reconsiders his assessment of Kasim as a mere dimwit, feeling a strange dash of respect. He suspects the giant might have already decoded his entire defensive strategy. Kasim coats his frame in shimmering marna, lighting up like a rave attendee in a blue neon suit. He is clearly aiming to wrap this party up with a big finish. The giant vanishes into a blur of motion, leaving Bill guessing which direction his inevitable beating we arrive from. He is basically flying blind against the massive blitz, charging through the haze like a caffeinated rhino. The commander leaves Bill guessing whether he is about to catch a boot, a club, or a heady forehead. Bill tries to calculate his survival odds while the giant shadow overhead makes him feel like a snack-sized portion of lunch. Kasim roars like a malfunctioning lawnmower as he closes the gap, the very air around them shivering from his aggressive bad attitude. A thunderous, crown-crunching blow descends from the giant, looking for all the world like a direct hit on our favorite punching bag. Plot twist, the giant looks baffled because he only smashed a metallic arm that Bill tossed into the path as a very expensive piece of bait. A massive gauntlet eruption sends the giant tumbling, as Bill masterfully turns his robotic limb into a high-octane firework display. Bill's trusty blade skids into the dirt, humming from the impact as he stands there totally disarmed but miraculously still drawing oxygen. Kasim rises while cursing like a sailor, clearly salty that a lowly crafter would sacrifice a fancy robot limb just to pull off a cheap parlor trick. Battered and caked in grime, Bill looks like he crawled out of a trash compactor, yet he still stares down the giant with defiant eyes. The gauntlet is currently throwing a temper tantrum, leaking sparks and bad signals like a cheap smartphone in a thunderstorm. This is definitely not ideal. Striding forward, Kasim keeps chanting his own nickname like he is trying to convince a stadium of his greatness despite the recent facial. He keeps pace, droning on about his own legend as if repeating it enough times might eventually make the lie feel like a solid fact. Eyeing his abandoned sword, Bill realizes that losing his last bit of kit to this buffoon would be a truly humiliating end to his quest. Kasim looms large, casting a shadow that stretches for miles while he enters a full-blown ego-fueled vacation in his own brain. Like a skyscraper made of spite, the giant towers over Bill, providing a classic visual for anyone who likes the stories with a dash of imbalance. Kasim chuckles, claiming he finally recalls that Bill's messy fighting style is just too clumsy for a lowly metal basher to ever master. He waves his club, asking if Bill is the lunatic smith who tried to ice the Lord Protector, letting the cat fully out of the bag. Bill grits his teeth while clutching his mangled arm, forced to swallow a heap of propaganda that tastes worse than a stale sandwich. The caption box reveals Count Zahir's input, proving that the local rumor mill is churning out lies faster than a factory in overdrive. A flashback highlights a fancy emblem, reminding us that Zahir used to brand Bill as a golden child of the Volturian manufacturing scene. Kasim rants about Bill's history as a glorified toolmaker, acting like the Empire deserves a thank you card for letting him hold a hammer. The vision shows a legendary blade, while Kasim whines that Bill was just a pretentious snub who refused to mass-produce cheap shiny trinkets. The flashback features Zahir labeling Bill as stuck-up artisan, mostly because he refused to mass-produce cheap junk for ever-passing adventurer. The fiction gets wilder as Kasim claims Bill went totally unhinged after failing a bank heist. This guy should clearly be writing fantasy novels instead. Kasim stands tall, praising Oliver's saintly patience for letting such a villain work free, proving that gaslighting is his true professional calling. He shouts that Bill is a spineless traitor and a total menace, clearly suffering from a severe case of main character syndrome based on pure delusion. Big Bad Kasim acts like he is some holy lawman for the Count, which is honestly just a top-tier comedy skit. Capital punishment incoming, so the lug lifts his mace to squash Bill into a messy pancake right in the mud. Drool is flying everywhere as he bellows about executions, proving the poor fellow finally dropped his last remaining marble. The giant pauses his swing mid-air, having spotted that Bill's discarded blade is currently radiating a suspiciously bright, blinding aura. Zooming in on Kasim's baffled mug, Bill remarks that Zahir was a compulsive liar, which is a pretty spicy burn. Bill grabs his weapon which is now beaming like a menace sun, mentioning that Zahir's allergy to the truth remains incurable. Shocked and confused, the brute wonders how the blade was retrieved, finally seeing that the little guy is still feisty. The hulking mess snaps and declares an immediate slaying, screaming like a banshee while diving forward for one last reckless tackle. A quick memory shows Zahir's fancy home, exposing Kasim's desperate need to bad Bill just to earn some gold stars. The big oaf bows to his boss, fantasizing about being the favorite pet, though he's really just a desperate ladder climber. He envisions becoming the Count's legally recognized child, proving that massive fatherhood traumas are his only fuel in this scuffle. Bill pumps power into his metal glove, making the deer scream in a high-pitched whine as he prepares his ultimate move. The beast sprints forward with a wood-shattering yell, knowing the single moment will decide who bursts home in a bucks. Bill lets it rip, unleashing a searing explosion from his fist that heads the commander's ugly face from zero distance away. Everything goes pure white as a massive surge of power washes over the scene, making it impossible to see anything else. Embers and flames dance as the strike connects, and that sizzle suggests the large man's internal circuitry just quit for good. The glow gets even crazier, masking both combatants in a blinding flash that resembles a tiny sun exploding in the trees. Bang! A towering spire of heat rockets toward the clouds, meaning Kasim is cooked and the little mole definitely broke the pain. The haze clears to show Bill perched in a giant hole, looking somewhat worse for wear but mostly like a storm survivor. Seeing the mess from above, it is clear that blow was serious business, leaving the earth torn and the sky filled with bits of dirt. Looking down at the point of contact, things are pulverized in a tidy round shape, showing that Bill's gear is insanely high quality. There lies the loser, plumped into a sad pal, looking more like a mountain of junk than a scary military leader anymore. Bill emerges from the swamp like a total legend, dragging his tired feet because that last desperate move took every bit of his energy. His footwear makes a grinding sound in the gravel as he nears, with only the hum of his robot limb filling the quiet air. Bill glares at the fallen giant with an icy stare, keeping his blade ready in case the big lug tries any more funny business. Thinking to himself, Bill is glad his risky plan worked, since he had to wing it without charging up, and it was a success. The sneaky tactic involved stressing his broken blood to trigger that blast, a dangerous gamble that nearly cost him his entire right arm. The short hero stands victorious over his massive foe, having swapped places with the bully who insulted his height just a moment earlier. He repeats those insults about being a criminal, making it clear he has heard enough of the Empire's stinky, biased lies for today. Bill gives a chilly look, whispering that the guy is clueless, while his weapon catches the very last rays of the evening sun. Let us revisit the past to discover how this titan turned into a monster. Seeing as the fellow had been a hulking, mono-eyed freak who seemingly arrived via a UFO from Mars. Since his appearance was essentially a working jump scare, aligning was impossible, leaving him as a solitary fellow with a mug only a blind mother could love and no residence. Honest truth reveals that folks initially wet themselves in terror, yet eventually they mocked him, viewing his massive frame as dangerous before realizing he was just a giant, nervous poodle. He evolved into the village's preferred biological stress ball, and observing this unit get harassed by Talu's half his height is painful since he refuses to throw a single punch. Some ginger lady shrieks at him, demanding why he possesses such a resting grouch face, acting like a complete menace because he is basically a defenseless, human-sized Bernardiferer. The big guy attempts a creepy, skin-crawling smirk, which backfires tremendously, and though he intends to be friendly, the local jerks are definitely not interested in his pathetic peace offerings. A dude bellows, "What is so funny, you weirdo?" while launching a violent boot into his ribs, yet our hero just stands there, peering like an even bigger dork due to his patience. These idiots cackle as the giant trips over his own lumber supply, ridiculing his cheerfulness after a verbal threshing, confirming that certain humans are simply destined to be total garbage bags. Situations deteriorate as some hoodlums demand a lumber tax, offering the standard choice of cash or a face full of knuckles, clearly praying that he selects the violent physical assault option. The man drops his noggin, accepting his miserable destiny, and quietly mutters that he will take the threshing, having been utterly shattered by the endless cycle of cruelty. The head hooligan flashes a gross, happy grin, feeling legitimately pumped to assault someone who refuses to defend himself, which is about as pathetic as a person can possibly be. The giant face splints into the lawn while they use him for sucker practice, making fun of his tanky build and claiming he can take it since he lacks normal human feelings. Their assault persists while they insist he is a subhuman creature, stripping away his dignity only to feel justified in being complete and total jerks to him. Finally growing weary, they order him to return to his lib before sunset, throwing in some cruel jabs about his hungry relatives just to ensure they hurt his feelings properly. He drags his bruised carcass off the ground and trots through the grass, feeling like he was hit by a truck, yet holding on to his singular motivation for staying alive. Behold his cherished kin, who are actually just a bunch of adorable bunnies, and since he named every single one, they are the only creatures on earth that tolerate him. Dropping to his knees to stroke them, he whispers softly that they look so tasty, which is a terrifyingly strange compliment for pets, but at least he is smiling now. He grins while hoisting a fluff ball and offering some salad, thinking that having these fuzzbutts means he will never be truly alone. Securing a tiny moment of zen in life, the guy sprawls out on some hay with his lanyard pals, peering satisfied, but we all know the serene vibe is destined to be ruined by something horrible very soon. Daylight breaks the following morning, yet chaos is cooking in the town, because the government is hiking the bills, leaving the peasant folk feeling like their wallets are being strangled. A senior citizen bellows that due to the current military conflict, even more gold is required, as the empire is essentially vampire sucking the public dry to pay for their conquest. The locals are understandably furious, whining about another battle right after the Demon King Sarkar, especially since the finances are a dumpster fire and the leader is just adding gasoline. Some fellow looks horrified, questioning how they will pay for rent this cycle, while everyone is incredibly grumpy, which spells disaster for any person who does not look normal. Our massive hero wanders through the market with his snacks when a voice shouts his name, causing him to freeze up, peering like a deer caught in high-beam headlights. The criminal snatches him and begins a brawl, and since he's getting pummeled once more, it appears his expensive food is about to be forcefully donated to the local jerks. The hoodlums vanish with his lunch, giggling about their upcoming feast, essentially robbing a man who is probably one missed meal away from turning into a literal skeleton himself. The giant is left scooting through the mud, peering like a total sad sack, committing to his pacifist lifestyle to such a degree that it makes the audience want to scream. He clings onto a tiny scrap of cards or a lonely spud, muttering that he finally succeeded, overjoyed that he can still provide a meager snack for his fluffy relatives. He strolls through the desolate alleys, reasoning that if his bunnies are fed, he is satisfied, acting as the world's most selfless dork in a way that is genuinely depressing. He notices some local tiny humans playing outside, resembling his younger self before the bullying started, and he gazes at them with a look that screams major emotional trauma. Some pine-sized professor claims that minions are actually kin, basically suggesting that lacking a genetic squad automatically makes you the local neighborhood villain. This diminutive toddler mumbles a rejection through his tears, evidently experiencing the exact same abandonment that previously plagued poor Kasim. Kasim freezes as that domestic term rattles around his skull, eventually concluding that his floppy-eared bunnies are his loyal cult-like disciples. Observing the toddlers, he decides human relations are incredibly confusing, much preferring the simple company of his carrot-munching, furry roommates instead. A bright lunar orb hangs amidst drifting vapors on a deceptive evening, right before a nasty surprise ruins the tranquility for everyone. Kasim wears a look of absolute, soul-crushing terror, tripping over his syllables while witnessing a sight that will permanently mess him up. Strolling into his garden, he spots several dudes chilling by a blaze, one guy acting suspiciously nonchalant considering the messed up situation. Skewering his pets over flames, the jerk mucks him by suggesting he share the protein, creating a scene of peak emotional trauma. A greedy jerk gobbles down the pets, teasing Kasim for hoarding snacks during a famine, effectively devouring the man's only source of joy. To her crimson filter, we see Kasim lose his marbles, transitioning from a shy big guy to a lawnmower of death instantly. Shift to a courtroom where a shackled Kasim hears his sins, apparently involving a murderous spree that piled up quite a high body count. Your life ends here, the magistrate declares, but the giant remains silent and defeated, not even bothering to argue his own case. He welcomes the executioner with a shrug, thinking a permanent nap is okay since his bunny-filled world has completely gone to the dogs. Out of nowhere, some fancy footwear enters a room, and a loud voice demands to know who authorized this career retirement party. Enters Zahir, admiring the fact that Kasim punched out 6 guards and flattened 24 dudes, clearly valuing brutality over actual legal ethics. The villain stares down at the prisoner, spotting untapped powerhouse potential, and suggests that the giant should join his payroll immediately. The specific terms, minion and household pop up visually, while Kasim tries to digest the very first compliment he has encountered in his miserable existence. The big guy looks up hopefully, wondering if he just got adopted, but honestly, Tahir is a total fraud using the classic corporate family scam. Offering a phony grin, the manipulator promises eternal companionship, effectively tricking a powerhouse into servitude by dangling a little bit of fake affection. Returning to now, Bill squares up against a furious titan who bellows about his devotion to the Count, showing his brainwashing is still holding. Bill tries to object but gets interrupted, as the oversized antagonist squeezes his weapon hard enough to make the wood scream in agony. A guttural shout erupts from Kasim, vibrating the nearby foliage, because he's Tinfruk, the monster yells while charging, fully believing he is defending his only true friends, which makes his strikes incredibly spicy and lethal. Blown back by pressure wave, Bill realizes the big lug has hidden reserves, desperately trying not to get deleted by the glowing energy. Chattering his pearly whites, Bill commands his tired limbs to function, focusing his intense gaze on the massive problem standing right before him. The giant howls at the heavens while prepping a massive downward swing, making it look like Bill is about to become a human pancake. A heady blow descends, yet the club hits a fancy sword instead, creating a fireworks display of friction as the two weapons collide. Golden sparkles and debris fly everywhere, signaling that a legendary protagonist has just logged in to carry the team through this difficult level. This new fighter touches down in the rubble, leaving the giant completely baffled that someone actually managed to parry his maximum effort overhead swing. Kasim stared, his eyes wide as dinner plates, through the swirling dust. He just encountered someone who could dish out his own power. No sweat required. A statuesque blonde in gleaming golden armor struck a battle-ready pose, looking absolutely magnificent, and her expression suggested she was already thoroughly bored with Kasim. Lying on the ground, Bill gazed up in utter amazement, a bewildered "who is that?" escaping his lips, completely blindsided by his unexpected rescuer. With a cool, cheeky grin, the woman advised the giant that mastering a skill was essential for reaching her caliber, essentially calling him a brawny, brain-free elf. Kasim fumed, scuffing at her for discarding her weapon, muttering, "What a doofus," leaving her defenseless, completely oblivious to her true identity. The close-up revealed her hand firmly grasping the hilt of an even more elaborate second sword, confirming she was a formidable dual-wielder just warming up. Kasim bellowed, "I'll finish every last one of you." As he charged, his temper officially gone, ready to turn the entire vicinity into rubble. The woman moved with a shimmering blur, her speed so astonishing she dodged Kasim's wild swings as if she were gracefully dancing. The dazzling golden radiance exploded outward as he countered, the energy blast so potent it completely washed out the entire visual. She unleashed a light and quick kick to Kasim's jaw, her lead blazing with energy, leaving the colossal figure utterly outmatched by her speed and precision. Kasim then went sailing into a rocky outcrop, utterly battered, scorched, and utterly baffled as to how he'd been so swiftly dispatched. The golden warrior turned to Bill, casually remarking, "Came to grab you, newbie," acting as if this epic clash of titans was merely a quick errand. Bill swayed, his head swimming, whispering, "You're with Orion." Finally grasping he'd just met a significant player from the rebellion, the woman told him to snap out of his daze. Newbie, as the unconscious Kasim lay in the background. The fight was over, a complete annihilation. The scene dissolved as Bill's awareness faded, catching a glimpse of sunlight through a small pane of glass, a beacon of eventual safety. He experienced a feverish vision of Sepia reaching out with a friendly smile, murmuring incoherently in his sleep, the ordeal's effects lingering. Bill jolted awake to find the actual Sepia hovering over him, utterly bewildered, whispering her name as if she were an apparition. Suddenly, a booming, "Hey, Bill," accompanied by heady thuds shattered the peaceful atmosphere, someone crashing in with zero regard for privacy. It was Draco, standing in the doorway wielding a shovel and a wide grin, announcing Bill's awakening, officially crushing Sepia's quiet moment. Sepia drew back, peering slightly flustered, while Bill let out a weary groan, still swaddled in bandages but thankfully whole. Draco, flushed and fidgeting, waved his hands wildly, stammering, "Whoa, it's not what it seems." Clearly getting ahead of himself, Sepia informed Bill he'd been unconscious for 4 full days and that concern was mounting, urging him to get dressed and join them when he felt up to it. Draco piped up, relaying that the deputy commander urgently wanted to speak with him, thus ending any lingering notion of a leisurely recovery. Bill and Draco entered a vast office dominated by towering bookshelves, where a commanding voice from behind the desk declared, "You're awake at last." They were introduced to Sylvia Orient, the deputy commander of Orient, possessing an authoritative demeanor akin to a stern headmistress, and an unnerving ability to predict Bill's future. She declared that Bill now understood the futility of his solitary endeavors, attempting to recruit him by leveraging his recent brush with oblivion. Sylvia presented him with a reward for apprehending Custom, the choice of which unit he wished to join, a remarkable advancement for a newcomer. Bill looked utterly bewildered, admitting, "I don't even know what units Ryan is yet." Still uncertain about this group's true alignment, Sylvia dismissed his concern, launching into a full briefing as soft, golden light bathed the background, lending the scene an air of official privieters. Kicking things off was Barhan's lightning assault unit, the spearhead contingent that initiated combat and fractured enemy formations with sheer force. Next up, Leaner's covert ops team, the stealthy ninjas of the spy world, who secretly orchestrate victories and deliver knockout blows. Then, we have Zudra's mobile medical unit, the battlefield medics who stitch up the wounded and send them back into the fray. Bless their hearts. Following that, Basfar's demolition squad, the masters of boom and booby traps, who clear the path and blast anything standing in the way. Finally, Draco's subterranean strike force, the earth-burrowing specialists who bring down fortifications from beneath, and Draco seems quite pleased with his crew. Sylvia, standing by her console, suggests Bill select one of these 5 elite branches. Her gaze intense as she awaits his decision. She offers a subtle, assured grin, prompting Bill to ponder which path beckons, as this choice will chart his destiny within the rebellion. Bill glances upward, his expression a mask of intense contemplation, signaling his ascent from mere cracksman to a bona fide warrior, and we all hold our breath for his declaration. Sylvia Orion generously offers Bill carte blanche to join any prestigious corps, yet Bill throws a curveball, looking her straight in the eye and politely declining, stating none of the available units quite align with his personal flair. However, Bill isn't being conceited. He concedes his solo revenge quest might be beyond his current capabilities, acknowledging his limitations while sketching out a distinct strategy for his future endeavors. Sylvia appears slightly taken aback, tilting her head as she inquires about his precise intentions, questioning his alternative plan if he's not joining the main force. Bill stands resolutely, announcing his desire to forge a brand new division, leaving Sylvia quite astonished, evidently not anticipating the novice would request his own command so promptly. Bill places his fist over his heart, his resolve radiating outward, articulating his wish for an independent contingent that answers solely to him, rather than being a mere cog in the Orion hierarchy. He clearly states his aspiration to assemble a distinct unit, demonstrating his ambition to construct his ultimate ensemble from the ground up. We're whisked back to Bill's workshop, where his former protege, Tom, observed him diligently. Tom was always fascinated by Bill's uncanny ability to pinpoint the finest ores with a mere glance. Bill remembers Tom probing him about his technique for identifying top-tier materials. Back then, Bill lacked the satisfactory explanation that a layperson could grasp. Bill now understands that his unique knack isn't something that can be imparted in a conventional educational setting. It's an intrinsic connection to his surroundings that most individuals simply overlook. The scene zooms in on a martyr gem, pulsating with vibrant azure energy. To Bill, this isn't just a stone, but a dynamic conduit of might and latent capability. Bill clarifies that people share a remarkable similarity with minerals, suggesting that with focused attention, one can perceive qualities that escape the notice of ordinary observers. His perspective shifts, revealing the world as a tapestry woven with shimmering blue and white monoflows, as he scans the gathering, searching for those radiating a distinct essence that sets them apart. The name Roar echoes as we are introduced to the inaugural candidate for Bill's nascent company, the Hold Roar, a towering figure adorned with green spectacles, exuding an aura of roar strength, who appears undeniably cool, yet harbors a curious deficiency. The description notes his innate mage talent, but here's the punchline. He's utterly incapable of wielding magic, akin to a supercar with a dead battery. We witness Roar's futile attempts at spellcasting amidst the diligent efforts of others, culminating in nothing more than a pathetic sputter, rendering him a veritable magical dud, a fact increasingly apparent to those around him. Despite his persistent lack of success, his fellow rebels offer unwavering encouragement, urging him to persevere, and he's become a sort of unofficial mascot for the establishment. Everyone cheers him on heroically as Roar strikes a pose, yet still without conjuring a single spark, a scene that is both endearing and profoundly exasperating to witness. Eventually, he garnered a manga that's more fitting, the Cheer Up Wizard, a title that screams participation trophy. Roar finally cracks, lamenting his inability to activate his magic, despite his dedicated efforts, and the frustrating lack of tangible results. Bill approaches him, delivering a candid assessment, informing Roar that his mana conduits are obstructed at his fingertips, explaining the root cause of his spellcasting failures. Bill elaborates that this is an inherent physical characteristic with which Roar was born. Standard instruction won't rectify a fundamental physical limitation. He's heard the impossible verdict more times than he can count. Bill, ever the quick thinker, proposes a rather unorthodox solution, suggesting the fellow channel his mystical energy through his mouth instead of his digits, truly thinking outside the conventional magic box. Roar is utterly bewildered, echoing Bill's suggestion about casting through his mouth as if he'd just instructed him to battle with his own ankles, finding the entire notion utterly preposterous. Roar dismisses Bill's unsolicited counsel, clearly irritated by the peculiar advice, having grown weary of receiving suggestions that are, to him, entirely unworkable. Bill then throws down a gauntlet, pointing out that Roar has absolutely nothing to lose at this juncture, thus posing the ultimate persuasive question, why not just give it a whirl? Taking a profound inhalation, Roar begins to shimmer with a gentle emerald luminescence, indicating he's actually willing to entertain the outlandish mouthcasting hypothesis. He emits a mighty expulsion of air as a wave of intense warmth radiates from his core, signaling a completely novel and rather startling internal experience. Tiny incandescent embers and shimmering light begin to spill from Roar's lips as he intensely focuses, and Bill's unconventional notion starts to resemble a stroke of genius. With a tremendous vocalization, he unleashes a towering column of incandescent flame directly from his gullet, an astonishing display of untamed power that makes his previous hand-based efforts seem utterly feeble. Roar is left amidst the swirling remnants of smoke, looking utterly flabbergasted, contemplating the recent turn of events and realizing his magical ineptitude stemmed not from a broken spirit, but from an incorrect discharge point. He promptly crumples, heaving and gasping for breath, to which Bill wisely observes that these are merely the standard after effects of extreme water depletion, quite typical for a novice pushing such considerable power. The subsequent aspirant is Alir, a strikingly beautiful elven combatant who appears as if she were lifted from a military recruitment advertisement, though she, much like Kor, harbors a secret affliction. Alir has languished in the rudimentary stages of training for ages, incapable of even the most rudimentary manipulation of mystical energies, a profoundly embarrassing predicament for an elf, typically innately gifted in sorcery. Her demeanor is one of deep despair, her hands clasped to her head as she ponders her utter inability to perceive any magical currents, desperately wishing to contribute but feeling like a useless encumbrance. Observing her from a distance, Bill notes her dejected posture, already meticulously analyzing her energetic signature to discern the underlying cause of her struggles. Bill's internal rumination clarifies that while innate magical aptitude is a rare commodity, there exists an even more elusive quality that most individuals completely overlook. We are presented with an ethereal image of a figure prostrate, enveloped in a radiant golden effulgence, signifying the manifestation of divine power, a superior echelon to conventional magical force. It transpires that Alir wasn't a failed sorceress. Rather, her energetic resonance was simply different, enabling her to perceive and engage with celestial energies, a force beyond the grasp of most earthly beings. Bill contemplates the fundamental constituents of a truly effective collective, asserting that superior strength arises not from assembling 5 exceptionally potent individuals, but from cultivating a harmonious amalgamation of distinct proficiencies. A clandestine collection of armaments is depicted in the deepening shadows, underscoring the principle that varied capabilities are the bedrock of resilience, a philosophy Bill is meticulously applying to assemble his Carter. Bill is depicted in a state of profound contemplation, his azure eyes emitting a subtle glow, having finalized his selection of individuals, a unique assembly of outcasts whose potential only he truly comprehends. Foremost among them is Draco, the versatile operative adept at ensnaring adversaries and maintaining the team's agility, functioning as the indispensable adhesive that stabilizes the entire combat theater. Following him is Roar, the formidable offensive asset, whose mouth serves as a prodigious channel for long-range pyrotechnic assaults, effectively functioning as the unit's localized ordnance deployment. Subsequently, we have Alir, the crucial support specialist, endowed with the capacity to mend her companions and reinstate fallen warriors to the fray through her celestial endowments. Finally, there is Bill himself, an agile mid-range combatant capable of seamless integration into any tactical position and augmenting his comrades with his ingenious mechanical contractions. The newly formed contingent faces its inaugural trial against a colossal braver creature, igniting a tumultuous conflagration of fur and flame as they confront the monstrous entity. The beast emits a thunderous bellow as it charges, a veritable behemoth on 4 legs, clearly displeased by the intrusion into its territory. Alir steps forward, her hands radiating a pure white divine energy, acting as a protective bulwark for her companions, her formidable power serving as an impenetrable barrier against the beast's onslaught. The team executes a flawless maneuver. Bill and Draco engage from the flanks while the beast is engrossed by Alir's radiant luminescence, a textbook display of coordinated combat. A close-up reveals the Graver's eyes as it apprehends its tactical defeat, overwhelmed by the dazzling prowess of the assembled squad, a force too potent for its comprehension. A well-executed strike culminates in the beast's demise, collapsing into an inert heap, utterly vanquished. Bill and his assembled unit stand over the fallen creature, radiating the efficiency of a perfectly synchronized mechanism. Old Man Bill verifies the final Graver critter has been toasted, or mops up his sweaty brow, and Draco whines about his crappy dig on the subterranean hit squad, but at least they actually finish. Bill instructs the crew to haul the loot to the smithy after they tidy up the mess, because the actual painful labor is just getting started. Sylvia Orion demanded exactly one favor for this partnership. The master needs to craft unique gear for the Sparky Hitman, so he returns to his workbench to pay his dues. Barhan lays out the specs. Since his boys are meat shields on the front, they require suits that are tough as nails yet light as feathers, making this a true smithing nightmare. This explains why Bill picked out Graver's skin. He whipped out a drawing of the ugly monster, where that its leather hides a weird little secret. Check out this demo. Graver hide turns rock hard when you smack it, acting basically like some organic oobleck that hates being touched. Average blacksmiths only bother with a spine leather since it is lazy man's work. However, Bill realizes he must use the premium stuff to keep Barhan happy. He mentions the flank and armpit skin are nightmares since they stiffen up way too quick. If you screw up, you just build a heady coffin that moves like a brick. Botching the craft means the suit freezes solid, essentially sealing the poor soldier inside a stone cage, which is a great way to get murdered in a war. The smith shares some pro tips. Tiny magical arteries sprout from the middle of the pelt, and tracing those paths allows an expert to manipulate the stiffness. The old man applies hot vapor to toast the leather, delaying the shell formation so he can mold it properly, making for a sweaty, high-stakes sort of session. He traces the magic threads flowing from the backbone, carefully steering the power, which feels way more like medical operating than hitting hot metal. The expert thumps away with a consistent tempo, keeping his strikes perfectly aligned, until the skin finally relaxes into the beating and becomes uniform. Next up is the sewing part. He grafts the flank and spine pieces into one unit, building a hybrid suit that is way tougher than any single layer. The logic holds up. The edges are twitchy but fast, whereas the center is sluggish but firm, so mixing them creates a perfect shield. A map shows the power loop, pitting the sides grabs a blow. The rear stabilizes the force, and the energy bounces around until it settles, forming a cool self-wrecking defense. This completed invention gets called the Graver sentient skin, which appears totally edgy, obsidian, and itching for extreme violence. Bill brushes the grime off his forehead while staring at his work, realizing he has hundreds more to finish. Man, he is basically married to this furnace now. The experience is a quick, depressing flashback of Tom, imagining how much less painful this grind would feel if his former student was helping out. Bill grabs his noggin, tempting to discard the gloomy thoughts, as he simply lacks the luxury to mope about past regrets during a deadline. He squints with intense focus, returning his attention to the anvil, using his past misery as the high-octane gasoline for his inner creative furnace. He realizes a single chest plate won't save anyone from a freak like Sahir the weapon master, so he must push his craft into overdrive. He requires the entire outfit, so he tosses the sentient leather vest down next to a set of massive, plenty stompers. The kit features some wolf sinew jump boots and scorpion claw bracers, making this essentially an in-game legendary gear setup for a pro gamer. Combined, these items create the storm suit for the Sparky Squad, engineered to turn the wearer into a runaway freight train of pain. The visual shows a grunt in the full kit, the boots provide the zoom, the bracers tank the hits, and the smart leather recycles that force into a spicy counterattack. Looking at the warrior's back, he is poised to strike. This equipment transforms a basic dude into a terrifying hurricane on the battlefield, zooming in on the footwear as they explode with power. As the leather softens up, it sends the juice back to the shoes for another dash. It is a never-ending cycle of carnage. Tom is caught scanning a file about the weather-themed gear, peering awestruck and perhaps a bit salty about his mentor's talent, acknowledging that Bill has gone totally gub mode. That hero guy Oliver is cackling and applauding in his fancy house, saying, "Brilliant work as usual, Bill," as he finds it hilarious that the old man is still making bangers for the bad guys. Tahir is chilling in the posh lounge, bluntly questioning the Lord Protector. Why did you let that geezer work free instead of jailing him? Since he definitely does not find the situation amusing. Tahir reckons corralling Bill into Empire armament manufacturing would have been a breeze compared to his rebellious escapade. He's as pragmatic and heartless as they come, no doubt. Tahir eyes Oliver with a furrowed brow, clearly judging him as far too lenient with a non-Turco. Oliver offers a knowing smirk, positing that coercion only sullies a craftsman's output, and he'd rather wait for Bill to deliver his finest work. I'd rather permit his free will, Oliver chirps, just as Bill's seen chatting with influential Orient types, painting Oliver as the orchestrator of a truly twisted, drawn-up game. The camera pans out to a picturesque sunset view of the forge, a deceptive facade for the hidden darkness lurking within its metallic heart. Bill's peeking around suspiciously, venturing into a zone he really shouldn't be exploring. He stumbles upon the forge's clandestine subterranean vault, crammed with forgotten shelves and concealed schematics, the very wellspring of his illicit scientific endeavors. Bill surveys his surroundings with a heady heart, recognizing this vault as the embodiment of all he's forfeited and all he's striding to reclaim. We pivot back to Oliver's opulent office, where he reclines on a sumptuously upholstered crimson divan, exuding the aura of a supreme puppet master. Oliver spills the beans. The master plan unfolded flawlessly because Tom expertly herded them straight into the clandestine underground vault, the treachery hatched from the very outset. Tom is shown performing a deep, sweaty bow, pledging to personally oversee all equipment enhancements, having fully betrayed his boss for a prime spot within the Empire. Tom looks utterly pathetic, stammering, "But you will spare my boss, won't you?" while desperately trying to convince himself this betrayal is for Bill's own safety. Oliver's voice resonates with feigned sincerity. "Of course I treasure aptitude," he says, merely echoing what Tom needs to hear to remain a useful pawn. Oliver offers a grimace, his features obscured by shadow as he sips his drink, making a solemn vow never to extinguish Master Bill's flame of life. The close-up on Bill's face reveals hollowed eyes, the dawning horror of the complete betrayal finally drenching his consciousness. We're treated to a flashback of the actual apprehension. Soldiers forming ranks in the forge's courtyard as an officer reads the official proclamation naming the outlaw Bill Bark. By decree of the Lord Protector, the officer declares the forge officially confiscated and Bill under arrest, presenting Bill bound and vanquished in the gloom, marking the definitive end of his former existence. Concluding chapter 13 with the genesis of his downfall. We're wind to the very genesis. The Imperial officer bellows that by the Lord Protector's command, the workshop is seized and Bill is in custody. The precise instant all was pilfered from him. Bill, encircled by a bristling array of spears, shows no sign of fear, calmly stating it's useless as he prepares his initial clever maneuver. Abruptly, flames erupt from the forge, the officer's stern caution against any rash action silenced by a surge of heat and brilliant light. Bill becomes a whirlwind, surging through the inferno, using the billowing smoke as camouflage to launch an assault on the soldiers who dared to despoil him. The soldier is enveloped in a torrent of fire, shrieking in absolute torment, as Bill delivers a personal judgment upon those who shattered his life. Bill charges through the devastating chaos, his expression a mask of pure savage delight, roaring in triumph as he finally unleashes his pent-up fury upon the world. This is the reborn Bill Bark. Bill is completely unhinged, his face contorted with a blend of terror and fierce resolve, screaming that he requires an implement for his own protection. He plunges into the horde of implements within the hidden vault, moving with an almost frenzied intensity, not seeking any common blade, but something capable of channeling the immense power he's about to unleash. Bill begins flinging weaponry aside as if it were mere refuse, his gaze scanning the wrecks with frantic urgency, muttering disappointments like, "No, not this one, nor this one either." His frustration escalating, a close shot focuses on Bill's intense stare as he dismisses another sword, knowing precisely what he seeks, and anything less than perfect will seal his doom within minutes. Success. Bill finally extracts a resplendent, azure-hued marvel from the cache, whispering in satisfaction, "This is it," its luminescence mirroring a promise of vengeful retribution in his eyes. Outside, the soldiers are already sounding the alarm, their cries announcing the target has acquired an armament, while Bill stands resolute with his new accoutrements, poised to transform his arrest into a final resting place. The blade gleams menacingly in the light as Bill braces himself, an exquisitely fashioned instrument of devastation, which, wielded by a master, signifies an almost certain demise for anyone within proximity. Bill's entire demeanor had frozen solid, every flicker of panic replaced by a bone-chilling determination. The erstwhile background extra had officially exited stage left, succeeded by a formidable presence that would make the Empire's knees knock together like castanets. Abruptly shifting focus to a considerably more tranquil picture, someone was artfully carving into a plump, ripe watermelon. It was an astonishingly domestic juxtaposition to the perilous skirmish we just witnessed. But then again, Orient often served up the unexpected with a side of absurdity. Barhan and Bill found a quiet bench, taking a well-deserved timeout. Barhan casually presented him with a slice, simply stating, "There, eat this." as if they hadn't just survived a localized apocalypse with a monster. Barhan conceded his admiration, remarking that he genuinely doubted Bill possessed the knack to actually subdue a creature as fierce as Qasim. He was, surprisingly, handing out rare compliments to the newcomer, despite his facial expression remaining as stoic as a garden gnome. Bill cast his gaze downward, his sudden loss of appetite as plain as day. He admitted that his capture wasn't exactly the stuff of heroic ballads, confessing he couldn't even bring himself to deliver the decisive blow when the opportunity arose. Barhan leaned in, his stare cutting through Bill like a laser pointer. He posed the pivotal query: do you harbor any regrets about sparing him? Truly testing Bill's conviction to ascertain if he was genuinely prepared for the challenging journey ahead. Bill took a bite of the watermelon, though one could visibly tell it tasted like a mouthful of forgotten hopes. Well, yeah, he mumbled, the crushing burden of his own indecision clearly gnawing at his very soul. Barhan assured him that such hesitation was entirely a natural human response, elaborating that there was even less cause for lingering regret, attempting to soothe the young man's troubled mind before the genuine combat truly began. The atmosphere grew heavy as Barhan observed that everyone else in Orient dispatched foes without a second thought. They'd been entrenched in conflict for so long that taking a life had become as mundane as remembering to blink. He fixed his gaze on Bill and delivered a stark, unvarnished truth: they were born into an era where fighting wasn't an option. It was a fundamental prerequisite for survival. It painted a bleak picture, but in this brutal world, it was the only one that made sense. Barhan elaborated that they all eventually acclimatized to the grim business of killing, but quickly added, that doesn't make it right, illustrating that even the toughest freedom fighters still carried a fragment of their humanity, albeit as a heavy burden. A close-up revealed Barhan's face, etched with scars. He'd witnessed more spilled crimson than 100 butchers on a busy Saturday, and every line on his weathered skin narrated a tale of a skirmish he probably shouldn't have walked away from. Bill inquired if Barhan had ever wrestled with a moral toll himself. Barhan confessed his own human nature, admitting there were certainly times when the sheer magnitude of the slaughter deeply unsettled him, a surprising moment of vulnerability from a seasoned commander. He recounted the physical strain, recalling how his hands would tremor uncontrollably in the initial stages. A fleeting memory flashed, showing him clutching a blood-spattered shield, looking utterly bewildered and shaken. The recollection intensified as Barhan struggled to even draw a breath, gasping for air amidst the chaos of a war zone, the overwhelming surge of adrenaline and profound terror threatening to engulf him entirely. The impactful internal narration declared, but the circumstances invariably propelled me to the very precipice. He didn't morph into a slayer out of desire, but rather because destiny had simply left him no other viable choice. We then witnessed Barhan encircled by a vast phalanx of enemy soldiers. He appeared diminutive against the overwhelming horde, yet the fierce resolve on his countenance suggested he was about to make them deeply regret ever cornering him. In the end, I had no recourse. Barhan cleaved through an adversary in a gruesome splash of crimson. It was a precise instant he crossed the moral threshold, never once glancing over his shoulder. Killing, the on-screen text grimly announced as Barhan forcefully plunged his weapon into yet another soldier. The action was brutal, lightning fast, and utterly devoid of any semblance of mercy. And killing, the narration continued its relentless cadence. Barhan resembled a shadowy fiend in the darkness, his eyes wide and wild as he savagely hacked his way through the Imperial legions. And killing, once more, like a broken record. The close-up captured Barhan screaming in a paroxysm of pure, unbridled fury. He had completely surrendered himself to the violent frenzy, ironically transforming into the very monstrosity he was committed to fighting against. He stood solitary amidst a veritable landscape of fallen bodies, soaked from head to toe in the crimson spray. It was a ghastly spectacle, starkly revealing the exorbitant cost of becoming a fabled warrior in this particular age. Now, not even my fingertips betray a tremor. The transformation was utterly complete, like a software update. He was no longer a trembling recruit, but a perfectly calibrated weapon, albeit one with a human visage. Barhan pondered whether this profound absence of fear was genuine courage, or if he had merely shed something fundamentally intrinsic to being a living, breathing person. He was, quite literally, interrogating his own soul directly in front of Bill. He questioned whether he should truly label this newfound state as bravery, as we observed him striding over a literal mound of mangled corpses. It served as a grim testament that in the brutal theater of war, the proclaimed hero was often simply the one who had eliminated the most opponents. Returning to the present, Bill and Barhan remained seated on that same weathered bench. Barhan intently scrutinized his own hands, admitting that whenever he truly looked at himself, all he perceived was a blood-soaked, terrifying monster. A monster is precisely what I've become. Barhan offered a fleeting, melancholic smile. He was effectively issuing a stern warning to Bill that if he embarked upon this perilous path, there would be no conceivable return to the tranquil existence he once cherished. Bill's gaze fell upon his own crimson-stained blade, the warning words, "I've been cursed to become a monster," reverberating within his thoughts. He was finally grasping that the exorbitant price of his vengeful quest was nothing less than his own precious humanity. Bill peered, puffing and puffing after a particularly brutal confrontation, thoroughly drenched in the lifeblood of his vanquished foes. He was already ankle-deep in the very metamorphosis Barhan had so gravely cautioned him about. He stared at his own hands in utter disbelief, the adrenaline rush finally dissipating to unveil the sheer horror of his recent actions. The awkward rookie face, that was abundantly clear, had now officially reached its definitive conclusion. The genuinely nightmarish screaming face fills the page. This delightful apparition is Bill's internal screensaver, a gallery of all the poor souls he's had to send to the great beyond just to make it through the day. The soldiers left standing are utterly shell-shocked, screaming that he's truly taken out their friends. They figured he was just a bit of a laugh, but suddenly, they realized they were looking at a professional braid executioner. The captain shouts to grab him immediately, but the soldiers are clearly nervous. They aren't trying to catch a blacksmith anymore. They are trying to stop a blender full of blades. Bill refuses to wait for the first move. He attacks with surprising speed, especially considering all that heavy armor, turning his sword into a quick flash of silver and gore. Bill slices right through a soldier's defenses as if they were made of tissue paper. He possesses a terrifying efficiency that you only see when someone has completely given up on life's little pleasures. He cuts through a second guard shield, the metal shudders and then completely shatters from his power. Bill has officially earned the title of one-man demolition team. He sticks his sword straight into another enemy's chest, creating a magnificent spray of blood. It's a very cold, analytical, and completely deadly move. Bill's eyes are wide and feral as he keeps up the slaughter. The text in the panel simply says slash again, reflecting the repetitive, brutal rhythm of his current mood. He's fighting a whole squad by himself, batting away spears and delivering counterattacks in a chaotic ballet of violence. He is outnumbered completely, yet he seems to be the only one making anyone bleed. A massive crowd of soldiers rushes him, roaring like they're trying to start a band. They are really. Bill slices his way through the very front of the charging army. He's essentially building a disgusting barricade of gore and corpses to hold back the rest of the charging crowd. The soldier lets out a high-pitched scream as Bill's sword connects exactly where intended. This brutal close-up really drives home just how much of a horrible creature Bill is quickly turning into. He's become a literal tornado of destruction, slashing repeatedly. He stopped looking at their faces and simply sees them as inconvenient speed bumps on his path to success. A completely freaked out worker yells into a loudspeaker, desperately calling for assistance. He is currently watching his entire squad get wiped out, completely losing his marbles in the process. A pair of boots strolls casually through the base. It seems someone is totally unaffected by the sounds of agony coming from the nearby forge. Its roar. He looks incredibly bored, dismissing the panicked soldiers as morons. He's definitely seen this spectacle before and isn't at all impressed by the newbie's little tantrum, or mumbles that even though the captain told them to stand down, this is the ideal chance to get brownie points with management. He's focused entirely on his professional goals as people are being slaughtered. He makes a clicking noise with his tongue in a very dismissive way. He represents the ultimate jaded veteran, observing the current disaster with a cold, critical gaze, or daydreams about assisting Bill and getting a legendary Manhwa wand as a bonus. He has some truly avaricious fantasies for a person who should be worried about the ongoing battle at hand, or strolls down a bustling street in the distance. When the help-needed alarm sounds once more, he begins to realize this situation might be a little more serious than a simple disagreement. A huge group of soldiers runs right past him, or starts to think, what's going on here, why so many guys, and his relaxed demeanor finally starts to dissolve. He pauses and shows genuine concern for the first time, wondering if something terrible has occurred. He feels a change in the atmosphere, and it sends shivers down his spine. The close-up on Roar's eye behind his glasses shows he finally grasps the magnitude of the Imperial reaction. He understands Bill might have bitten off far more than he can chew. He gazes toward the mountain peak where smoke and fire are pouring from the forge area. The situation has quickly escalated from a simple practice session to complete warfare in just a few short minutes. Over there, Or whispers to himself, his brain finally processing the seriousness of everything, having realized this isn't a laughing matter anymore. It's toward the forge. Or begins to freak out, finally figuring out that his acquaintance is currently the main focus of her full Imperial hit squad's attention. A genuine army of soldiers is heading straight for Bill's position. This isn't just an arrest anymore. It's a mission to wipe him out completely. Bill looks completely animalistic, his face covered in blood, his gaze possessing a terrifying empty focus. He has totally welcomed the inner beast. He slices through another set of soldiers with a large, glowing arc of energy. The level of power he is using now appears far more like sorcery than blacksmithing techniques. Blood flies onto the panel as his sword hits home. He has stopped hesitating and is simply giving out the ultimate punishment he was told to expect. Groups of armored nobodies sprint ahead using lowered poke tools, shrieking while seeking to restrain that behemoth. Despite being petrified, those guys follow instructions. William chops those fellows apart while never pausing his work, advancing as an agile smudge of metal which nobody is able to halt. The protagonist gasps for air, some gloomy, probing energy field circling his body. He hit a total bodily wall, yet pure fury prevents a collapse. Our storyteller mentions how intense strain clenches around the guy. He currently undergoes a complete internal plus external meltdown, which weirdly grants power boosts. That man remains among the corpses, appearing chilly plus productive. Suddenly each tiny fiber within my frame toughens into sensory plating. The basically activated cheats. He grabs for a radiant pebble upon his artificial limb, fingers remaining calm plus certain, preparing to trigger the concluding phase of his hardware. Our fighter jams a heavy magic stone into his hilt with a crisp snap. The climax arrives. The peak performance shiny limb project finally reaches full voltage. That edge commences buzzing with some heavy, shaky power source, radiating a cobalt shine so vivid it deletes vision, thinning it doom for surrounding bystanders. William triggers a cyclone of chops, red fluid splashing everywhere while transforming into a sentient kitchen mixer, sprinting so quickly those guards miss the steel. This dude deletes entire battalions currently. That whistling metal melody represents the sultry noise surpassing casualty shrieks, creating a massive biological barrage sale. The boy's mug is partially obscured while he releases a savage, animalistic howl, basically discarding his human membership card just to avoid dying today. That comic frame overflows with a giant, crimson-shaded yell, demorphed into that frightening creature the old veteran previously mentioned, a genuine battle-driven freak. Switching back toward that furniture-based discussion, the old-timer informs our youth that from his perspective, everything remains quite average, tempting a soothing gesture despite possessing darker knowledge. Gazing straight at our hero, he remarks that regardless if you possess talent, choices aren't constantly your own. Occasionally the universe selects a path instead. Everyone merely discovers such facts when circumstances shove people toward the breaking point. That geezer is providing some legendary spooky spoilers right now. The mentor stares toward the apprentice, facial features showing nothing, concluding his narrative while pausing to observe if the novice possesses fortitude for future chaos. So William, were you capable? The veteran keeps that inquiry floating nearby, a concluding exam regarding the lad who merely wished to forge gear. We observe our protagonist within a pitch black, azure glowing vacuum, grasping his giant, radiant robot claymore, peering truly horrifying as a shadowy outline of retribution. Mutate into a ghoulish entity also. That single remaining eyeball glitters with deadly vermilion. The background actor kicked the bucket. A brood is conceived. Hit the thumbs up, follow, and leave some feedback. Swell you later.